So hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is the first part of the story, what if Naruto was born at the time of Sanins as an Uchiha. If you guys enjoy this what if and want more, comment down below to let me know. The comments on videos really help me out a lot. They motivate me to upload more frequently, so please do comment down below. Before I start, please do support for more awesome contents and leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And share this video with your friends and also check out the descriptions and check out the playlists. With that out of the way, let's start. The Uchiha clan, one of the two most formidable clans in Konohagakure no Sado. It wasn't a secret to anyone that they were one of the two founder clans of the Hidden Leaf Village. Neither was it a secret to anyone that it was one of its founding fathers, belonging to that very clan, that betrayed and attempted to annihilate the very place he nurtured with his own hands. Madara Uchiha. The name alone was enough to instill fear among the hearts of any and every shinobi worth their salt. Anyone who had ever picked up a history book regarding shinobis knew that name. That name was the very definition of power and legacy he had left behind. The power to cave landscapes and mark a whole new valley, just to leave a mark when the man really went all out in his battle prowess. The Valley of the End was still a reminder to all those who had ever mistaken to forget the name of the menacing legend, the devil that once roamed across the land of fire like the Reaper himself. Annihilating the very existence of any person he found unworthy of breathing from the very face of the earth. But not many knew that the man had married in secret. Yes, Madara Uchiha, the tyrant crimson-eyed demon, the very virtue of death himself. Many names had been given to the legendary shinobi, but none had ever imagined him to be a man who would ever even think to have a family. But he had. The man who was rumored to be completely unstoppable against anyone other than the legendary Shodai Hokage Hashirama Senju. The same man wielding the Mokuton, the only one who ever went toe-to-toe with Madara and lived the next day to tell his tale. The man who tamed the Lord of the Bijuas, the Kyuubi in the palm of his hands with a mere glance of his menacing eyes. That man had a family. He married a simple woman and he had a son. A child, born when the man had married a woman of his own clan, one who had managed to creep into the small cracks that were in that stone-faced man's heart. Together they got married and gave birth to a child. A child who was trained by his father to meet the expectations of his eyes. No one knew of their existence even within the village, since Madara's fame brought with itself the hatred of his enemies too. The child who he had named after the very brother who had succumbed to his wounds in his very arms and had left Madara with the power to take on the world by himself. Izuna. The boy had lived peacefully amongst his clansmen and villagers for quite some time. But it was only a tiger sleeping among its prey. Waiting for the time to break free his fangs and claws and wipe the very existence of the people who he believed were the reason for his family's destiny. His mother, who he loved with all his heart, had gone to the point of death just because the grief of losing her husband had been too much for her to handle. That had been the night when he had let the darkness that hid in the skies to overtake his very being and gift him the power to wipe out anyone in his path. That night he had awakened the eyes that were only wielded once in history by his father. That night he wielded the mangyeko sharingan. With the new power coursing through his veins, he had started his rampage. The rampage that had destroyed the better part of a third of the village's infrastructure and countless lives were lost in his wake of total insanity. Only one man stood a chance against him. It was as if history was repeating itself. As if their predecessors had taken birth yet again through a reincarnation. Tobirama Senju, the Niddame Hokage of Konohagakure no Sado, had taken charge that night. He was the one who stood in front of the insane man and stopped his slaughter midway before it could continue on any further. Surely he was nowhere near the levels of power his elder brother, Hashirama Senju, once wielded. But after years of experience as a shinobi and as a Hokage to the village, there were few who dared to challenge him to a fight. However, Izuna Uchiha wasn't any man. The fight had lasted the better part of the night before his newly awakened eyes had no more to give into the fight against a fire shadow who stood tall above the defeated man that lay on his feet. There were few that Tobirama had respected in his life with all his heart. His elder brother and surprisingly Madara Uchiha was one of them. He didn't respect him for his actions in life. No, they were disgraceful in his eyes. He respected the man for his strength and character. The man held himself like a man of his stature should. And for that he had Tobirama's respect. But above all, what Tobirama respected the most was Madara's loving heart. Yes, that was what Tobirama knew to be true, no matter how ridiculous it sounded to anyone else. He had done his fair share of studying into the power that hid itself behind those crimson eyes. The power that the world once cowered before. And finally his search had led him to the truth. He had gained the answers he was looking for after years of study into the secrets lurking behind those eyes. The answer was quite simple in the end. Hate. That was the answer that had shown itself to him for the fruits of his labor. The greater the hatred in the bearer's heart, the greater the visual prowess shall be. But Tobirama knew it to be a contradiction in itself. For, if hatred was the key to unlocking the power behind those eyes, the trauma had to have come from a trigger that led its wielder to that hatred itself. And once again the legendary Senju had devised the answer. This time too the answer was very simple, always in front of everyone, but no one bothered to question it. Love. Now one might say how are love and hate related? They are the polar opposites in reality, just like light and dark, yin and yang. But that was where the key to his answer lay. For light to exist, darkness had its existence too. Yin and yang always were in perfect harmony, for without one the other cannot exist. The greater the love an Uchiha hid within his pure heart, the greater the hatred would be when it was crushed by the world. As Tobirama had stood tall, his shadow looming over his defeated opponent, the Uchiha had asked for one last wish. Tobirama Senju was many things in life. Stoic, calculative, logical, deceptive, a genius. But dishonorable wasn't one of them. Just like every Senju and every Uchiha, he kept one thing over all the others. Honor. And there wasn't anything more dishonorable than to deny the last words of a man breathing his last breath in the world. So he had crouched down as the dying man had whispered his last wish in his ear. Never before had Tobirama been so close to having his heart go under a cardiac arrest as that very moment. His wide eyes, astonished in disbelief, stared at the dying Uchiha who merely smiled sadly with a warmth in his eyes that was never present even once during his battle. Tobirama watched his eyes turn dull as the life within them disappeared when his chest stopped heaving breaths and he passed on peacefully. Tobirama never believed in superstitions, but at that very moment the concept wasn't too foreign to him. For it had happened yet again right in front of his very eyes. History had repeated itself and he had borne witness to it himself. He crouched down and laid his palm over the man's lifeless onyx eyes. His hand slid down gently and closed the eyelids of the fallen man in respect and regret. For that day, he had made another child an orphan and taken away the shadow of his father from his life. But he had given his word to the dying man to take care of his legacy in his stead. And he would be damned if he let that promise go to waste. Don't worry Azuna, your legacy rests safe with me I promise you. Present time. Hanahagakure no Sato. It was a bright day for the village that claimed to hide itself within its leaves. The sky was filled with spaced clouds, allowing ample free space for the bright shiny sun rays to peer their way through them. The village itself was in as bright a mood as was its weather on that fine day. For, it was a happy week for its inhabitants right now. The Konoha Shinobi Academy had started its enrollment process, just like it did every year ever since its foundation nearly a couple of decades ago. Every citizen of the village, be it shinobi or civilian, was allowed for an admission procedure by the laws laid down by the Shodai Hokage himself. Next the voice of a chunin sitting on a chair behind a desk spoke into the crowd. Another family with their own little child stepped forward to the table, handing her the slip containing their number in line. Here you go, fill this form and get it submitted to the admissions office by 4 in the evening. Her happy voice instructed the family. She graced the little one sitting on his father's shoulders with a warm smile. He was too excited to notice, his eyes still stuck on the form while she waved his mother when they started walking away. This a soft and small voice spoke up, her thoughts broken instantly by it in a mere second. Her heart warmed at hearing the soft voice, no doubt coming from a prospective academy student. Her eyes landed on the small mop of blonde hair and blue eyes peering over the edge of her table and gazing at her with all the mustard innocence of the world. His hands being the only thing beside his upper half of his head being visible to her that were kept on the edge. He stood on tiptoes and was looking at the woman with a bitten lip hidden under the table. Her smile instantly vanished the moment her eyes laid on him and realization dawned on her for the identification of said voice. Her eyes became icy and narrowed in an accusing glare on the blue-eyed child on the front edge of her table. I want to enroll in the academy too, his innocent and soft voice slipped past his lips. Her eyes narrowed in on the blonde mop of hair even more, making him a little nervous from her cold stare. Is that right? She asked a little coldly, the head of said boy bobbing up and down innocently. Hi. He squeaked softly making her frown. She looked down on her small pile of forms before looking around to see that all parents had already taken theirs, meaning he was the only one left now. She gave him a half-hearted smile. The boy's nervousness vanished instantly and was replaced by an excited smile. I'm sorry boy, but all forms have been given out. You were a bit late she lied smoothly, making his smile vanish instantly off his face. Oh he whispered, obviously saddened by her remark. She peered up from her work and frowned, she felt a little guilty for doing so, but it was for the greater good in the end. That was what she told herself and continued on her work to take her mind off of it. Where can I get one then miss? His innocent voice spoke up yet again making her let out a sigh and slam her pen down in annoyance. He was startled a bit at her sudden loud action and stumbled on his toes, causing him to stumble back a bit. You can't. All forms for this year's admissions have been given out, you came too late. Now go and try again next year. She answered curtly and picked her pen up. She went about her papers, not seeing the small watering eyes or the quivering lip of said boy. Thank you for your time, miss, she heard his soft whisper trailing with a small sniffle at the end. She stopped her work momentarily to see him walking out slowly, no doubt in sadness if his little hunched shoulders were any indication. She bit her lip when she saw him open the metal gates to the academy and turn around. She wanted to stop him, but he had already gone away by then. A sigh slipped past her lips and her hand massaged her temples tiredly. Why am I feeling sympathy for him? He is nothing but trouble anyways, just like them, she thought bitterly, and went back to her work. The blonde's golden locks shone as bright as the sun itself while he walked down the street slowly. He wiped his eyes and saw the main entrance for the academy children in front of him, which would open a couple of days from now for all the new admissions. But not for me, he sniffled to himself and walked to the wooden swing in front of said gate slowly. The swing made soft creaking noises every now and then while his legs waved in the air with each movement he took on the ride. It made him feel a little better, the shade of the tree, the nests of the birds over it chirping loudly. He loved nature, it always made him feel warm and nice. Especially the garden in his house. See, this is where I'll come day after tomorrow to become an awesome shinobi. His little reprieve was instantly worsened even more so than before when he heard those words. His longing blue eyes stared at the family with a look akin to that of someone who could just wish for what just could not be his. Family? He bit his lip, watching on with that same longing gaze at the boy hunched over his father's shoulders while they all laughed at his expense. Yes, you're right, but first we have to submit your form to the Hokage tomorrow, sweetie, or you won't be enrolled, he heard and kept it in the back of his mind for future reference. Look, the lady at that office gave me an extra form by mistake, what should I do with it? His voice rang when he walked past the tree where our adorable little blonde sat. The said blonde's ears perked up and a small spark of hope now lingered on in his eyes. Throw it away, sweetie, it's of no use to you anyways, his mother told him with a soft giggle. The boy did as his mother had told him and threw it over his head without a second thought. The slip of paper flew behind the three in the air and the blonde boy's swing stopped abruptly. His blue eyes narrowed in on the slowly flying piece of paper. Konoha Shinobi Admissions Program. His eyes widened as soon as he read the words on top of the paper and he was off the swing in an instant. His little feet stumbled a little, but he caught his balance and chased the flying paper for dear life. He leaned down between his stumbling and nervous steps, swinging his arms around for failed attempts at catching the paper he needed so much right now. Finally, his fingers stuck on the flying form, his feet slowing down gradually before he was standing in the middle of the empty street all alone, looking at the piece of paper in his little hands with wide eyes. Konoha Shinobi Admissions Program. He read the first line again to reassure himself that he really had won. He bit his lips and clutched the form to his chest as if it was made of gold. His eyes clenched in desperation to believe it really was true. I've got it, I finally have won. Now I can enroll too. He thought to himself and ran back towards his house with a small hop in his little steps. Everyone eyes him coldly, with a look that clearly said, "Are you stupid?" Seeing him clutch a piece of paper to his chest so protectively as if it was his whole life. But the child could care less, he was far too happy right now to pay attention to these little things at the moment. He had a form to fill and submit to the Hokage tomorrow. Next morning. The streets of Konoha bustled with happy villagers going about their lives. A small boy, with his shiniest golden locks, walked around them, snaking past legs to make sure Chi didn't bump into anyone. The admission form, now all filled out, was still clutched to his chest like a lifeline. For, he had to make sure he didn't accidentally lose it. No, that won't do at all. He had never been to this part of the village. It was the main shopping district, acting as the nerve center for the entire village. He had never needed to. He always stayed in his clan compounds. They had everything he ever needed anyways. They were really nice and cozy, they made him feel safe. Safer than he felt now from all the cold glares and snide remarks being sent his way from all those he caught eyes from. He still got those occasional stares or remarks in his clan too, but they were a lot lesser in his own clan grounds. They were used to his presence there on a day-to-day basis. The rest of the village wasn't. Plus, he wasn't oblivious as to the reason for said treatment towards him exclusively. His mother had told him everything before she had passed away a few months back. His father and grandfather had done bad things to the village and hurt a lot of people in the village before the past two Hokages had put a stop to their actions. That thought made him smile, thinking about his dream. His eyes raised their level upwards to see the mountain shadowing the back of the village with two sacredly carved faces watching over them all at all times. That was his dream. He would have his face up there too one day. He would become Hokage. Hokage Tower. His soft footsteps made their way in front of the large tower that stood tall smack bang in the middle of the village. His baby blue eyes widened in awe, looking at the tower and nothing but pure admiration in his eyes. He had never seen such a large tower, and now he was a little sad that he hadn't come here before now. It was so pretty and huge. He broke off his thoughts when a jounin gave him a slight nudge and went about without so much as an apology. His eyes gazed on the back of the man before turning back to the tower with a small smile, the form now clutched ever so tightly by his chest. He walked through the large hallways of the tower, stopping every now and then to see and read the small things written underneath some portraits of important figures stacked on the walls. He admired the teak wood walls of the tower and shining wooden floor that made him feel almost self-conscious about stepping on. He walked on like a lost man in an unknown world. Several genins, chunins, jounins and even some doctors and normal civilians had walked past him now. No wonder this tower was in the middle of the village. It not only had the Hokage but everyone came here, so it made complete sense to his innocent mind. He tried to stop some people to ask them for directions to where he was supposed to go in such a large building, but no one was stopping for him. Either everyone was too busy or no one wanted to help him. He thought it was the first one a little uncertainly. Finally, after going on confused through the first 2 floors, he reached a point where he saw a middle-aged lady sitting on a table, right besides a door that had only one kanji over it. Hokage. He had no doubt that this was the place he was supposed to go to. He walked up to the desk, first looking around to see if he had to get a number in a line like yesterday. He stood there innocently for a few minutes when he finally saw a man just walk to her before she did something in her book and let him go in. He smiled, finally seeing there was no line or need for any waiting, and walked up the desk. Just like yesterday, he stood up on his toes, his face peering over the edge up to his nose. His soft voice spoke up, startling her in surprise. She looked up and blinked to see 2 cute eyes blinking back at her. She was about to smile when realization dawned on her as to who he was, and her face was masked in a neutral expression. "What can I do for you?" she asked curtly, without so much as a hint of emotion in her voice. The blonde though smiled, seeing she wasn't sending him away or talking to him rudely like some people had done before, and put his form on the table with one hand and clutched the edge of the table with both of them for a little added support. "Can I meet the Hokage, please?" he asked politely in his soft voice, making her crease her eyebrows together in a knit. She had half a mind to tell him off rudely, but she was still on duty, and as her duty stated, she had to treat everyone who came to her equally. Even him. "Not right now. No," she answered in her curt voice and turned her eyes down to the register. The blonde bit his lips softly and nodded nervously. "Alright miss, how long do I have to wait?" he asked, making her look up, this time with a hint of annoyance laced in her eyes. "I told you not right now, didn't I? The Hokage is a very busy man and only entertains people who have made a prior appointment with him." She answered his query as professionally as possible and returned to her work. Her nodded hesitantly yet again, inwardly glad she was answering his question so nicely. "What's this appointment, miss? How can I get one?" he asked innocently, making her let out a tired sigh. He would leave her alone to her piling work until she had cleared off all his doubts. She looked at those innocent, wide, curious eyes that were looking to absorb each word she said. Nope, not at all was he leaving her alone simply by himself. Now her full attention was on him to get him away as quickly as possible. An appointment is a fixed time you have to get before you can meet him. He has many people who want to see him and he can't meet with everyone, right? So you get an appointment beforehand to get a meeting with him. Do you understand now?" she asked tiredly and got a happy nod from the bubbly boy. She sighed in relief that he was at least smart and she wouldn't have to waste any more time playing this rapid-fire round with him. "Can I get an appointment too?" he asked happily. A sigh slipped past her lips and she nodded tiredly. No matter how much she wanted to refuse him, he had all the right to meet the man and get an appointment. Her finger trailed down the register to get a free slot and stopped at the first one. Her eyes turned up to the blonde staring at her intently and she nodded to him, making him beam happily. "There's a slot free for you. Come back and meet him in 2 weeks. Come back after lunch, I'll fix you an appointment then," she said simply and looked down the register to book it. The azure eyes widened in shock at her words. "But the academy starts in 2 days and tomorrow is the last day to be admitted. Can't it be before then?" he asked hurriedly. His voice carrying the worry that was now etched in his heart when he saw her shake her head in negative straight away. "No, all the slots until then are filled. You can't meet him before then," she said curtly and wanted to resume her work when his voice cut through her thoughts again. "Please miss, I won't take long. Just 5 minutes, I just have to get him to stamp the C," he said, pulling up his arm to show his form with the blank place for his stamp. Her frown deepened into a scowl as her patience were now getting thin by the second. She shook her head with a clenched jaw and his eyes now turned pleadingly wide. "I'll be really quick please," he said softly, but was cut off as the irate receptionist slammed her hands on her desk softly, startling him out of his wits. "Don't you understand, boy? He doesn't have time to meet and entertain children like you all day. Now go and come back for your appointment." If you wanted to enter so bad, why didn't you come earlier? She said in a neutral voice, barely hanging on to her patience, and his features visibly saddened at that. I didn't know until yesterday and got my form from a boy who had an extra with him. The academy lady had given out all forms already. Please, just a few minutes, he said softly, and the secretary had finally had enough now. Stop your whining, kid. She said rudely, making his eyes widen in surprise. If you wanted to enter so much, then you should have come earlier and get it done like everyone else did. Didn't your parents teach anything about the academy before now? Now go and whine to them and stop disturbing me, I have work to attend to. She said in a tone of finality and returned back to her work, happy that she didn't get any more whining from that annoying boy. The sound of a soft sniffle reached her ears when she heard his hand slip down from her table, and she looked up to see him retreat a couple of steps back. He was holding his form in both his hands now, and his silky golden hair now shadowed his eyes. His pained eyes looked at the form while barely holding back a sob. I don't have any parents, miss, he said in such a small voice that she would have missed it had the hallway not been so silent. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw a small drop slipping down his cheeks and down on the paper clutched in his tiny hands. Her heart clenched at the sight when he spoke up with a polite boy, shocking her to the core at his form of respect, even after the way she had treated him. I'm sorry, miss, it's my fault. I shouldn't have forced you like that and disturbed you from your work. Thank you for answering all my questions so nicely and giving me your time. I'll take my leave now, he said softly with a slight sniffle, rising up from his boat to wipe his nose sloppily with his sleeve. Her astonished eyes watched him walk past her table silently and throw the form in the dustbin kept to the side. Guilt crept up her heart and she bit her lip. No matter who he was still a little child and didn't know what to do without his parents to tell him. She broke her thoughts to call out to him, only to see him already gone and the now empty hallway making her guilt increase twofolds. Her train of thoughts went on, unaware of a pair of narrowed stoic amber eyes watching the empty hallway quite intently from the sidelines. Tobirama Senju stood by his door, his arms crossed while he leaned with his back to the wall. He had come out to see what this conversation was about and to get his next set of paperwork that hadn't been brought in, only to catch an earful of the last part of the conversation. Needless to say, with what he heard he wasn't pleased in the slightest. This was his village, and no child should be treated the way that boy had been treated just now. For some matter, the boy seemed a little familiar to him, but he couldn't quite place his finger on it for the life of him. And that annoyed him to no end. He wasn't a man to be left with unanswered questions. Everyone knew that about him. He walked up to the receptionist's desk, who looked back to see who it was tiredly. Her eyes widened in shock at seeing Tobirama himself standing there, albeit not looking at her, instead his eyes now dead set on the dustbin kept to the side. She stood up, scrambling the messed up piles of paper hurriedly, knowing how eyeing the man could be for such trivial matters. Hokage-sama, what can I do for you? She asked with a slight stutter of nervousness and cursed herself for it inwardly. He paid her no heed and walked to the dustbin that had caught his eyes now and picked out the small slip of paper laid on the top. His eyes narrowed in on the sloppily filled form. Especially the small wet spots now marring its surface, no doubt made by the tears of that innocent child. He focused his thoughts on the form itself and read it thoroughly as he was used to, like always. Konoha Shinobi Admissions Program. Admittee's name: my name is Naruto Uchiha. Mother's maiden name: my Kachan's name is Miyanamika's. Father's name: my Tusan's name is Izuna Uchiha. Legal guardian: father's name: I don't know about that, but I'll tell you after I ask Kagami Oji-san. Clan status: if any, I am from the Uchiha clan. Age: I am 5, but I'll be 6 in 2 weeks. Reasons for joining the academy: to be filled in by the admittee. Shinobi are cool, my Tusan was a great one from what my Kachan told me. And I want to be one like him. Oh, and I want to be the Hokage. Pledge to loyalty for the village, to be filled in by the admittee. I love my village, but I don't know what this pledge is. I'll get it after I find it. So please give me a little time to find it, alright? Tobirama, the man known for masking his emotions to the utmost across the elemental nations, couldn't help the small smirk that was now etched on his face, while his eyes read past the words in pure curiosity. The cute way he had filled out the form with and how he had forgotten to add his own picture to it made it quite clear to him that the child didn't have the slightest bit of idea how to fill a form and had tried his best regardless of that, to the best of his knowledge. The small tear stains had smudged up his already sloppy handwriting a bit, but he could make out all of it quite clearly. He was surprised for a moment to read his father's name, but now it made sense to him why his secretary had been so adamant about sticking to the rules, particularly with him. His eyes left the form and looked up to the nervous secretary. His gaze narrowed in on the woman, who shivered a little, gulping softly in nervousness from the man's intense stare. Why didn't you let the child meet me? He asked stoically, though the dangerous glint behind it wasn't lost to the woman. Why you see Hokage-sama, there was no time slot left in your timing, register and, her voice was cut off by the piercing voice of the man whose eyes had narrowed even further at her slight stuttering voice. I have a little free time in between my appointments. Surely a few minutes between any one of them could have been discerned for the child, since the matter was so trivial as to just needing my stamp of approval. So why? He asked again in a steel-like voice, making her gulp down her nervousness and try to speak, but he cut her off again. You hate him. He stated simply, leaving no room for arguments. Her eyes widened in shock when he slapped the truth in her face, and she shook her head vigorously. He paid her lies no heed and continued on completely undeterred. He is his father's son, yes. He has his grandfather's blood coursing through his veins, yes. He is related to 2 traitorous shinobi of the village, yes. He said stoically and watched her look at him speak as if he was an alien of sorts, no doubt shocked by his words, but he didn't stop. But he is a part of this village. He has done nothing wrong. He doesn't even have anyone to teach him how to fill a form properly. He spoke pointedly, slapping the form on the desk for emphasis over his point. The woman flinched at the slapping sound but peered her gaze over the cutely filled form, feeling even more guilty and ashamed than ever before. How would you feel if you were an orphan and someone slapped that point straight into your face, her words full of disgust and loathing? He asked coldly. She couldn't meet his accusing eyes with her own and turned them down to her feet in shame. She shrunk visibly under his stare that he held for a moment before picking the form up and walking away. But just before he walked down the stairs he stopped for his final parting words. Go home and don't return tomorrow. He said blankly, and the secretary snapped her neck up to stare at his back with horror-stricken eyes. Hokage-sama. She stuttered out in shock, and he glanced back with his lone visible eye to make himself quite clear now. You're fired. He said simply and walked down the stairs, leaving a stunned and shell-shocked Kunoichi behind. In the village. Tobirama walked through the streets, now a little irritated and annoyed at the new development. His plan to go straight to the boy and meet him to clear of the prior confusion had went completely down the drain. The guards at the Uchiha clan compound's gates had notified him that he had left the compounds in the morning but hadn't returned as of yet. He would have used his sensory abilities had he memorized his chakra signature at first sight. But he hadn't done so. So here he was doing the searching in the old-fashioned way. Have you seen a 6-year-old blonde-haired, blue-eyes boy around here? He asked, stopping by a stunned vendor who shook his head nervously. Not having words to see the emotionless Hokage asking him such a weird question. He let out a sigh and walked away, asking himself why he wasn't having an ambush search for the boy. But he already knew the answer as to why. Pride. It would hurt his pride that he, a Senju clan head, the current Hokage and probably the strongest shinobi in the Land of Fire, couldn't find a 6-year-old boy by himself. Plus, it was better than being stuck all day in the office, rummaging about his paperwork. That surely must be the bane of all Kage. I could already feel my skills dulling if I neglect my training in favor of all that in a few months more. He sighed tiredly and stopped at another vendor near the edge of the village towards the Hokage mountains. Have you seen a 6-year-old blonde-haired, blue-eyes boy around here? He asked yet again, and this time relief washed across his heart when he got a nod from the man. Frankly, he felt quite stupid to find him like this. But it felt nice for a change to interact with people normally again. Only now did he realize how right Kagami really was. He had told him that he was far too engrossed these days in his work. And now he was agreeing, seeing how much of it was true. He walked up the mountain in thought, not realizing when he had peered past the monument and towards the back clearing of it. Meow. A soft mewling sound reached his ears, making them perk up instantly. So there were signs of life here after all. He walked into the bushes and followed the soft purring and mewling sounds to their source. Kiara. Come on, you have to eat this too. A soft voice, no doubt a young child, was admonishing someone called Kiara for something concerning food. He spread the last bush into the clearing by his hands and peeked in to see the same mop of blonde hair he had been looking for so long sitting there with a small white cub in his arms. Well, that was the source of the mews and purrs, he deducted logically. His foot accidentally stepped on a twig, making a small cracking voice. He rose an eyebrow when he saw the blonde child in front of him perk up and scoot back instantly. He was completely on guard with the cub now wrapped up protectively in his arms. Meow. He tried to muffle her mewls but couldn't stop from giggling when the cub was licking his cheek softly, much to his protests. Tobirama once more had to smirk at the adorable scene in front of him. Though his amber eyes narrowed in on the cub when he saw something out of place with it. His eyes widened momentarily and he realized what was wrong truly in the first place. That is no ordinary kitten, it's a white tiger cub. He drawled on in his mind and saw the boy curl the cub in his arms into a little ball of fur and now completely out of his eyes. Please don't take her from here, she lives here and I take care of her, he said in a guarded voice, once more surprising the ever stoic Senju. So he knows the cub does not belong here, yet he takes care of it and keeps it hidden from everyone. Smart for his age, no doubt about that, he concluded and stepped out of the bush, dusting his clothes gently. Tobirama crouched down on one knee in front of the boy who was now rocking the cub a little to calm her down. Tobirama was quite surprised that a cub of a species such as his own had taken a liking to a human child no less. His eyes met the boy's baby blue ones that were still guarded and completely defiant, making him a bit proud at his protective nature. "I'm not her to take the cub, child," he stated blankly and watched the boy blink innocently before nodding and relaxing completely. Though it is rather easy to convince him otherwise, he deduced silently and watched the boy smile and settle the ball of fur over his lap. The cub curled up in a small ball and let out a cute yawn, her ears twitching cutely at that moment. Tobirama watched the boy brush her back and get small purrs out of her and couldn't help but be surprised at how comfortable the cub was around him. "Why are you here, mister?" He heard the innocent question of the blonde and gave him a curt nod of acknowledgement. He pulled out his folded form from his pocket and handed it to the boy, who took it hesitantly, no doubt wondering what it really was. Naruto unfurled the folds and had wide eyes when he saw that it was his admissions form. But more than that, he was astonished to see the stamp that was now marked in the blank square he needed to have filled in the first place. It was the official stamping that donned the kanji of Niddame Hokage over it, along with it saying it was approved. He looked at the man with a bright and grateful smile. "How did you get it signed, mister? I thought the Hokage didn't have any appointments for 2 weeks. Did you have one earlier and get this signed for me?" he asked, making Tobirama purse his lips in thought. So the boy had a dream to be Hokage, but was still so innocent and oblivious to the fact that the current reigning Hokage was sitting in front of him. That was amusing to say the least. "Yes, you could say that," he said simply and saw the blonde too happy to notice his slight hesitance in words. Naruto put his finger on the cub's nose and gave it a soft rub, only to make said cub scrunch it up in irritation. "Meow." The cub mewed softly and Naruto kissed her head in an apology for disturbing her nap, getting yet another purr out of her. But he had to show her this. "See, Kiara, this mister got it signed for me. Now I can go to the academy too," he whispered to her, and Tobirama saw now the slight tear marks on his fair cheeks. The child had been crying her no doubt. "Meow." The cub mewed in a hurt-like manner, making him chuckle at the pouting blonde, who had bonked her softly when she tried to lick and bite his form instead of reading it like he wanted her to. "You don't have to eat everything, you glutton," he scolded her half-heartedly, before scooping her up and kissing her nose to make her lick his own softly. Tobirama chuckled at the boy's antics, making the boy turn a bit sheepish and stick his tongue out childishly. The stoic Senju wondered just how long it had been since he had had a laugh like this. He was now becoming socially inept, not that he normally wasn't, but now he would be even more. He sighed when he saw the confused-looking Naruto and Kiara blinking at him innocently, wondering what he was thinking no doubt. "So you want to be Hokage?" he asked to take their minds of his behavior and saw him look at him surprised before looking down at his form and then back at him with a small smile and nodded happily. "Hi. I'll become the Hokage one day," he said, making Tobirama smirk ever so slightly. The boy had said want to become, it was will become, which left only the argument of when he would become one. And why is that, if I may ask?" he asked in a hint of curiosity, eyeing him calculatingly to discern his incoming answer. "Because my Kachan told me how awesome they were," he said happily, making his eyebrows shoot up in surprise. Now this was a new one he mused and urged him to go on, this he would like to hear. "She said that he is the strongest shinobi in our lands, one who each one every other respects and our enemies fear. He looks after each and everyone regardless of who they are, maybe if I become one everyone will love me too," he whispered the last part in a faraway voice, making Tobirama's eyes soften ever so slightly. "I see," he said in affirmative. He knew of the child's scorn, but he could implement that the child be treated fair in every possible way. For which there was his decree in place, but he could not make them accept him, that only came with time. He had even tried to adopt the child by himself, but the clan laws he himself had placed once had stopped him. Oh, the irony, his own laws working against him now. But there was nothing he could do. He did belong to the most royal family of the Uchiha clan, with the most noble of their bloods. There was no doubt in anyone's minds that he would one day inherit their pride and joy, their Kekkei Genkai in his eyes too. It was his birthright after all. That was the very reason he had been rejected in the first place. The fear of their bloodline's purest form falling prey to an outsider, a Senju no less, was a risk the Uchiha clan wasn't willing to take. It had always pained his heart that he was the very reason why he had been orphaned in the first place, and how little he could do for the boy without making it look personal. The power of the Hokage came with several restraints. Not showing favoritism to a single individual being one of them. He had known his mother for quite some time. A nice woman, belonging to a small shinobi family without any fame and marrying into the most strongest families of the Leaf. Even after her husband's death, she hadn't kept even an ounce of animosity or ill will towards him personally. Both sat in comfortable silence, with Tobirama's conflicted amber eyes gazing over at the waterfall in front of them with a glance holding a hint of solemnity in them. "It's a nice dream," he said, in barely above a whisper, but loudly audible to the blonde child sitting by his side, clearly enjoying the calm serenity of nature all around him. "Now I can go to the academy and become a shinobi, then one day I'll be Hokage, the first Uchiha to be one, believe it." Tobirama watched the child in fascination. Never before had he seen a child belonging to the Uchiha clan proclaim the dream to lead their village and become acknowledged by everyone with such fire and passion. They were raised up in an environment to always pride themselves in their old ways. Especially, their mightiest sharingan. But this boy was different. Different from all those that came before him. Different from Izuna. Different from Madara. Almost purely out of instinct, he raised his hand. His large hand covered the boy's small head gently. Naruto's curious and wide baby blue eyes looked at Tobirama with all the innocent confusion in the world. The child was no doubt confused by his action. "I believe you," he said simply. His voice holding no emotions in them like usual, the ever-stoic voice of Tobirama Senju. He watched those azure eyes widen even more than they usually were, and his features suddenly became hesitant and nervous. Naruto hadn't expected him to say that. His voice was so firm, so confident. He couldn't even decipher an ounce of doubt in his words. It made a warmth envelope his chest like never before. He truly sounded like he believed him. The first one ever aside from his mother to believe in him and not outright laugh or send a snide remark at him. Tobirama ruffled his hair gently and looked straight, not seeing the boy glance at the man every now and then, in a newfound nervousness shining in his eyes. Naruto couldn't understand the man. How could he believe in his dream just like that? He didn't even know him. Say, his soft voice rang in the comfortable silence. Tobirama gave no signs of hearing him, but Naruto could feel his complete and rapt attention on him. The man by his side was so mysterious. "How can you believe in my dream so easily? You don't even know me?" he asked in childlike curiosity. Tobirama sat in silence for a few moments, as if pondering on the words of the child. However, he wasn't. He knew the answer to the child's question the instant it left his lips. No, he was instead pondering on the nature of his words. They weren't put forth like a normal child his age would. His voice was innocent and childlike, but he knew for these were the moments in one's life. The questions of man's childhood that forged a path he would no doubt endure for the rest of his life. "I know you," he said stoically, chucking a pebble in the lake in front of him. The pebble bounced a number of times, the ripples echoing in the water, as if rippling with the weight of the words he was considering at the moment. "For I know everyone in this village," he continued in his emotionless voice. For some reason, Naruto could feel the happiness the man no doubt felt as he was uttering each and every word, even though his face portrayed none. "Every elderly, man, woman, child, family, place," he continued on, not noticing the blonde's curious eyes glued on his face from the side. Tobirama turned his glance down on the lake's water, his own reflection staring back at him. A leaf fell over it, rippling apart the mirror image. "For I am the stem that holds its leaves, fruits and branches up, even in the mightiest of winds. For each and everyone in this village is a part of me, my responsibility," he said, making Naruto's face turn to one of realization. Tobirama smirked ever so slightly at seeing the dawning face of the blonde and turned his glance to him. Naruto could feel himself drawing into the man's powerful and intense eyes. They held such confidence, such fire in them. He couldn't help but feel respect for the man he had just met. His mother always used to say that one glance in a person's eyes was all it took to assess his heart. And for the first time, today he found her words to be true. He respected the man, but from this point on he looked up to him. "For I am the Nidaime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sado. The shadow that protects this village from the fiery rays of the skies," he said stoically. His voice had such authority in it that it made Naruto's hair stand up for a moment. Naruto looked down to the water and flailed his dipped feet gently in the water. He smiled, watching the fish inside tickle his toes softly, getting a few giggles out of him. Tobirama himself watched on in pure curiosity. The boy's calming presence was inviting fishes over to him. He glanced back to see a couple of deer grazing the grass softly. It was strange, they should no doubt scour off as soon as they see a human. His eyes turned to the giggling blonde by his side. His eyes softened momentarily, the boy's innocence was contagious. He was so naive yet content with all that he had. But that didn't stop him from dreaming for more. That was the drive that intrigued Tobirama to the boy. For, at that moment, he wished himself that the boy would stay true to his words and one day come to him for his position. For the time being though. "Hiya." The blonde yelped and fell down into the lake with a small splash. Tobirama retracted his hand from where the blonde once used to be and looked at the dripping boy glaring at him heatedly. He only showed one response to him though. He merely raised an eyebrow. It seemed to infuriate the blonde boy even more when he pointed an accusatory finger at him. "You did it on purpose, didn't you?" he asked heatedly, making Tobirama's eyebrow shoot up a bit more. "I have no idea what you are talking about," he lied smoothly. Years of being a political and militaristic leader had honed his deceptive skills to the utmost precision. "But how would you become a Hokage when you can't even save yourself from falling into a lake?" he asked stoically, though the underlying mirth of playfulness wasn't lost to the blonde-haired Uchiha. He fumed and almost had steam coming off of his ears. That stoic voice was getting on his nerves and he was lying too. It wasn't fair. Splash. Ha 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 ha. The blonde laughed and giggled, holding his sides when they started to hurt a little. Tobirama's eye twitched in annoyance. He brought a hand up to his face and brought it down slowly. The dripping droplets collecting in his palms and falling down his dripping form harmlessly. He merely glanced at the boy stoically, the blonde boy who had the nerve to splash water at him of all people. It was truly amusing and utterly surprising to him. He watched the boy double over in laughter and slap the water with his hand, mumbling incoherent jokes pointed at him and then laughing at him. It would have been an adorable sight had he not been the one who was currently dripping, that is. "You do realize that you just splashed water on a shinobi who is renowned throughout the elemental nations for his unparalleled mastery over the water element?" His stoic voice rang throughout the clearing. The blonde's adorable giggles ceased and he watched on Tobirama's towering form, cowering a bit. "And that too while you were standing in the middle of a lake full of water itself." He pointed out about the obvious. Naruto couldn't help but gulp and watch the surrounding water bodies a bit nervously. They looked quite scary now. Now we can settle this peacefully like adults," Naruto tried to negotiate with a sheepish chuckle, and Tobirama's eye twitched dangerously at his stupid excuse. "Well, that will not be possible," he reasoned in a sudden calmness that Naruto took as a cue to run. "Since you're not an adult. Now get back here." He shouted and formed a couple of water whips in his palms. The blonde yelped and ran throughout the clearing, trying to pry off those dangerous-looking whips with skillful and last-moment dodges. Tobirama took this time of playful banter to realize how honed his agile instincts really were as he tried to press on slowly a little by little to see and gauge the limits of the blonde that had piqued his interest a bit. Mito Uzumaki, the heiress to the great Uzumaki clan and the sealing mistress herself, was walking in the fields with a baffled look marring her beautiful face, regardless of her age. She had tried to go and find Tobirama since Tsunade had to start her academy tomorrow and had picked the house over her head to go shopping for her dress and equipment with her Aji-san and Ba-san. The first place she had looked into was the first place anyone would go to find the ever-stoic Senju these days. The Hokage Tower. But what surprised her truly was that rather than finding him there wasn't a trace of life near his office. The secretary wasn't there to be seen and Tobirama's desk was unkempt with half-filled paperwork stacks. Now this intrigued her. For a man who was hell-bent on getting everything perfect, his table had surprised her. She wondered what had come over him to leave so abruptly like that. But there was no trace across the tower for the man. So finally, she had given up and resorted to desperate measures. Her special ability, negative emotion sensing, had kicked in at that moment. She was renowned for her sensing ability as the strongest sensor in the world for quite some time now and was surprised when her senses led her straight towards the back clearing of the Hokage monuments. "Whipkaya." She heard a soft yelp followed by what seemed like jazzing footsteps. She pushed the bushes away after following those strange sounds to their source and her violet orbs widened in shock at what she saw. "Hey, come on. Now we're square. Both of us are wet and you hit me once too." The blonde yelped, dodging another whip while Tobirama was having the time of his life. It had been so long when he had cut loose and he couldn't even remember when he had joined in on some childish antics like this one today. "But why don't you stop running?" asked Tobirama following the sprinting blonde who picked the small sleeping cub up in his arms and rolled to the side effortlessly for another dodge. "Will you stop then?" he asked, his breathing a bit erratic now and his voice pretty hopeful. He hadn't intended to piss the man off so much. "No," Tobirama said, and Naruto's mouth opened and closed at his honest reply wordlessly, completely baffled in confusion. Tobirama wanted to assess his stamina a bit too, plus, not that he would admit it to anyone. This was a little fun. "Oh, come on." He shouted and jumped aside from another whip when his azure eyes caught the stare of the baffled violet ones and a plan formed in his head, making him smirk. Mito stood there, staring at the scene in front of her in utter disbelief. Never had she thought in so many years that she would see Tobirama Senju acting so childishly as if he was his elder brother. Her thoughts were broken off when a golden blur barreled straight into her waist and a small pair of arms slid around her hips tightly. She looked down and her motherly instincts kicked in, wrapping her own arms around the little boy's head and brushing his hair gently. "Hey, what's wrong, little one?" she asked in a gentle motherly voice and her heart twisted when she saw those dull-looking puppy dog eyes that were shimmering a little with unshed tears. coupled with their usual shine and beautiful color, well, needless to say the charm worked perfectly. That scary man is chasing me and hurting me, please help me," he faked a soft sniffle between his words, and Mito's eyes turned murderous. Her reasoning capabilities went out the window as soon as she heard that soft sniffle, coupled with those adorable eyes and killing intent, washed over the fields, while she brought his face close into her stomach. Tobirama, unaware of it all, was wondering where the boy had sprinted off to when he felt a humongous amount of killing intent from behind him, making him shiver. He suddenly had a feeling of foreboding which proved to be quite effective in this case, as an adamantine chain wrapped around his stomach and reeled him back quickly like a rag doll. His confused amber eyes stared into the murderous violet orbs of his sister-in-law in utter confusion. He couldn't get why she was so angry, and for that matter why he was hanging upside down in midair while his ankle had a chakra chain wrapped around it. He turned his head up, which was down in Mito's eyes, and his eyes widened a little when he realized what had happened and how much trouble he was in right now. The blonde giggled softly in Mito's arms, who was gushing inwardly, thinking he was feeling ticklish from her strokes and not seeing him stick out his tongue at Tobirama and mouth some words that made Tobirama give him a death glare. "Shinobi, don't play fair, old man." He read the blonde's lips and fumed inwardly when he saw his soft snickers and turned his head down, which was up in Mito's case, and saw her scowling face. Her intimidating posture was towering over him, her hands on her hips to make her point clear. "Mito, this is all a misunderstanding, you see," he tried to reason with the bristling Uzumaki heiress who was in no mood for negotiations. Already falling under the charm of Naruto's puppy dog eyes no jutsu. "Tobirama send you, how dare you scare a little innocent child like that? Have you no shame? I didn't expect this, least of all from you." Her regal voice scolded him, and he shrunk a little like a child in front of his mother. "But I didn't," he said again, but trailed off when he saw her eyes narrow dangerously and his ear was being pulled and twisted quite painfully. "Now listen here, big man, if I find you chasing innocent children and scaring them like that again," she trailed off, and he gulped seeing her silent threat, nodding furiously. The sweat dropped a moment later. Wasn't he a Hokage and the strongest shinobi in the world right now? To be scolded by a woman, being held upside down at that was a great wound to his pride. Especially, in front of the blonde who was barely stifling his giggles and watching the scene in amusement. Tobirama threw him a betrayed glare when he was dropped face first into the ground unceremoniously. His body twitched a couple of times comically, and Mito's eyes turned to the blonde who was hiding in her embrace snuggling happily, and they softened instantly. "There, no one will trouble you like that again, alright?" she asked, and he nodded ever so innocently with a grateful smile. He smiled at the nice woman and nodded happily. She had a calming aura that made him smile and go to her almost instantly. They heard a cough, and Naruto turned to see Tobirama dusting his clothes off and trying to gather up what was left of his wounded pride right now. "So Mito, what brings you by her to find me?" he asked, trying to change the subject, and the Uzumaki heiress blinked innocently and realized what she had come here for in the first place. "Tsunade had picked the house up over her head because you didn't come for her shopping appointment as promised. So, I came to find you, but you weren't at the tower, and then that search led me here," she explained simply, and he nodded. "I lost track of time," he said honestly, and the Uzumaki heiress gave him a knowing smile. No matter how he tried to mask it, she had seen that playful smirk on his face when he was involved in his childish antics mere moments ago. Naruto looked between the two nervously, seeing how they had forgotten about his presence here, and looked up at the orange sky, only to realize how late it was. I should probably just go, it was nice meeting you too," he said in a soft polite tone, making the two adults blink. Mito though caught his shoulders and gave him a stern look that made him freeze in place before her eyes softened and she cupped his cheek in her hand gently. "You must be joining the academy too, right?" she asked softly, and he nodded, blushing a bit in embarrassment at how she treated him so kindly. He wasn't used to this behavior, with everyone almost always giving him the cold shoulder. Mito squealed in delight inwardly at the adorable boy who was a shy mess at her mere touch right now. He was so cute. She turned her eyes to Tobirama, who had his arms crossed and was looking at the scene in fascination, as if it was a movie for him to enjoy. "Tobirama, since you have missed your spree with Tsunade already, why don't we take this adorable thing with us to make up for lost time?" she asked with a playful smile. He smirked and nodded, raising an eyebrow at the boy who was looking between the two with lost eyes. "Of course, he is in need of new clothes and equipment for the academy too," he said, nodding in affirmative. Naruto's eyes widened and Mito watched him squirm nervously. "What's the matter?" she asked him in a gentle voice and looked to see his adorable wide eyes looking at her apologetically. You don't have to, I mean I have clothes already in my house," he said softly, trying to make them see his point that he didn't really want them to see. Both elders glanced at each other in confusion before turning back to the nervous blonde. "Then you must need books and scrolls, right? I mean you can't have those since the curriculum is revised almost every year by Tobirama," She asked him and he bit his lip and said nothing. The two elders were quite curious at his strange actions now. Mito knew who he was, there weren't many blondes who donned the Uchiha symbol proudly on their shoulders. She knew who he was, the only outcast Uchiha in the village. And she, for the life of her, couldn't see how people could ostracize such an adorable thing in front of them so cruelly. "How much are they?" he asked softly. Both of their eyes widened a little, and they knew now what he was so nervous about. The Uchiha clan, as compensation for the actions of their clan head, had to pay off all the costs for the damages caused during the rampage of the boy's father. As such, the clan elders had seized the amount from the head family's funds, taking a huge chunk off from their fortune. No one knew what happened to the rest after his mother's death. But Tobirama did. Not for what had become of the rest of the family's fortunes, that were still a mystery in themselves as to how large they truly were and what became of them. But he knew of the boy's plight and the reason of his current nervousness. He had come to know it through the now clan elder and his ex-subordinate Kagami Uchiha. The man had tried as much as he could to make the boy's life comfortable, but hadn't been able to do much despite that. A lone man against the rest of the clan's despise, he couldn't do much no matter how much he had wanted to. But the clan still had to uphold its honor as the oldest and noblest of them all, and as such, according to the ancient traditions of Uchiha Orphan Children Fund. The clan gave the boy a fixed sum of money as set by the elders of that time each month until he was old enough to take care of himself, thereby by considered an adult or had a stable income source in his life. Whichever condition was fulfilled first. And that in itself was where the problem lay. The Uchiha clan's traditional laws hadn't been updated since a long time, and the amount was a sum set decades ago, therefore not enough for a proper and comfortable living in this day and time. Now that wasn't usually a problem for the orphan child, since the Uchihas had their own shopping districts and way of life. Their clan members could be said as one of the most caring and protective of all the clans, as funny as it sounded it was true. The children who had been orphaned due to some reason would get huge cuts in prices and discounts all over the things they purchased, to the point of getting some things free in their clan compounds, therefore nullifying the need for any extra money other than that old fixed stipend. But Naruto wasn't a simple orphan. No one cared if he lived or died. Instead, most would prefer it if he died and no longer a threat to bring more shame to their clan. Mito saw through Tobirama's contemplative expression and knew that the man was rummaging through his mind for a solution. But in this case she was a bit ahead of him. "Tobirama, don't you have some manuscripts of the books you wrote last year for the new curriculum?" she asked him, making the shaggy white-haired man nod in affirmative at her question. "But they are mere prototype manuscripts I wrote containing only the most essential of materials. It had to undergo a complete rewrite by the order of the council, since my writings were far too complex and detailed for children as young as them." He cut her musings short. Can I have them please, Aji-san?" asked the soft and shy voice of the blonde who was standing quietly to the side and listening to their conversations for a while now. Tobirama though saw his eyes, the eyes that were eager to learn. But what if he couldn't understand them? They would do more harm to the boy than good. "Please, I'll give them back to you if I don't understand. But if you can, I'll take them," he asked him in a pleading voice, and those innocent eyes made even his heart melt. He sighed, looks like age really was catching up to him. He crushed those thoughts instantly. What was he thinking? He wasn't old, he hated being old, he scolded himself inwardly. "Alright," he said, and Mito giggled when the boy perked up with a smile in an instant. To Naruto they served two purposes, first he got off from paying. But that wasn't the reason he asked for them. They were incredibly complex and detailed, written by the Hokage himself. Now that was a challenge, and how would he be Hokage if he couldn't even understand one's written knowledge himself? Tobirama wanted to see how far the boy would go with those manuscripts. He would keep an eye over him just in case he pushed himself too far and wasn't able to cope up with the detailed knowledge himself. Though he had a hunch that the boy might surprise him. And he loved these kinds of surprises a lot. "Alright, then I'll bring them over to your house tomorrow. Then we can see if you need those clothes and equipment really or not," he said stoically with a hint of warmth and ruffled the boy's hair, who just looked at him with affectionate and longing eyes. Naruto had seen fathers do this to their children and now he knew how nice it felt. Tobirama saw it and a slice of guilt flashed through his heart when he saw those longing blue eyes that looked for affection in even the smallest of things. He was the very reason the boy had eyes like those in the first place. He had taken his father's life, in combat or not, and it weighed heavily on his shoulders now. This was why he never let emotions out of his heart. They made things complicated. Now he knew whatever the boy would say when he came to know he was the one responsible for taking his father's life, the boy would despise him. And deep within him he knew it would hurt him. But he would endure it, for he was a shinobi and he had promised his father to look after the boy. "Don't worry Azuna, I've got eyes on your boy now," he thought when he watched Mito pinch the cheeks of the blonde who was blushing and mumbling incoherently with pinched cheeks to let go, not that the Uzumaki heiress was listening to him in the slightest. "Alright Aji-san, Mito-sama. I'll be taking my leave now," he said politely with a slight bow, and the two were surprised at the manners he had at so young an age. Before Mito could break out of her thoughts and tell him to not call her that, the blonde was off with a wave. Now how was she supposed to tell him? Her thoughts trailed off, and she smiled at the stoic Senju slyly. Tobirama grew uncomfortable at the sight of that smile. That smile meant she wanted something and he was an essential part of it. But the thing that annoyed him the most was that she always got what she wanted, no matter what he argued with his ever-present logic. For that was the power of women that not even Tobirama Senju was able to overcome. He just prayed to heavens that Tsunade didn't turn out like her grandmother. He even shuddered to think what she would do to men when she grew up. Her temper was already of the legendary and fiery Uzumaki's. He just didn't know then how much the relations between the Senju and Uchiha clans were going to change in the coming future. Next morning. Hanahagakure no Sato. The shining rays of a huge fireball placed in the sky made their way past the windows of out little blonde, currently snuggled up in his futon. The curled up ball in between the large room squirmed slightly, just enough to make the blanket covering him. "You." A soft mewl rang in his room, his blanket getting plucked by something offending making him clutch it tighter in his sleep. Go away, I'm sleepy." He mumbled sleepily curling up into a little ball. But the thing clutching his blanket tried even harder now, much to his added annoyance. "What? Kiara?" He whispered sleepily, his baby blue eyes squinted while trying to adjust to daylight when he took in the wide brown slitted eyes of his favorite cub. "You?" She mewed softly, licking his cheek and curling up by it with a small yawn. Though Naruto regained his bearings and finally came to his senses, but even still he couldn't help the smile that lit up his face at seeing his friend there. "How did you get here, girl?" he asked her, brushing her fur to get a soft purr out of the little feline. "You shouldn't be here, Kiara, it might make me get into trouble and they'll send you away into some guarded place," he whispered in a cautious tone, but didn't get anything more than a small twitch of her whiskers when he kissed her cheek softly. He let out a sigh, she must have followed him back yesterday or somehow found out where he lived, but he couldn't do anything about it now. He himself had been wanting to take her home now that she was getting bigger and a lot playful to hide in the hidden clearings behind the mountains any longer. So it was all for the better, at least for now. He sat up, scooping the ball of fur in his arms, who didn't feel much like resisting from the friendly touch she had gotten used to. The blonde boy walked downstairs to his dining room, straight for the fridge, and put the small cub on the table who was watching her unofficial master quite curiously. He filled up a bowl with the half carton of milk he had and placed it on the table, much to the joy of the little furry thing, who had dug in as soon as the bowl touched the wooden surface. He sat down on the table, his chin on his arm, only to look at his lone friend fondly lapping up her milk. His finger rubbed her nose making her mewl in a hurt voice at being disturbed during her meal. He laughed though when she licked off the small droplet of milk on his finger while she was at it, getting herself a small bonk on her head. "Glutton," he whispered playfully, seeing the cub mewling in a hurt voice, and he was glad she was here now. At least his house wouldn't be as lonely as before. He himself cut off a small piece from a loaf of bread and started on frying a couple of eggs, feeling a small nudge on his ankle. He looked down only to see the pleading eyes of Kiara looking at him innocently, no doubt hungry from the fresh smell of frying eggs, making him smile. He cut off a small piece of his omelette and threw it down, which was eaten before Naruto could even realize, and watched a ball of fur nuzzle against his leg, no doubt quite content now. "You're going to run me dry like this, you gluttonous cat," he said playfully, much to the confusion of the cub who just went up onto his lap while he enjoyed his meal in silence. His eyes glanced at the clock to see it was almost 9 now, and he rose an eyebrow, remembering he was going to have some guests over today and grinned. He picked the yawning cub up in his arms, instantly hopping upstairs into the bathroom. "Alright Kiara, time to get you cleaned up girl," he said, getting a yawn out of the cub who was still quite sleepy and clearly wasn't expecting what came next. Splash. MEWWW. The cub mewled in horror when he had thrown her into the warm water of the tub and looked at him with hurt eyes when he stepped in a moment later after getting undressed himself. Now, we'll have none of that, you're going to have to be clean so you don't ruin things in the house girl." He admonished the cub who enjoyed getting herself rubbed with a little bubbly shampoo massage as was felt by her purrs. The joyful bath ended when the water was cold and he drained the tub, coming out with a little cub wrapped up in a towel and being brushed off the water with some muffle mules. He let the dry fur ball out of his grasp who jumped down and shook her body expertly to dry herself off and ran up to the small folded mattress by the side cupboard that was open and found herself a new spot to sleep. Naruto just shook his head at the lazy cub with a smile and went onto the closet himself, sliding it open to see rows of clothes stacked up neatly, ranging from all sizes and colors. Naruto smiled and took out his blue shirt with a little Uchiha symbol on the bottom right corner in the front and put on some black pants while running his hand through his silky locks. Knock knock. Naruto was surprised at hearing the knock so early, surely Tobirama wouldn't be coming this early in the morning. Right. He ran down the stairs and opened the door with a polite bow. Welcome to the Uchiha residence. He spoke up politely only to get his hair ruffled playfully. Now no need to be so formal with your Jai-chan now is there? The playful voice of Kagami Uchiha said, making him grin and step aside to let the man in. Kagami made his beeline straight to the living room and sat down on the couch, smiling at the boy who offered him a glass of water. So, I heard you came looking for me back at the Uchiha clan office? He asked, getting a happy nod from the boy. He already did have a hunch as to why the boy would have wanted to meet him. I guess you came to me regarding your admissions to the academy, nah? He asked and got an instant nod from the boy. Don't worry, I'll take care of it, he trailed off, seeing the boy shaking his head, which now had him thrown into a loop. No need, Aji-san already got my admission form signed by the Hokage. The boy answered, his confusion making the man perk up in surprise. Kagami couldn't help but look at the boy in pride, that was the drive a child his age should have. That's great, Naruto, I'm proud of you. He spoke in warm tone, making the boy gaze at his lap while his cheeks turned pink in embarrassment. Kagami was still surprised that Tobirama Senju had taken the time to meet the boy on such short notice, but he remembered that the man was a bit too curious when it came to matters concerning him. He rose an eyebrow when he saw the boy perk up as if he had remembered something important, and he was all ears for the kid he considered his nephew in all but blood. Tobirama Jai-chan is great too, Aji-san, he is so fun and so cool. He even brought me my signed form to the back of the Hokage monument himself and played with me a little. He said, making Kagami frown a bit. Now that didn't sound the least bit like his sensei. Tobirama Senju, playing with a 6-year-old child, the idea was laughable in itself to him. Naruto, you're sure you went to the Hokage, right? He asked suspiciously and a bit worriedly, so as to not hurt his happy demeanor in the slightest. The boy blinked innocently and pulled the form out of the side drawer to show him the proof. Of course I did, see, he stamped this, he said, handing the man the folded form. Kagami unfurled the paper, raising an eyebrow at the amount of mistakes and the adorable way his nephew had filled the form out. It didn't even have a photograph on it for Kami's sake, but sure enough there, in the bottom right corner, dawned the official stamp of the Nidaime Hokage, along with his signature of approval for enrollment into the academy year. How his sensei, the man who prided in perfection in even the most minute of things, had let this form slide, he would never know. But he had. See, it's his sign, right, plus I see him daily on the monument too, you know, the boy said with a pout, making Kagami chuckle and nod. He handed the boy his form back, which was put back in its haven with the utmost care by our little blonde boy. Then Kagami's mind wandered back to another point that might need looking into by him personally. Do you need some money for buying the books and starting stuff for the academy? He asked him, making the boy look down at his lap and shake his head. Kagami's smile slipped, seeing his state of sadness. He knew the boy never really liked asking him for money and won't come to him for it unless it was absolutely necessary. It was one of the things he absolutely loved about the boy, yet it made his worries increase for him all the more. But once again the boy perked up, surprising him for the second time with a wide smile when he shook his head, much to the elder Uchiha's confusion. Tobirama Jai-chan is going to let me borrow some of his spare books and scrolls. He is going to bring them by today, isn't it awesome, Aji-san? He asked happily, and now Kagami's mind was spinning. What the hell did that boy do to my sensei? Was all he could think of, and nodded dumbly, seeing the boy grin his goofy grin. Though he couldn't help but feel happy at the joyful expression on the kid's face. Looks like my boy has it all figured out already on his own, you really are growing big, my boy. He said in a warm tone, making Naruto nod happily. He stood up to take his leave, Naruto doing the same out of courtesy, and walked him to the door. Alright then, do really well at the academy and make me and our clan proud, Naruto. We are called the elites and the best of this village for a reason. Always remember your Uchiha heritage and be proud of it, alright? He said sternly, and Naruto smiled and nodded proudly. Hi, just you see, I'll ace the academy. Naruto boasted proudly, making Kagami chuckle and pat his head a couple of times to calm him down. The boy in turn looked sheepish and bowed politely when Kagami turned to leave. Naruto walked in, going straight to the porch of his house leading to the vast gardens his estate housed. He loved them as if they were his life, his mother used to tend to them and had taught him her skills before she passed away, and he took care of them as a remembrance to the times he spent here with her. He looked down when he felt a small weight on his lap and brushed the pure white fur of the cub now rested on his lap softly. You're really smart, Kiara, I'm glad you didn't come out in front of Aji-san. He whispered, placing a kiss on her head to get a small purr out of the little feline, and kept brushing her hair. He saw her yawn and sighed tiredly himself, the cub was too lazy for her own good sometimes. but he loved her all the more for her antics. Knock knock. Naruto's head snapped back, hearing the door's knock, and he ran upstairs quickly with a little ball of fur in his arms. He ran into his room, opening the closet containing his futon and mattresses, and placed the cub on them. "You what?" The cub mewled in confusion, tilting her head to the side cutely. He placed a ball by her side to play with and kept another pillow that she was glad and curled up on instantly. "Alright, now you stay here and don't come out until I tell you to, K?" He asked, not really expecting an answer, and ran downstairs straight to the main door. He opened the door and saw Tobirama standing there with his usual stoic look marred on his face and his arms crossed in front of his chest, but he was surprised to see the red-headed woman with her hair in two buns, the same one from yesterday, standing there with him. She wore an elegant white kimono with a red obi and the Uzumaki spiral adorned on the back of it, plus, he saw strange tags with some strange markings there hanging by her head. He bowed to them politely like his mother had taught him to do if someone came to his home. "Welcome to the Uchiha residence," he said politely, and the two looked at each other with a smile at the young boy's manners and the way he held himself like a true heir of royal blood. The two sighed inwardly though, instantly noticing the differences between this blonde and the one they had at home. They had tried to have Tsune be just like him too, soft-spoken and polite, but the girl had been spoiled rotten by her grandfather before they could instill their ways of manners into her. She had even picked up on Hashirama's gambling habits and his infamous bad luck, and his legendary losing streak was even bad with the girl. "It is our pleasure to make your acquaintance, my cute little thing." Mito cooed the boy, ruffling his hair playfully, making the boy a little shy and his cheeks turned pink, clearly not used to such affection from a lady. Naruto led them into his house, unaware to himself the two took in the sights of the large yet elegant estate. It had been quite a few years since Tobirama stepped foot in this house, the last time being when he brought the news of Izuna's demise to the boy's mother. He shook of that line of thought while the boy walked them into the guest room. The two stepped in the traditional Japanese-style room and sat on the two offered cushions by the table in the middle. Several calligraphy scrolls hung on the wall as decorations, while small but faintly visible Uchiha clan symbols were carved into the wood almost everywhere. But both the elders couldn't help but feel nostalgic at the faint amounts of thick and potent chakra still lying everywhere around the house. It belonged to the man who had carved the wood himself, along with Madara Uchiha, to build the house from the ground up as a symbol of alliance between the two formidable clans. "I'll go and get some refreshments, please make yourselves comfortable," he said with yet another boy and left before Mito could stop him from the formalities. She put her cheek in her palm with a pout, though smiled seeing the faintest of smirks dawning on the current Senju clan head's face. The boy certainly is full of surprises, he holds himself like a true heir of royal blood should, and his house has been well taken care of. Tobirama's stoic voice said with a hint of pride in his voice. He was always one to take note of such fine things and admire them, and the boy was scoring high marks on his list of manners and lifestyle. Mito herself had expected everything to be a complete mess, with a small child like him having the whole house to himself. She hadn't expected well this. But only one thing was still ringing in her mind right now. "And he's such a sweet little munchkin too," she cooed happily, making Tobirama sigh and pinch the bridge of his nose in exasperation. Well, she was more into these things when it came to little kids. All these Uzumakis were too impulsive for their own good sometimes. Both their musings were cut short when the door in front of them slid open, while their little host walked in with a tray full of simple and plain cookies, with 2 cups of tea. He served them with a little sad smile. "I'm sorry, I only have these," he mumbled apologetically, a bit ashamed at having to serve his guest such bland-looking snacks. The two glanced at each other and dismissed his little nervousness away by picking up their cups and taking a sip of their beverages. Tobirama placed the cup down, once more taking note that the boy was sitting on his knees in a formal way rather than simply sitting comfortably like he could have. Mito too took note of it but didn't give it much thought as much as Tobirama did. He pulled out a scroll from his hip pouch, handing it over to the boy who took them with a grateful smile. "That contains all the learning material you will need for the academy," he stated stoically, dismissing the boy's question with his answer even before it could be brought out of his lips. Naruto nodded hesitantly, not quite understanding how a little scroll like this could be all the learning material he would need for the academy. Did they really teach so little at the academy? Was all his innocent and naive 6-year-old mind could perceive at the moment. He unfurled the scroll slightly only to frown even more in confusion and looked at it inquisitively. He couldn't understand even in the slightest what this was. Maybe they would teach him another language in the academy. Mito let out a soft sigh seeing the boy looking at the scroll a little calculatively yet with a firm confusion now marring his face. She couldn't believe that Tobirama could imply that the boy really knew what a storage scroll was when he hadn't even had a single day at the academy yet. She looked at him with narrowed accusing eyes while he stared back at her impassively, not quite understanding what her problem was. She turned her eyes back to the blonde who had finally given up on trying to understand the scroll and was rolling it back up. "Naruto," she called out, making the boy perk up and look at her questionably. She smiled seeing his wide baby blue eyes, they were such an exotic color and he looked so adorable with his narrow Uchiha features enhancing them so much. "Come on over here." She patted the space by her side. The boy, though a little confused, nodded and went to sit by her side when she took the scroll in his hands and unfurled it yet again. She scooted closer to him, startling him a bit and put the scroll straight in front of him. "Naruto, this is a storage scroll," she explained, getting a nod from the boy who was now paying rapt attention to her. He loved learning something new and this must be some shinobi affair. Though he looked on in amazement when she placed 2 fingers over the strange symbols and there was a small poof of smoke. His eyes widened when he saw the small pile of books and scrolls now resting atop the storage scroll. Mito smiled at seeing his excited glimmering eyes and smirked slyly to the ever-stoic Senju, who had a small frown marring his face at not realizing this small fact a little earlier. Though both rose an eyebrow when the boy, instead of going for the books or scrolls concerning the academy, picked up the storage scroll from underneath them and was looking at it as if it was Kami's gift to man. "Wow, how did this little scroll hold so many things? Is this scroll special? Why did these small markings change slightly? How many books can it hold? Where do you get these?" he asked in rapid fire, not taking his eyes off the scroll even for a moment, and Mito was surprised that his eyes had caught the slight change in the seals with just a single glance. No one ever noticed them even after going through them for years, the kid had sharp eyes, she mused, smiling softly at his starstruck face while he was looking at the scroll in pure excitement. "This Naruto is a storage scroll," she explained patiently, taking it from his hands, and he nodded looking at her for more information that she was more than happy to provide him with. "You have to pump chakra into it to store things in it or take them out whenever you want," she explained, making him nod, but not quite convinced with her vague information which she picked up on in an instant and grinned. She loved explaining things regarding Fuinjutsu to anyone willing to listen, it was such an obscure and unknown art, except for members of her own clan. She pointed her fingers on the strange markings, tracing the expertly drawn kanji over them to start her explanation. "These strange markings are kanji, as you can see in some, our seals are special markings that belong to a very rare and obscure branch of the shinobi arts Fuinjutsu. These seals hold the things stored in them, placed by the user in the small and confined space of the scroll. Not that the scroll in itself is special. It is all in these seals," she explained patiently, and now the boy had a satisfied smile on his face, liking the little details in her explanation, and was still in awe at the power of these small seals as she called them. "Sugoi. They must be so powerful if these little small markings can hold so many of our things in a simple paper scroll, then the complex techniques in this branch would be amazing too," he whispered, gazing at the scroll with a spaced out look, not noticing the wide eyes of the adults who were staring at him in stunned silence. Both glanced at each other in a seemingly silent eye-to-eye conversation, and Mito smiled slyly at the prospect of having a new candidate who was willing to venture into this exotic branch of the shinobi arts at so young an age. Naruto broke out of his stupor and instantly asked the first thing that came up in his mind. "Will they teach this to us at the academy too?" he asked innocently, but the hope in his eyes wasn't lost to either of them. Tobirama shook his head, breaking his heart a little at the thought of not being able to learn them in the academy. "Naruto, Fuinjutsu is a scarce and rarely practiced art that not many venture into of their own accord," Mito spoke in her warm voice, making him nod sadly. But he was still confused at her words. "But why is that? It seems so cool," he whispered, looking at the storage scroll in front of him longingly. Mito put her hand on the boy's head and brushed his silky golden locks gently. Both the elders were surprised how interested the boy looked into learning this non-flashy and boring art. "You really are a surprising child, my little one. Most children love ninjutsu or taijutsu since they look and seem so cool and all but brush off Fuinjutsu since they are only simple markings or calligraphy arts combined with a little basic ninjutsu to create something much more complex. It is really rare for one to take an interest in it on their own," she explained patiently, getting a small nod from the boy while she kept brushing his soft hair she adored so much right now. She couldn't help but gush at his adorable yet saddening crestfallen expression. "It is the specialty of my clan, you know," she said, making him perk up with a smile. "It is only learnt by a rare few outside my clan, and even within us, only a rare few ever get the honor of being called masters at this art. It is the most complex art known to the shinobi world," she stated, and saw the boy turn his gaze back to the storage scroll with a small bout of silence reigning in the room now. Both Tobirama and Mito looked on in curiosity at what the boy might say next, seeing his contemplative face. For Naruto, it intrigued him to no end. In his mind it was utterly stupid that they didn't teach this at the academy. So what if it was hard, that made it all the more reason for anyone to learn it. "Where can I get books on Fuinjutsu?" He finally asked, breaking the bout of silence, and Mito smiled widely at his words. For Tobirama, he was at a loss of words. Normally, children his age ventured into ninjutsu or even kenjutsu since it looked so cool and flashy, piquing their innocent attention a lot. But this young boy was something else. Now Mito was especially intrigued by the kid, no matter if he was in Uchiha. Few ninjutsu prospecting students were rare enough to think of such trivial things. She turned the boy's face to her by her finger placed on his right cheek and gave him a little smile. Well, I am not so bad at ninjutsu, why don't I show you a few things and we'll see if maybe you want to pursue learning the art in the future or not. She asked him curiously, and Naruto beamed at the nice lady with a happy nod. Really, you'll teach me? He asked her with a voice of uncertainty, but grinned when she nodded with a smile. When can we start? He asked happily, and she giggled at the boy's enthusiasm. Well, we could start now, but I don't think you have a calligraphy kit with you, so I'll have to bring one. Tomo she was cut off as Naruto spoke up. What is this calligraphy kit? I may have it. What does it contain? He asked and she giggled, shaking her head. No, Naruto-kun, it is rare for someone other than the Uzumaki clan members to have a sealing calligraphy kit with them again. Naruto spoke up, making her surprised when she saw his vigorous shaking of head. Madara Jiji's library has so many things in it along with my father's. I don't know what all of them are or how to use them all, but maybe you can find this sealing kit in there. He asked her, not wanting to miss a chance at learning Fuinjutsu even in the slightest. Mito was surprised, but the idea now certainly seemed plausible, and she nodded at the boy who smiled happily and stood up while taking her hand in his own. She followed him with a smile while he escorted them through the hallways of his house. This time Mito and Tobirama truly saw how beautiful the house truly was, never having explored it so much before. Naruto stopped in front of a sliding door with the Uchiha clan symbol embossed over it proudly. He slid it open and stepped in with the two elders following him in to see what had Madara really kept in his house. Their eyes widened in unison to epic proportions at seeing the sight that was now in front of them. The room had shelves after shelves in several rows, each of them stacked full of scrolls and various other items concerning the shinobi affairs or his clan materials. Tobirama turned his eyes to the right to see the last row stocked full of weapons of all kinds, but two of them caught his eyes. There hung on the wall were Madara Uchiha's personal war fan and Izuna Uchiha's personal katana. It made several memories of battling against the bearers of the two weapons, stored in such pristine condition, fly into his mind. He walked on to the second row with scrolls and saw them all arranged in several sections of nin, tai and jinjutsu. There were jutsu scrolls of all ranks and elements, even non-elementals were categorized separately from the elemental ones. It was quite probably larger than the village's own personal library. That in itself was filled more than 3/4 of the contents provided by the members of the Uchiha clan, with them using their sharingan to document the techniques they learned from various enemies of various lands. His family too must have documented and preserved each and everything they had scoured over the generations and kept them here for safekeeping. But that in itself raised a peculiar question in his mind. Naruto, do you by any chance know why your clan elders haven't taken this all in and absorbed this into the clan's property? He asked the boy, his voice laced in disbelief while unfurling a simple D-rank jutsu scroll to see the personal signature of none other than Madara Uchiha himself at the end of it. And he was surprised yet again when the boy nodded simply. The weapons section alone was enough for the clan to raise hell over a single family possessing it and try and absorb it into the clan's funds, which wasn't taking into account the amount of knowledge that was amassed in here. Mito too was shocked herself that the little boy knew of the reason why his clan hadn't pulled it in themselves and absorbed it for the clan's strength. Hi. Kachan told me when she brought me here sometimes, he whispered, sadness clearly lacing his voice. Only someone closely related to our family can enter this room. I don't know how it is, but she told me that this room recognizes our blood and chakra signature and only when it sees that it is someone from my family can they enter it. No one has ever been here except you two till today, he explained innocently, looking for the small kid Mito had told him about and not seeing the completely baffled and shell-shocked faces of the adults behind him. Mito though looked around and narrowed her eyes at the markings unlaced all over the walls of the room. It was embedded with several layers of security, privacy and silencing seals. Nothing short of breaking in done by a full-blown seal master. After hours of breaking through the sequence of seals, would one be able to access this room? Clearly whoever set this up didn't want anyone to be sneaking around here without his or her permission. And knowing the kinds of people the previous two owners of this house were, it wasn't the least bit surprising to the Uzumaki clan heiress. The two were very strict when it came to privacy in their lives, and this showed it to the fullest. Then why have you brought us here, Naruto? It is a family heirloom that has been protected by your family for generations, why show this to us? Asked the ever-curious Tobirama. Mito wanted to scold the man for such a blunt and rude question that could be taken as an insult for the boy's courtesy to them, but she was curious to this as well, so she let it slide this time and opened all ears to the blonde boy rummaging through the shelves with his tongue sticking out in frustration at not being able to find the kid in this treasure room of a place. "I trust you too," came his answer with a small cough when he found something old and full of dust, making them quite surprised when he continued on. "Kachan told me only to bring those in here that I trust completely and never bring anyone from my clan here since they might try to take this all. But I trust you too, after all. Tobirama Jai-chan is the Hokage and Lady Mito is really nice too. You guys brought me books and helped me get in the academy. Lady Mito even offered to teach me. No one's ever been this nice to me," was all he could say when his shoulders were caught and he was turned around only to gaze into the warm violet eyes of the crimson-haired woman. "Naruto, don't call me Lady Mito," she whispered softly, cupping his cheek in her hand, and loved the affection with which he looked at her, laced with his complete confusion at her words. "Call me Mito Bachan from now on, okay?" she asked gently, and he nodded, a bit embarrassed when she scooped him in her arms for a hug. She walked with the boy through several shelves, her face still showing surprise at finding some basic level Fuinjutsu scrolls stacked in the shelves too. She was guessing that this sealing work was quite probably done by Madara himself. Tobirama though was scouring through his particular interest ninjutsu scrolls. He hadn't found anything that had piqued his interest for now, and for the life of him, there wasn't even a single forbidden jutsu scroll in there. For that, he was glad as well as disappointed. Glad that a kid as curious as him didn't have dangerous things to tinker with in his leisure time, and disappointed at not finding anything particularly of interest to him. "Naruto, you say you haven't brought any Uchiha here?" Tobirama's voice rang through the room, getting a simple nod from the boy. Tobirama nodded in affirmative, gazing at the jet black blade encased on the wall, safely making him remember his battle with the last Uchiha clan head. "That includes Kagami too, right?" he asked and got yet another nod, surprising him quite a bit knowing how close he was to the boy. "Hachan made me promise to never bring another Uchiha in here no matter what, and only those from outside that I could trust completely. So I didn't tell Kagami Aji-san since he is an Uchiha." He spoke innocently, and Mito smiled at the blind faith the little boy had in them. Tobirama too was happy, but the boy was quite naive right now. Any clan, no matter who it was, would give just about anything to get their hands on the things collected in this room to get a chance at increasing their own strengths. He himself had half a mind to absorb it all into the village archives, but he couldn't touch a family heirloom like this from a boy to whom it meant the world. Mito crouched down and looked him straight in the eyes with a serious look on her face. "Naruto-kun, now you have to promise me another thing just like you did for your Kachan. You will that for me, won't you?" she asked him in her gentle tone, getting an instant nod from the boy who had simply no qualms with it. "Don't bring or even tell anyone about this room other than us. You don't know what people would do to get their hands on this if they knew what was here. Promise me the room stays a secret with only us knowing about it," she asked softly, and Naruto nodded innocently, trusting the woman. After all, she said the same thing his Kachan told him, and she was always right in his mind. I promise you, Mito Bachan," he said in his soft yet melodic voice, making the woman smile and ruffle his hair playfully. She caught his chin in her fingers and placed her lips on his forehead. "Let's go, I found it," she spoke playfully, getting a grin out of the boy. She took his hand in her own and led him out, looking behind her to see Tobirama still scouring the place like a hungry scavenger. "Let's go," she said firmly, leaving no room for arguments and pulling the man out by his collar, who yelled out protest in return that he wanted to stay a little longer like a child. Tobirama followed the two with a slight slump in his shoulders at being denied the chance to learn something new, but his face lit up with a slight smirk, seeing the two in front of him walking hand in hand. He stayed silent and cherished the two interacting in front of them silently. The boy's innocence and kind heart was really contagious. He had already wormed his way into his heart, and he already knew that Mito adored the boy with all her being. Having found herself an apprentice, she had long since given up looking on after her repeated failures at scouring for one. They sat back in the living room while Mito had pulled the boy onto her lap, much to his embarrassment, but she wasn't taking any of it. She placed her chin over his head and pulled open the calligraphy kit, getting down to business now. She showed him the proper way to rub an ink stone and showed him how it was done so he could follow in her lead. He did as he was asked patiently, rubbing the required ink off the stone for their practice session. Mito wouldn't tell him right now, but this was a moment every seal master cherished when he decided to take on an apprentice. She took a brush in her hands. Instead of using the support between her index finger and thumb, she placed it in her hands on merely her fingertips for the added precision that was needed for the art of sealing. Naruto looked at her hand with narrowed eyes and took a brush in the same way in his left hand, once more surprising her with a new edge she found in him. "Alright Naruto, no, watch this closely, alright?" she asked in but a whisper, feeling his head bob up and down under her chin. Her hand expertly traced the kanji for fire on the blank sheet in front of her. Naruto tried to do the same, though his ending strokes came a bit sloppy as was expected of someone trying their first hand at the art of calligraphy. Tobirama smiled, sipping on some tea he had poured from the kettle the boy had been kind enough to bring them earlier, and watched on the boy's shaky hands take their first steps into the obscure field of sealing. He was still surprised that even after 2 hours straight of silent whispers and the finesse-laced brushwork, he didn't seem to be letting pee anytime soon. He had tried the same with Tsunade, but alas she was a bit too hot-headed and loved to jutsu instead of the boring art that was sealing. Mito noticed it too, glancing at the clock to see how late it truly was and caught his hand with the brush, kissing the back of his head gently to halt his calligraphy session for the day. He looked back, a little peeved and mostly confused, but smiled when he saw the smiling face of the crimson-haired woman he sat on top of. "That's enough for today Naruto-kun, it's already time for the sun to set." She answered his query before it be brought out, making him look out the glass door in the room and have wide eyes at seeing the slightly darkening sky, showing how late it truly was. He got off her lap and both elders stood up from their interesting day, smiling at the boy who walked them out to the door. The two turned around, reaching his doorstep, getting a polite bow out of the boy. "Thank you for taking the time to visit and teach me, it was really nice." "Arigato." He spoke in his soft tone, making Mito crouch down and poke his nose playfully. "Thank you for having us, my adorable little thing. Now you come to my house tomorrow after academy lets you off and we'll start off where we left today, alright?" She asked, making the boy beam and wrap his arms around her neck, making her giggle and hug him back equally happily. "But where do you live, Bachan?" he asked after a moment, realizing he didn't even ask for her address as of yet. "Just ask anyone near the eastern ends of the clan districts for the small Uzumaki clan compounds and you'll be hushed up to me easily. So come anytime, I free and alone all day long, so don't worry about the time, it would be nice to have such nice company with me from now on." She chirped up in a chipper tone, getting a small grin out of the blonde, and she grinned back. Tobirama, not a man for many words as usual, said his simple goodbye and left with a curt nod of gratefulness for having them at his place. After a small dinner with his little cub who had slept her way straight through the day to hide in his room, he was out like a light as soon as he hit his futon and slept with a smile to look forward to his days at the academy from tomorrow onward. Next morning. Naruto woke up with a start and grinned happily. Today was the day he finally went to the academy. He looked by his pillow side to see the cub sleeping soundly and picked her up, waving her up in the air. The cub woke up with a start and looked around itself in confusion. "Mew." It mewed when Naruto had started rubbing his cheek with hers and she nuzzled herself against her master. "Today's the day, girl. I am joining the academy today." He chirped up, rolling his futon up and placing it in the closet. He jogged into the bathroom, taking a bath after catching the scurrying cub who ran away as soon as she saw the filled tub, but to no avail as she was thrown unceremoniously in the water once again. He cooked up a small breakfast, giving the cub some milk and bacon, while leaving some milk in her bowl for until he returned. He hurriedly packed up the things and books marked for first year in his bag and ran up, realizing he was still clad in his towel, forgetting to get dressed in excitement. But today he ran into his parents' room, walking in he felt a little sad at seeing the lonely room and some wrinkled sheets lying on the bed. He hadn't made the bed up ever since this room lay vacant, it gave him a little remembrance for his parents. "I'm going to the academy today too, San, wish me luck," he whispered to the walls and walked to the closet in the room. Instantly he saw clothes stacked up in rows neatly in a layered way, having 3 rows of them ranging from all sizes. His father bought clothes and either wore them once or simply kept them in storage, since he didn't like them when it finally became the time to wear them. So they were mostly in pristine condition, thus the reason he never got worried for buying any clothes. But he dared no touch anything that looked like it had seen some life. Those were precious and he cherished them for life. He picked out a brand new looking white full-sleeved shirt with a high collar, having emblazoned the Uchiha symbol on each of its ends and a small emboss near the back nape of his neck. He put on a pair of blue pants and some blue sandals to go along with them. This was apparently the look he had seen his father wear in pictures, and it made him happy he could look like him even just a little to try and imitate the man. He swung his side back on by his waist and ran down to see the cub waving its tail while waiting for him at the doorstep. He picked the cute thing up in his arms and brought her to eye level, getting a curious stare from the cub who leaned closer and licked his nose to get a giggle out of him. "Alright girl, now I'll be back by evening. I've put the milk in the kitchen in your usual bowl for lunch and some spare meat I cooked for my sandwiches. So take care of the house while I'm gone and don't make a mess of the place, Kay?" he asked, but got a simple tilt of the head to the side while she licked her nose with a yawn, no doubt oblivious to his words. He let out a soft sigh and dropped a fur ball down on her feet, who ran into his room, no doubt to sleep, and he walked out, shaking his head with a smile. At least someone waved him off from home on his first day, he couldn't help but think in happiness and ran into his clan streets towards the academy with an extra hop to his step. He couldn't even care less for all the snide remarks and looks being sent his way when he ventured out of his clan grounds, he was just too happy to be bothered by them. The Ninja Academy. Naruto walked up to the main gates of the academy but was surprised when he turned the corner only to see the whole area in front of the gates completely barren and devoid of life. He had expected many children and their parents to wave them off and he checked the time on a street's clock to see he wasn't late. It was still 9 and they were supposed to be at the academy timings at 9:30, so he was a little early in fact. He walked into the building, looking around the hallways which were going to be a big part of his life for the next few years with unbridled curiosity. His heart soared when he heard the several hushed voices coming through the closed doors, making him smile. He walked to the assigned room number he was given when Tobirama had given him his assigned form and took a deep breath, standing outside the door with a smile. He slid it open, instantly turning nervous when he saw the population residing in the room clearly wasn't what he was expecting. The parents were in there too along with their children and all eyes were on him as soon as he opened the door. But he saw most of them narrowing their eyes at him after a moment and he looked down a bit to ignore them, but it still hurt him to see those on his first day. "Can I help you, young man?" He was startled by a male voice when a man wearing a green vest and shinobi clothes along with the village's headband stood in front of him with a start. Though he did smile a small relieved smile seeing the man's warm smile and kind eyes looking on at him in pure curiosity. He pulled out his signed form, handing it to the man who took it with a curt nod. "I am assigned to this class, sir." He spoke softly and as politely as he could, making the man smile. He turned his eyes back to the blonde with a raised eyebrow. "Then why are you so late? All children were supposed to be here an hour earlier with their parents for an introductory orientation. Didn't the lady handing out the forms inform your parents of this?" he asked, making Naruto look at his feet and shake his head negatively. "I don't have any parents and my form wasn't taken from the academy, sir, someone gave me an extra." He answered the man's question in his soft voice, making the man turn a bit saddened at his reply. An orphan, such a small age at that, he thought sadly and nodded at the boy. He looked onto the details of the form he was handed. He rose an eyebrow reading his clan name, quite happy he had got an Uchiha to teach. Though they did narrow in dangerously on the paper when he read his father's name on the sloppily filled paper. His gaze turned up to the boy, now with a slight glare, instead of the warm eyes he had treated him earlier with. "He is related to them, huh?" he thought venomously, while the blonde boy in question was now looking at his feet to avoid those venomous eyes glaring at him. He put the form down for him to take back. "Go and take a seat." He spoke dismissively while Naruto trotted away from the man who wasn't the least bit amused at his presence right now. Instantly his heart broke, seeing all the parents and guardians pulling their children away from him harshly, as if he were the plague. His eyes watered hearing their hushed whispers telling their children how he was a bad boy and to stay away from him since he was nothing but trouble like his forefathers before him. He stood all alone in a corner and stared at his bag with a bitten lip to control his tears from falling. The teacher told them all to take a seat when the bell rang and the parents started making their way out. He walked up, instantly seeing all the children covering the seat by their sides with their things so that he could not sit with them. He ignored them all and walked up into the corner seat by the window with a small sad smile. "Looks like I won't be making any friends anytime soon," he thought sadly, looking up when the teacher opened up his register and started calling out rolls. He looked out the window at the bird's nest in the tree, knowing his name would be in the end, with his surname being Uchiha. Swish clack. Huff, huff. Naruto looked back, his cheek resting in his palm at the sudden commotion that had made its way to the door of their classroom curiously. It was a huffing blonde girl, with hair a little less golden than him and hazelnut honey brown eyes. She was wearing a simple white thigh-length kimono, and her hair were done up in a high ponytail. "Sorry sensei, I slept it," she mumbled her apology quickly, panting while she walked in and handed the man her scrunched up form. He read it and his eyes perked up when he read her surname along with her parents' and guardians' names in it. He handed her the form back with a smile, forgetting any and all scolding or punishment from the shock of having just had the heir to the prestigious Enju clan walking in. She trudged up the steps, seeing a couple of empty seats by some children still available. The first one had a boy with a smug and prideful smile, along with 2 red tattoos marking his cheeks. She ignored it and walked up, leaving a seething Inyazuka there who was quite angry at being dismissed so simply. She saw yet another seat, this time belonging by a boy who had the classiconics black eyes and hair and that same high almighty attitude she knew too well about. Uchiha, she thought with a frown, and ignored this seat almost immediately. Her eyes scanned the room, finally resting on the back corner of the class where a blonde-haired boy sat with peculiar baby blue eyes she hadn't ever seen before. Though she did smile at having found a seat for herself and hopped in by his side with a grin. Naruto looked on surprised when the girl took a seat by his side instead of all the other vacant ones. But he was even more surprised when she placed her bag in her desk sloppily, with its handle half hanging out, and turned her gaze to him with a wide smile. "Hi, I'm Tsunade Senju. Nice to meet you," she trailed off, putting her hand forward for him to shake. Naruto had a wide smile himself as he looked on at the offered hand and nodded, beaming in joy. "I'm Naruto Uchiha. Nice to meet you too." He trailed off halfway in his words when the girl pulled her hand back with a huff. He pulled his hand back and looked away towards the window to hide his misty eyes, filled with unshed tears, threatening to break free of their confines. She hated him too as soon as she knew his name. He didn't glance in her direction for the fear of aggravating her any further than he already might have done. Tsunade was surprised when the boy had extended his hand along with an introduction, even after hearing her full name. But she wasn't going to be falling for any pranks or snide remarks from him, those damned Uchiha kids always did that with her, and she hated them with a passion. She did feel a little sad though when she caught sight of his sad gaze while he stared out the window. She had half expected some sort of arrogant remark or Reaver's taunt, but nothing of the sort came from the boy. He sat in silence with her doing the same and looking back to the front with a blank face. Her day couldn't start off any worse than. "Tsunade Senju." The voice rang in the room, making her ears perk up at her teacher's call, and she called out a hi and concentrated on the man now. "Naruto Uchiha." She couldn't help but see the small glare the teacher sent her side partner's way when the boy mumbled a soft hi and looked away. "Alright class, we'll start with some history lessons today," the teacher called out, making Tsunade let out groan inwardly. She hated history with a passion, it made her sleep when her granduncle tried to drill their clan history into her thick skull. The teacher went through his textbook lesson while she tried not to pull her hair out in frustration to not fall asleep from that thrice damned history lecture. Her cheeks puffed up childishly in annoyance, seeing many of the kids around her had already dozed off halfway through the long lecture and turned her eyes to her side. Her eyebrow rose in surprise at seeing her partner paying rapt attention to the lecture, as if it was the most interesting thing he had done all morning, and she frowned seeing him jot down little notes in his notebook in between the teacher's pauses. "Only these stupid Uchihas can pay so much attention to these boring lectures," she pouted to herself and slammed her head on her desk to keep herself awake through the lecture. Naruto opened up his book for reference, seeing many little side notes made there which were quite helpful to him, as well as gave him some additional knowledge on the topics being explained, while he kept up with both the book and his sensei in full attention. The teacher looked up when he heard a small yawn, only to see half his class asleep, and sighed tiredly. Well, he couldn't expect anything else in a history lesson, he supposed. Ring. The bell rang, making all the children jerk awake in unison when the teacher snapped his book shut and told them of the taijutsu lessons after the lunch break was over. Naruto packed his books and took out his sandwich, unwrapping the plastic wrapping, and munched a soft bite out of his self-made lunch. Everyone pulled out their homemade lunches and bentos. Tsunade grinned, taking out her back and popping her hand in to pull out the bento her mother had made for her. Her eyebrows furrowed while she rummaged for her lunch, only for it to turn into a full-blown scowl before her face marred one of pure horror. She remembered her mother calling out to her and keeping her lunch on the table, but she didn't remember herself putting it in while she was running around the house due to being so late. She slammed her head on the desk and let out a soft sigh. She had forgotten it at home. Naruto looked to the side after hearing her sigh and was a little confused as to why the girl hadn't brought out her lunch yet. Well, she was a little late in the morning, so. "Did you forget your lunch?" he asked nervously, making her look at him with irritated eyes. She huffed and looked away, feeling a bit embarrassed that he had pinned the reason right in on the first try. "Why do you ask? Going to compare me to the elite Uchiha?" Her snarl trailed off with an innocent blink of confusion, seeing a wrapped sandwich being forced into her hands. She looked at him stunned. No one else had bothered asking why she wasn't eating, except for offering her to sit with them, that she had refused as politely as she could in her hungry state. "Why are you giving me this?" she asked in a baffled voice, figuring it must be some sort of prank, while Naruto had his innocent look on her and gave her a blink of confusion. "Well, we do have taijutsu lessons after lunch," he pointed out, making her nod, but not quite getting his point. "So it will have a lot of physical training, and you'll need our energy. You wouldn't be able to go through them on an empty stomach. I brought an extra with me in case I got late for home, so you can have it if you want," he told her, and went back to munching on his sandwich in silence. The silence was eating away at Tsunade's heart while she stared at the food in her hands with a bitten lip. The guilt was eating away on her now. She hadn't even talked to him nicely, yet he was the only one kind enough to see her plight and offer her his food. "I'm sorry," she mumbled in a soft whisper, her cheeks pink in embarrassment at having to apologize to a classmate on her first day. Naruto though didn't hear her whisper in the whole loud racket in their class and looked on at her curiously. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, can you repeat it?" he trailed off, seeing her glare at him with her puffed out cheeks. I said I'm sorry for treating you the way that I did, alright? She asked quickly, her face turning tomato red from the effort it took to get out an apology out of her heart. But don't expect me to repeat it, she mumbled in an embarrassed voice, making the boy blink in confusion. Why he want to do that? Because I won't, get it? She asked him sternly and he merely nodded dumbly, not quite getting why she was getting so hyper. Maybe she was a lot hungry, he answered to himself intelligently and munched on in silence. And thank you for sharing your food with me, she mumbled as an afterthought, this time surprising him. No one had ever thanked him before, so it did embarrass him a little, and he merely nodded timidly, munching on his lunch with a smile. Tsunade dug in her sandwich, and her eyes widened in surprise at the strange burst of flavors in her mouth. It was unlike anything she had ever had before, a bit weird but still nice. She thought it was perfect a moment later and devoured the sandwich hungrily. She choked on a large bite a bit at the end and gulped down the offered water bottle half in a single gulp while patting her chest. Naruto smiled that she liked his cooking, as little as he knew for himself, and kept going through his own at a slow albeit calm pace. So why aren't you being mean to me? She asked, making him stop in his small bites and look at her with a confused look, his head tilted to show his confusion quite clearly to her. I'm sorry I don't get you, he said cutely after a moment of silence between them, and she merely stared at him incredulously. You're an Uchiha, right? She asked, pointing to him with her finger for emphasis of her point, getting a nod from the boy. And I'm a Senju? She asked yet again, getting yet another nod from the boy who remembered her name from the morning introduction but wasn't seeing her point. He stared on at her innocently while she was staring at him expectantly for a sudden breakthrough. Sorry, but I'm still not getting you. He finally said to break the thick silence, making her head drop tiredly. Was she going to have to explain everything around here? Our clans have been enemies for generations, so all Uchiha kids try to bully me or play pranks on me. So in a rap they are plain old mean to me, why aren't you doing the same? She asked him curiously while he merely bit down his last bite while popping open his bottle for a drink. Well, you haven't done anything to me, so being mean to you just for being a Senju is quite stupid. He said simply, and she was surprised at his simple yet deep words. She grinned and shook her hands free off the breadcrumbs to extend it for a shake when he finished drinking water from his bottle and popped it close. Then I guess we can be friends, so let's start again. I'm Tsunade Senju, nice to meet ya. She chirped up happily, making the boy smile. He wiped his hands with his handkerchief, making her quite embarrassed that she hadn't done the same, but she had probably forgotten that at home too, she thought in silent embarrassment when he shook her hand with a grin. I'm Naruto Uchiha, it's nice to meet you too. He said in a chipper tone, making her grin and nod when they finally shook hands at the start of a new friendship. Alright class, it's time for your first Jujutsu lesson, so everybody come out now. The teacher called out from the door, making them all start to walk out with Naruto and Tsunade walking out together in the back. Hanahagakure no Sado. The Noha Ninja Academy. All the fresh admissions of the academy students stood in the open clearing they were led into by their new instructor. The teacher picked up on his clipboard, having the names and details of all the new students in his palms. He coughed to get the attention of them all, getting quite successful when all the wide and curious eyes turned to him. Alright, this is the first day of our regular weekly academy Jujutsu spars we'll have from now on. Now before we begin, go and run a couple of laps around the academy for a little warm-up. He spoke up, getting nods from them. All the students starting running with Naruto and Tsunade flanking the back of the group. Why do we have to huff run for this? Tsunade asked, huffing in her jog after they had taken a complete round of the academy grounds, which were quite large in themselves. We have to warm up so we don't hurt ourselves in the spars, plus we just had lunch, so sensei must want us to warm up first. Naruto answered calmly, not at all fazed at running the laps they were ordered. He thanked his little furry friend for that, she could be quite a handful, so he was quite used to running laps behind the agile feline. You huff have an answer for everything, huff, don't you? She asked in annoyance, her breathing a bit labored but not losing as much as a speck of speed. Naruto though didn't quite get her point at this. Huh? He asked intelligently, making Tsunade try to sigh, but instead she panted and shook her head. Naruto just looked on ahead with a nod when the end came and Tsunade collapsed onto her knees from exhaustion. Naruto himself placed his palms on them and took deep breaths to calm down the blood rush. Alright class, that was very nice for your first day, I'm glad all of you completed your laps. The teacher's proud voice rang in the clearing, getting smiles from them all. Now come on and gather up around the ring, he said, and all of them stood up shakily, completely exhausted from running, while Naruto straightened up with a deep breath. He saw Tsunade still sitting and not looking to get up anytime soon and smiled at his lone friend sprawled on the ground right now. Come on, let's go. He said softly, extending his hand while placing the other hand on his knee with a soft smile. Tsunade looked up, brushing her flailing bangs from her face to look into the twinkling baby blue eyes, as well as the outstretched hand in front of her. But for the first time she noticed how pretty his eyes were, not at all like all the other Uchiha's plain black eyes, and put her own hand in his with a grin. He pulled her up and she dusted her kimono off when she caught him in a headlock, much to his confusion. She couldn't let him think she wasn't able to get up on her own after all. "That doesn't mean I couldn't get up on my own, get it?" she asked sternly, making him a little confused yet again, but he nodded dumbly, figuring that was the best thing to do right now. She grinned and nodded, placing her hands behind her back with a cheeky smile, and walked along with him to the sparring ring. "Now children, I'll introduce all of you to the sacred tradition of shinobi hand-to-hand combat. These were used by our Hokages themselves to toughen them up," he said, perking up most of the ears around the ring. "We will go through one-on-one paired combat exercises to simulate a situation of real combat and let you have the experience needed when you further your shinobi careers. I'll explain the rules along with the spar, so can Ensui Nara and Hayasu Hyuga please enter the ring?" he called out, and the two boys stepped in the ring. One with his hair in a high albeit lazily tied ponytail, while the other had his clan's signature pupil-less wide eyes to signify his clan status for him. "Alright, now both of you raise your hand like this," he showed them a half-ram seal in front of his chest, and both copied the man. "This is called the seal of confrontation. It usually marks the beginning of a jutsu, so it signifies your willingness to fight an opponent. When you end the spar you both clasp the seals together as a mark of goodwill and friendship to your opponent. This is called the seal of reconciliation. So now, do the both of you get this much?" he asked the two, instead getting nods from the all of them around the ring in unison. "So now I'll explain the rules of engagement. The fight ends either when the opponent is put in a position where he can't fight back. No weapons or jutsus except kunes can be used, and that too for only hand-to-hand combat. No maiming or fatal blows to harm your opponent are allowed. The person who steps outside the ring loses automatically too, and I can step in at any moment to stop a spar if I see someone is going to get hurt. Do I make myself clear?" he asked sternly, getting nods from the two boys, and smiled, raising his hand. "Then let's have an honorable first spar, Hajime," he called out with Hayasuke dropping in his usual gentle fist stance. Though all of them were confused when Ensui turned around and started walking away until he was finally outside the ring. Thick silence reigned in the clearing at the strange actions of the Nara boy. "Ensui, what are you doing?" the teacher finally asked the boy, who merely let out a lazy yawn and shrugged. "You said that stepping out of bounds signifies defeat, sensei, so I willingly lost since one of us must lose for this troublesome spar to end. It is merely logical for me to do so, to end it as quickly as possible, more so since it is too much work," he mumbled, lazily scratching his head, making the teacher slap his hand over his face. Everyone snickered at the teacher's expense, who decided to let it go since this was only the first day. And it wasn't surprising for someone from the Nara clan to do this, they were renowned for it actually. "Alright, just please make the seal of reconciliation before you go, if that is not too much work." "That is," the teacher said dryly, and sighed tiredly when they did. Though Hayasuke did have a small scowl on his face at not getting his spar as he had wanted to, but said nothing in the end, and both walked out. The teacher rummaged through the list and smiled when he read the next two names out loud. "Akio Inyazuka and Jin Uchiha, step into the ring please," his voice rang out through the silence of the clearings. The two boys in question stepped forward, their faces completely polar opposites to that of their opponent. Akio had simple shaggy brown hair with the classic red Inyazuka tattoos donned over his cheeks. His teeth, having two feral canines like all the Inyazukas, were displayed on show with his smug and prideful grin. Jin, on the other hand, was an Uchiha straight through to the textbook. The boy had the signature onyx black eyes with matching spiky raven hair of his clan. The boy's eyes looked bored while his face was stoic, trying to hide the little excitement that came at the prospect of facing his first opponent in combat. "Alright, today's my day. I get to beat an Uchiha down into the ground on my very first day, talk about luck." Akio boasted proudly, but frowned when he heard a scoff from his opponent. As if Jin muttered, but Akio's sharp ears picked up on his whisper, and he scowled. "You've got something to say?" he growled out heatedly, getting yet another snort from the ever-stoic Uchiha. "I said as if a mutt like you could ever even hope to touch me, an Uchiha. We are called the elites of the village for a reason, and I'll show the reason to you right now," he stated confidently, without a hint of doubt in his voice, making the Inyazuka glare at him. His fangs were bared while he looked ready to rip his head apart if need be. "We'll just see about that," he spoke angrily, dropping into the first kata of the Inyazuka's widely known Fang Taijutsu style. "That we will," Jin spoke up, entering the most basic of Uchiha clan's many Taijutsu stances. The Uchiha clan had seemingly created many stances over the years by embedding many of their copied stances and modifying them to be used with their sharingan. Only a select few still use the original and ancient stances of the old times that belonged purely to them now, most of them being considered long since forgotten, so seemingly every Uchiha fought in a different way than the other to appear deceptive and unpredictable to enemy shinobi. Alright, that's enough, break it off you two. Now make the seal of confrontation, the teacher ordered and nodded when the two boys did so, albeit a bit reluctantly in Jin's case. He pulled his hand up over his head and brought it down to signal the start of the match. Hajime's voice rang through the clearing and Akio was off in a flash. He charged forward with a battle cry, rushing his opponent by running towards him. Jin merely stood fast in his own stance, letting the boy make the first move and have his fun while he was at it. Akio cocked his fist back behind his head and brought it forward. Jin merely slapped it away with the back of his hand to let it whiz past his ear and blocked his left fist with his own right palm. The raven-haired kid went to put a huge uppercut under his chin and seemingly end the match, but the Inyazuka jumped back a couple of steps to break off their little bout. Jin yet again dropped into his defensive stance and put his palm in front of his face. His hand made a motion to his opponent to urge him to attack. Akio saw his taunt coupled with his arrogant smirk and the Inyazuka clan's legendary temper kicked in. All he saw was red. He charged forward, jumping up and aiming a kick for the Uchiha's neck. Jin brought his right arm up and blocked it with his forearm, aiming for his opponent's torso with his free left hand. The blow being quite weak from the lack of precision the completely angered boy was putting behind it. Akio, still unbalanced from his angered and blind charge, could do nothing more than watch the incoming strike to his stomach and brace for impact while he landed on his feet with a little stumble. Jin mustered up all his strength into the strike, twisting his wrist and embedding his fist into the boy's solar plexus, who stumbled back a couple of feet and fell to his knees, clutching his aching stomach with an agonized cough. Jin ran in and jumped up, twisting his body in midair to make his right heel make contact with the feral boy's cheek, who rolled sideways and out of the ring's boundary line. Clap clap clap. The whole audience around the ring clapped for the two, especially the teacher who was pretty loud and felt proud to have such a great spar on seemingly his first day. Excellent, you two, I couldn't be prouder to see such an excellent spar on our first day. Jin, you were especially excellent, not that I could expect anything less from a member of the Uchiha clan. The teacher said, pride evident in his voice. The raven soaked it all in with a slight puff of his chest and walked back with an arrogant smirk. Sugoi Jin-kun, that was so awesome. Many girls squealed in delight with stars in their eyes. He walked back into the crowd, walking past Naruto with a slight bump to his shoulder. Eat that dead last, he taunted in a voice only meant for Naruto, which he promptly ignored and shrugged off his bump as if it was nothing. Ugh, Naruto turned back on hearing the sound of a small thump and saw Jin lying sprawled face first on the ground. He merely tilted his head to the side in confusion as to why he would do that when he saw the boy get up with his dirt-covered front, glaring heatedly at Tsunade, who was whistling innocently while playing with her toe, drawing circles in the ground in all the innocence of the world. You might want to get up, Uchiha, or you might ruin the proud Uchiha clan's name, she said in an all too innocent voice, making the boy growl and clench his fists tightly. Everyone around them snickered, other than Naruto that is, who was still trying to figure out what was going on between the two. I won't forget this, Enju Jin said angrily and got up, dusting himself off, while Tsunade stuck her tongue out playfully to further annoy the already annoyed Uchiha. She felt a tug on her sleeve and looked to the side to see a quite confused Naruto looking at her questionably. What happened? Why is he so angry at you, Tsunade? Naruto asked in a lost voice, making the girl smile cheekily. She patted his cheek playfully and shook her head while the raven-haired boy walked off to the side and a ways away from them to maintain his distance. Nothing for you to worry about. She chirped happily, hiding the fact about sticking her foot out when that annoying Uchiha had bumped into her new friend to get back at him. Tsunade took nothing from annoying Uchihas without a payback, people. So why was he being such a pest to you? You two know each other or something? She asked curiously while the teacher was taking the Inyazuka boy to the infirmary to get him some checkups and rest for a little while. Naruto nodded his affirmative at knowing the boy. Jin and I have met in the past in our clan grounds. He hangs out with other kids from our clan, he explained, getting a scowl from Tsunade. She didn't want to tell him that he was the team that was on the top of her bullies to beat list and merely nodded, motioning for him to go on. Well, they don't like me hanging out with him, so I always keep my distance from him. He explained and got a nod from the girl who could see his point. She wouldn't want anything to do with that annoying brat as well. But he especially doesn't like me since I wear the Uchiha clan symbol on my clothes so early while he cannot and is always trying to show me up in front of others, he spoke as an afterthought, getting a confused look from Tsunade. She looked on closely on his collars to see his clan symbol and even the one on the back of his neck and then glanced at the brooding boy who had none whatsoever on his plain dark blue clothes. What's wearing a clan symbol got to do with you two? She asked in a completely lost voice, making Naruto confused too. Then he remembered not many people outside of their clan knew of their traditions and nodded to himself, further confusing the girl. Right, you wouldn't know, but not anyone can wear our clan symbol just like that. It is a matter of pride for our clan to wear it on our clothes and represent our clan in front of others. Only those who have passed our rite of passage can wear it on themselves after getting the approval of any one clan elder. He explained calmly, getting a nod from the girl, who had her finger over her chin while she absorbed the new information in. Then her eyes went to the clan symbols donned on his clothes. "So you have passed this rite of passage and he hasn't?" she asked curiously and got a simple nod from the boy, making her grin and catch him in a headlock. "Cool." She chirped happily, ruffling his hair while he tried to shake the excited girl off. Then another thought ran through her mind, making her let go off the boy, who sighed in relief and straightened out his shirt slowly. "What is this rite of passage thing anyways?" she asked him curiously, making him smile at the ever-curious girl. "It is a small ritual of sorts that all Uchiha have done since ancient times. The Uchiha clan doesn't deem their members worthy to wear the clan symbol until they master the fireball jutsu completely and show it to an elder of the clan, who then gives them his approval to wear our symbol on our clothes. I completed it a month ago and showed it to Kagami Aji-san, who gave me his approval. Jin hasn't yet, so he doesn't like it very much that I can wear it while he cannot." He trailed off, seeing the glittering eyes of Tsunade looking at him proudly, and stood there confused when she caught his shoulders in her hands tightly. "You can shoot awesome cool fireballs from your mouth?" she asked in barely contained excitement, making the boy quite confused at her sudden perking up, but he nodded dumbly. She was quite impulsive, he told himself, and nodded inwardly in a sage-like manner. "You should so do it in your spar, I bet everyone will be amazed," and the look on that Baka's face, Tsunade giggled mischievously, making the boy quite confused, yet a little worried, seeing her strange laugh and rubbing of her palms, together with a spaced-out look on her face. He put his palm on her forehead and the other one on his own, making the girl snap out of her little daytime fantasy to look at the worried eyes of her blue eyes friend. "Your temperature seems fine," Naruto mumbled to himself and nodded, making the girl become agitated at his innocent insinuation. "Boy," she said indignantly, but the boy didn't hear her and shook his head yet again in deep thought while he went over her idea. "Anyways, I can't do it in the spar," he said, making her pout cutely. "And why not?" she asked in an irritated voice, making him sigh softly at his short-tempered friend. "It would be so awesome to see him burn up his opponent," she mused, grinning mischievously. She could just imagine the teacher and that Jin Baka's face when he did something so awesome. Once more she felt a hand on her forehead, which then moved to her cheek while she looked at a worried Naruto having a palm on his own forehead to check her temperature. "Maybe we should take you to the infirmary," he mumbled, quite worried, seeing her strange expressions making her eye twitch. She bonked his head softly, which he rubbed with much added confusion. "Why won't you do it?" she asked, trying to change the topic and save herself any further embarrassment from the innocently oblivious blonde friend of hers. "Sensei said we can't use any ninjutsu, remember?" he asked, making her pout yet again. She was about to open her mouth to say that rules can be bent every once in a while when he continued on. "Plus, I can hurt my sparring partner by doing that. That won't be nice," he whispered to himself, making her pout increase with a slight puff of her cheeks. She tried to come up with a retort and opened her mouth before closing it wordlessly, and in the end just kept up her pout. "Feel joy," she mumbled, sulking at having her awesome plan failed before it could even begin, and now Naruto felt bad at making her so sad. He didn't want his only friend to be sad all because of him, and poked her arm cutely to get her attention. "But I can show you after the academy if you want to see it so much," he asked to make her feel a little better, and instantly all her sadness lay forgotten when she grinned and nodded. "Yeah, we'll do that. So now let's beat up our opponents, and then you can spout some cool fireballs for me all evening long." She cheered happily, raising her fist up in happiness. Naruto was confused and wondered what to do when he raised his own fist up to copy her, and she blushed in embarrassment, pulling his hand down when all the eyes around them turned to their antics. "What are you doing?" she whispered in a hushed, embarrassed voice, and he rubbed his neck sheepishly with a careless shrug, having no idea himself, and got a soft sigh from her lips. But she couldn't help but smile at his helpless smile and perked up, seeing her sensei come back from the infirmary and taking his place back in front of the ring to make all the whispers around cease momentarily. "Alright, now moving on to the next spar. He trailed off to see who was matched next, and everyone saw his narrowing of eyes before he looked back up to the all of them with a stoic blank face. "Tsukumo Haddock and Naruto Uchiha, please step into the ring," he said in a tone of finality. Naruto grew a bit nervous, hearing all the whispers and seeing all the pointed fingers, with the hushed whispers of "it's that boy" being the most prominent in them all. "Go on and show him who's boss," Tsunade chirped up, giving him a slight push on his back while he stumbled a bit but regained his balance to look at her cheery face, and all his fears lay forgotten. He hadn't really put anything into training his taijutsu up till now, only focusing on his ninjutsu to get his fireball jutsu mastered so he could wear the clothes that donned his clan symbol proudly. The most experience he had in hand-to-hand combat was from what he had read in a scroll in his personal library and remembered the katas that were pictured in it. And reading didn't do much good in physical exercises, that much he knew himself. He would have to do this one on instincts alone. He stepped into the ring to see his silver-haired opponent step in with a much too serious look on his face. For Tsukumo, he had heard of the Uchiha clan's feared reputation in combat around the whole village by several adults, and from what he had seen in the previous spar, he was expecting his opponent to be just as, if not, even more lethal. Though he saw the blonde boy in front of him take a deep breath to calm his nerves down and smiled seeing his nervousness. "Let's have a good match." Tsukumo spoke up, breaking the nervous silence between them by extending his hand for the blonde to shake as a show of some good sportsman spirit before the match, unlike the previous one. Naruto smiled, albeit a bit nervously, and clasped the offered hand in a shake when they all heard a shout from the crowd. "Go Naruto, kick his ass." Tsunade shouted happily from the sidelines while shaking her hand to cheer him on, gaining incredulous looks from her not-so-minced words, as well as the fact that the Senju princess herself was rooting for the village pariah proudly in front of everyone. Naruto looked a little embarrassed at the amused smile marred on the face of his opponent. "You have quite an interesting friend there," he said, not all hiding the mirth laced in his voice, and Naruto nodded sheepishly. "Yeah, she's a bit impulsive," he said, agreeing with him wholeheartedly. "Boy. I heard that." Tsunade shouted indignantly from the sidelines, while Naruto rubbed his neck sheepishly at his frowning friend and nodded his head apologetically before she smiled and started rooting for him again. "Alright, now make the seal of confrontation," the teacher finally interjected to break their antics. Both boys held the seal in front of their chest before Tsukumo dropped into his clan's classically balanced stance of being a bit offensive as well as defensive. Naruto tried to imitate the stance he had seen in his scroll, much to the confusion of all the crowd surrounding him. "Alright, calm yourself down. Right palm open forward, straight in front of your chest to avoid any and all incoming blows from your opponent. Keep your left palm back, curled up halfway to either block the following attack and counter-attack with your right or simply counter with your left if not the case." He recited the first paragraph in the scroll and spread his legs a bit to further his balance as per the instructions and prayed to Kami. This worked out for him a little. Meanwhile, in the balcony on the second floor's hallways in the academy, two figures stood there, their elbows resting on the railing, while their seasoned and veteran eyes stared at the battlefield. "So why are we here again?" The man standing to the right with a stoic yet slightly bored expression on his face asked. "To watch the inaugural fights of the academy year, what else?" The man by his side answered his query equally stoically and almost instantly getting a grunt of exasperation from his partner. "Well, we haven't done this any time in the past," he retorted dryly, quite annoyed at wasting his time here, seeing kids fight it out. "There's a first time for everything then." The stoic man by his side retorted, making the man by his side glance at him curiously. "You're getting old, Tobirama." The slightly bored man spoke, making the current reigning Hokage without an ounce of fear in his eyes at who it was that he was talking to. "I'm not old," Tobirama retorted, almost offended at the prospect of having his age mentioned. He wasn't old, he was merely well past his prime, yeah, that was it. The man by his side, much to his annoyance, merely chuckled a humorous laugh while shaking his head and lighting up a cigar with a small snap of his fingers to take a small puff of smoke. "This is what old people like us do, pass their time while looking at those who would surpass us one day and take our reins from us when our time finally comes. To nurture one so young with all the care we can offer, that is our duty as adults of the village," the man spoke, his voice suddenly serious and the wizened words laced with an air of experience. "And you call me old?" Tobirama murmured in an annoyed voice, clearly not at all happy at being called old. It was the only thing that got on his nerves, and not many had the nerve to talk to him with a straight face, much less how his partner was taking to him. The man by the Hokage's side merely pulled back his breath to inhale the smoke and let out yet another silent puff before the cigar rested expertly in between his fingers. Both adults watched the first true fight in the rings come to an end, and Tobirama scoffed. Typical Inuzuka clan members, easily riled up and lose their heads before the fight even begins. Stupidity runs in their genetics, he said, not at all impressed by the fight, while the man standing by his side nodded in agreement. He ran his hand through his shaggy brown hair, his cold black eyes narrowed at the boy exiting the ring on his own feet. Typical Uchiha, all arrogant on a style seemingly bastardized off of some other true taijutsu stance for their almighty sharingan, only to make themselves seem original and deceptive. "How far has the great clan fallen from its true glory?" he commented dryly, getting a grunt of agreement from Tobirama. The brown-haired man chuckled, seeing Tsunade trip the Uchiha when he bumped into the blonde boy by her side on purpose to get back on him. "She's Hashirama's granddaughter, alright, part Senju part Uzumaki," he chuckled, seeing her stick her tongue out at the seething Uchiha, who went off while red-faced in embarrassment and anger. Tobirama let out a tired sigh and palmed his face at her antics. He had to make her take a course to handle herself a bit better, lest she get into trouble all the time. Though the shaggy white-haired man did perk up at the mention of the second name in the announcement of the next fight. The man by his side glanced to his side, watching the Hokage lean forward with eyes that had a hidden gleam of excitement, making him smirk knowingly. "So finally the fight you dragged me here for," he commented pointedly, and Tobirama frowned at being read so easily. It was a wound to his pride as being hailed a man who was a master at hiding his emotions and completely unreadable to his opponents. That blonde boy was going to ruin his reputation soon enough like this. His partner followed his fixated gaze to the blonde boy shaking hands with his opponent, and his eyes narrowed on the small symbol embossed near the back nape of his neck, making him raise an eyebrow and lean a bit forward himself. Well, already donning the Uchiha clan symbol on him, eh? I can see why he intrigues you so much. This should prove to be not as boring as the other one. He spoke, clearly a little interested himself, getting seemingly no reaction from the Hokage. He glanced once more to his side, only to raise an eyebrow at seeing Tobirama's slightly wide eyes. He turned his eyes back to see what had gotten him so shocked, only for him to copy his expression a moment later. His cigar dropped from his mouth in shock at seeing the boy entering a sloppy stance of the taijutsu style they hadn't seen in action for quite some time now. "Isn't that," he murmured, still in shock, and Tobirama nodded numbly. Too shocked himself to care about his lack of masking emotions. "The interceptor fist. The original taijutsu style of the Uchiha clan," he murmured, nostalgia kicking in both of their minds, while their faces lit up with small proud smirks. Both their gazes rested on the crest embossed on his shirt now. "He certainly does his heritage proud," the brown-haired man murmured, getting a curt nod from Tobirama. The proud smirk still not going off his face. "But he does," he agreed, though his partner still couldn't get one thing. Where the hell did he come across that style? Wasn't Madara the last one to inherit it, and it was seemingly lost with him? He asked and once more got a nod from Tobirama. Though he did have a pretty good guess where the blonde might have come across such a powerful style. "I have no idea," he lied smoothly, getting narrowed glances from his partner who had caught onto his lie, but said nothing in the end. Now quite a lot interested in the fight himself, and let out a small puff of smoke. Back in the sparring center. Tsukumo rose an eyebrow, seeing the peculiar and seemingly quite useless taijutsu stance the blonde had dropped in. It had so many holes in it that it wasn't even funny. It would most probably need godly instincts to block all the attacks that would enter his guard virtually in no time whatsoever. Though he kept the comments to himself, it would be an insult to question a fighter about his abilities on the style he uses. He dropped in his own stance, legs widely stretched with both arms in a forward guard to either defend or block at virtually the same time. The teacher saw straight through the holes in that style, though didn't comment on them, quite content to watch the brat humiliate himself in front of everybody. He pulled his hand up as a gesture to get ready, and both nodded at seemingly the same time when he brought it down, the whole clearing now in thick silence to await the pending fight. "Hajime," he finally called out, and Tsukumo took this as his cue to charge his opponent head first and take the first hit and flow of the spar right from the start. His feet jogged through the small distance between them quickly, and he wanted to exploit that huge gap in his guard up front right from the beginning and end it as quickly as he could. He closed the distance between them quickly, slowing down when he was within arm's reach of the blonde who still stood as calm as a rock, and let him come in for the strike. Tsukumo slid his right foot in to get into his guard when Naruto mirrored his movement and slid his left foot back, almost instantly negating Tsukumo's attempt. Though the silver-haired boy was having none of it, as was shown when he slid his left foot in a small arc into his guard, and once more Naruto slid his right foot back in the same arc to mirror his movement and render his charge virtually useless. Tsukumo finally had enough and brought his left fist near his waist and pulled it forward to Naruto's stomach, which was blocked by Naruto's right palm easily. He cocked his right fist back to follow up and pulled his left back when Naruto blocked it with his left palm quite efficiently. He twisted his body in a 360-degree motion to bring his left elbow for Naruto's gut, which was caught by both of Naruto's crossed palms, to brace for the force behind his blow. Tsukumo brought his left knee up to his waist and pushed it towards the blonde's right bicep, who curled up his arm to block it with his forearm and put his hand behind the limb to brace for the strength behind it. Tsukumo's eyes widened in horror when he saw the blonde boy smirk ever so slightly and realized how open his own guard was now, while he was trying to penetrate his opponent's seemingly impenetrable defense. Naruto crouched down on his right knee, circling his body in a 270-degree arc to swipe off the boy's lone right leg from underneath him, as was the counter he had read about in the scroll he had found in his grandfather's personal library section. Only hours of practice gave Tsukumo the required time to hop a little and let the not-so-smooth swipe pass underneath him harmlessly while he stumbled back, a little off balance, which wasn't lost to the blonde. Naruto stood up straight and rushed ahead, cocking his left fist back and pushed it forward to the silver-haired boy's face. Tsukumo tilted his head to the side, letting it slide past harmlessly, and Naruto pulled it back, following up with his right, which was slapped back by Tsukumo. Tsukumo saw him twist himself in a complete circle, and through his previous spars at home, he knew what would follow next, so he knew his chance was now. Naruto pushed his arm in a horizontal arc to aim for Tsukumo's cheek, but only met thin air, and his eyes widened in shock. Where is he? His thought trailed off midway when a strong swipe from underneath him took his legs away and dropped him flat on his back. He coughed when his back and head hit the rough ground harshly, not used to the sudden blows in spars, and felt his arm being caught in a hand when his eyes were closed momentarily. Tsukumo twisted his arm and threw him around to make him fall down face first on the ground and painfully put it near his spine, getting a moan of pain from his opponent to make him stop lest he snap it. He flicked out a kunai from his holster and placed it on the blonde's neck to signify his defeat cleanly to the instructor who called the match. And that's the match, Shasha Tsukumo Haddock. The teacher clapped proudly and Tsukumo let the blonde's arm go. Pathetic. All the attention of the crowd turned to the snide voice from the side, only to see to the source being Jin himself. Being sprawled face first in the dirt while your opponent sits on you. Even a complete loser like you shouldn't have lost so badly to someone from outside our clan. You really are a disgrace to the Uchiha clan, just like my father said you were. He finished his comment, making everyone around the boy laugh at the blonde's expense. The words pierced through Naruto's chest like a hot knife and he sat up, his hair shadowing his eyes while he clenched the dirt in his fists tightly. Like always, he didn't reply back to the taunt or the laughs. Completely oblivious to the silver-haired boy holding a seal of reconciliation for him to complete behind him. Hey kid, you alright? You're not hurt, are you? The teacher decided to add a little salt to his wound and his voice showed more of mirth than that of concern, getting another round of laughs from everyone. Sensei, not even a loser like him can be hurt from getting beaten in a single counter, Akio added smugly to add to his popularity by going with the flow of the crowd, and everyone snickered at his comment yet again. Naruto stood up and walked away, completely ignoring his opponent's confused yet worried gaze on his back. He dusted his shirt clean off the dirt and walked to the tap by the side for drinking water. He opened it up, drinking down a gulp from it before splashing some onto his face and ran his wet hand through his silky hair to make them glimmer brightly in the sun. He couldn't believe how badly he had been beaten, but not again. This was the last time, he promised himself silently. Hey, a soft girly voice called out from behind him. He turned around to see Tsunade standing there with her hands behind her back and a warm smile on her face. His hand pulled out his handkerchief and wiped off his face, staying silent to let her have her fun of taunting and making fun of him just like everyone else had done. Don't worry about them, you were awesome out there. And you'll definitely win next time, I know it. After all, we are here in the academy for quite some time now. She asked in her playful voice, making him look up surprised. She was still rooting for him. Aren't you here to make fun of me like the others? He asked her in a lost voice, only to have her frown at his words. She stomped her way towards him angrily, making him take a couple of steps back from the obviously angry girl who put her index finger on his nose to make him turn a lot more nervous than before. I let you know, I was cheering for you from start to end, Baka, she scolded him. He merely averted his eyes to the side in shame at letting her down. And never once did I laugh with them, she continued on with another poke to his nose to emphasize her point, and he looked at her with wide eyes to see the plain conviction in her eyes and behind those words. In a moment she retracted her hand back and let out her usual cheeky grin. And don't be all mopey Brady, just cause you lost K. She asked him and got a tilt of the head from him in honest confusion. She placed her hands on her hips and narrowed her eyes, making him shrink under her gaze. His mother used to do that and it was still quite effective in his mini-me of her right now. We are here for another 6 or 7 years, so what if you didn't do good and lost? You have plenty more chances to show all of them up. She said firmly with a sage-like nod, finally making him smile and nod. Amano. They heard a third voice, and Naruto looked on in confusion as his opponent from before came from behind them. He put his hand forward with 2 outstretched fingers for him to take. You didn't make the seal of reconciliation earlier as are the rules, and I don't want to ruin a tradition coming from generations on our first day here at the academy. He spoke with a smile. Naruto looked down on the outstretched hand and yet another smile broke onto his face while he nodded in return and stretched out his own hand with 2 fingers clasping his fingers in a perfect seal. It was a good match, you had me worried there for a few moments. Tsukumo spoke in an honest tone, shocking him to his core at the admiration his voice held for him. For Tsukumo, he knew the boy was strong and would get even stronger in time, it was his gut feeling. I'm not sure if we are properly introduced, I'm Tsukumo Haddock from the Haddock clan. It's nice to meet you. He said in a happy tone and extended his hand, this time for a shake and the start of a new bond of friendship between the two. Naruto once more looked down surprised at the offer of friendship and saw the genuine look in his eyes while his hand clasped the other one almost on its own. I'm Naruto Uchiha from the Uchiha clan. It's nice to meet you too. Naruto spoke in his ever-soft voice, getting a nod and a smile from his new silver-haired friend. Both stumbled when a white and blonde blur barreled into them from their side, clasping their necks with her arms. "I wanna be friends too," chirped Tsunade with a cheeky smile, and all of them laughed at her antics while she put out her tongue childishly. Sakuma looked at Naruto with a raised eyebrow. "You have quite an interesting friend indeed," he drawled out in an amused voice, and Naruto sighed softly, nodding sagely at his words. "I told you, she's a bit impulsive," he answered tiredly, and Tsunade puffed out her cheeks and raised both her arms over their heads. Bonk bonk. Kuzo, it hurts. Both Naruto and Sakuma rubbed the small lumps on their heads comically in unison, with a small teardrop in their eyes. Tsunade huffed and turned around, crossing her arms with a small scowl on her face. "You two deserved it," she mumbled firmly, making the two smile at their impulsive female friend. "Tsunade, Senju and Misa Yamanaka, please step into the rings." They heard their teacher's voice and Tsunade's ears perked up. She grinned at having had her chance finally come up and pulled the two boys behind her, almost dragging them like rag dolls behind her. "Alright, my chance." Finally at last she chirped up, forgetting her previous anger instantly. The two boys glanced at each other and sighed in unison while they were dragged back towards the crowd quite forcefully. They had an impulsive friend alright. Both drawled out inwardly and smiled as they wished her luck in her fight. Meanwhile in the balcony on the second floor's hallways in the academy. "A shame really," the brown-haired man commented, puffing out a small cloud of smoke from his lips to draw his companion's ears to him. Tobirama hummed in confusion at his words. "The blonde Uchiha, I mean." He seemingly had no experience in hand-to-hand combat before this spar. But the stance was quite clear in his mind, most probably from learning the theory behind it. He missed many chances to counter, but his defense was still strong, a little more experience, and he will be acing through the physical workouts in no time. The style was built for his body, fast and agile, requiring flexibility in maneuvers and the keenest of instincts. The boy was born with them in his palms. He will master that if he has the drive to do so, that is, he explained, making Tobirama contemplate his companion's words. "He will, he has the drive," he finally spoke, getting yet another raised eyebrow from the smoking man by his side. "Oh, you know him quite well, I presume. He intrigues you, doesn't he?" he stated more than asked, and Tobirama merely stayed silent, his silence answering the man's question completely. The smoking man though smiled, seeing the three who were by the side near the tap and seemingly nurturing a new start to some precious bonds. This was the thing they lived and fought for each day, to secure a peaceful childhood for them before they were thrust into taking up the mantle from them and trained to be shinobi. "He intrigues me too, the both of them do," he finally drawled out to break the silence that had sprawled between them when they saw Tsunade pulling them back for her turn to the ring like sacks of potatoes. This time, it was Tobirama's turn to raise an eyebrow. Though he smirked a moment later but said nothing, turning his eyes to see Tsunade's match. If it could be called so much. As soon as the match had started, Tsunade had charged and buried her fist in the other girl's stomach with all her strength. Who, in turn, had fallen unconscious. Everyone watching the match sweat dropped when Tsunade poked the girl with the tip of her foot sandals. "Boy. I didn't hit that hard, get up, I wanna fight." She poked her head again, but the girl was out cold. Tobirama and the instructor palmed their faces in unison at the girl's antics, though the former was still proud of his granddaughter to finish her spar off so early. "Sensei, I'll make the seal of reconciliation later." "She isn't making one right now," Tsunade spoke, poking her opponent yet again, as if she were a log, getting a tired nod from the teacher who picked the girl up and walked her to the infirmary with a tired sigh. He had a girl high on sugar in his class, it seemed to him. She walked to her two new friends with a wide and proud grin, which was seemingly returned by Sakuma wholeheartedly. "You did great." He spoke, making her grin widen, and turned to her first friend to see what he thought of it. "Congratulations." Naruto spoke in his ever soft and polite tone. She smiled, hearing the honesty in his calm and soft voice. He was certainly different than all her other friends, in a weirdly nice sort of way to her, and she nodded. They watched the rest of the matches till late in the afternoon, before the day was called off, much to the relief of some of the exhausted students. Naruto packed up his bag slowly to make sure he didn't forget anything, unlike his female partner by his side, who was logging in everything hurriedly like a man on a mission. He saw her struggling with the zip, since the clogged up things in it were now making it quite bigger than it should have been, seeing it from the morning. "Damn it, close up." Tsunade scolded the bag, much to the confusion of Naruto, who sighed softly and decided to stop her before she ripped it apart. "I know you need help?" he asked her, and got a slight glare from the fired up girl, which turned into a tired sigh and a nod. He smiled, taking the bag and rolling up the scrolls and closing the books and things in it properly before placing them in an organized manner. Finally, he zipped it up and handed it to the girl, who took it with an embarrassed smile. "Omen, I get a little angry sometimes," she mumbled in a hushed whisper, which he dismissed and slung his own bag over his shoulder by his waist. They walked out of the academy together, with Tsukumo having left a little early since he had some work, and both walked towards the clan districts together. "Boy. You still have to show me that fireball jutsu of yours." She spoke up in their walk pointedly, making him nod in remembrance of his promise. "Alright, I'll show it to you where I learnt it, then K?" he asked and got a happy nod from the girl. He took her to near the edge of his own clan compounds when Tsunade saw him walk down the stairs of the bank and onto the porch of the river. Naka River. Both young kids stood on the wooden porch of the river, watching the sun now halfway down, signaling they still had a couple of hours before it finally settled down completely. He took his bag off and kept it by his side, taking a deep breath before he got started on it. Snake ram monkey boar horse tiger. Fire style, fireball jutsu. He exclaimed while his hands blurred through hand seals that were quite fast for Tsunade to follow. Even though they weren't that fast, to her they were awesome. He took in a deep breath, lining his lungs and windpipe with a protective chakra layer. That was the first and most basic requirement of any fire jutsu to be performed without burning one up himself from the inside. It was the most volatile of the elemental natures for a reason. He blew out the hot breath churned up in his body and put his fingers near his lips in a small C-like shape for the fireball to be directed and controlled. The air coming from his mouth ignited due to the immediate change in temperatures as soon as it left his lips and a small shallow stream of flames going forward. Tsunade frowned and wanted to scold him for showing her a small stream of flames instead of an actual. She covered her eyes when the narrow stream suddenly expanded into a huge red fireball. The water in the river let out a huge hiss of steam, boiling under the extreme pressure of heat its usually cold water wasn't used to. "Sugoi. Once more Naruto, I didn't get a good look at it please," she pleaded with her hands clapped in the manner she was saying a prayer, and he panted, wiping the sweat of his brow, and nodded a little tiredly. He couldn't refuse his friend after all. He smiled, turning back to the river and took a deep breath. Snake ram monkey boar horse tiger. Fire style, fireball jutsu. He exclaimed once more and spouted out a narrow stream of flames that expanded into a full-blown crimson fireball once more. This time Tsunade watched on with starry eyes at the awesome jutsu he was wielding for her show tell right now. He panted a little and wiped his forehead, a small smile of pride on his lips for having mastered this jutsu for now. Though he did raise an eyebrow when he saw the wide puppy dog eyes of Tsunade staring at him pleadingly. "Teach me," she said instantly clasping his hands in her own, making him quite surprised at her request. He smiled a little and shook his head in negative making her frown. "It's not easy Tsunade," he said, and her frown turned into a full-blown scowl, and he placed his finger on her lips when she began to say something to shush her up beforehand. "It isn't that I don't trust you, it's that we don't know your elemental affinity for now. Kagami Aji-san told me that we can use our own element's jutsu rather easily than those that are polar opposites of them. If they aren't of your affinity, you have to first master the pure manipulation of that element before you move on to the actual jutsu part. You actually have to do that with your own affinity too, but we can use our jutsu, albeit a bit weaker than they could be without learning pure manipulation first." He explained her, and she nodded with a calm look on her face, now that she knew his reasons. "So your affinity Thinji is fire?" she asked and he shook his head. No, haven't checked it yet. Actually Aji-san said we don't start on pure elemental manipulation until we are at least chunin," he said making her frown in confusion and he knew the reason, so he sat down with her doing the same and both looked down in the river's clean water flowing past their naked feet. "I'm from the Uchiha clan, so I have a natural affinity to fire like all Uchihas, no matter my natural element. Every one of us has at least some sort of affiliation with the fire element and all of us do master this jutsu." He explained her unasked question making her nod sadly. "Your clan is so cool, all that they teach me is some stupid chakra control exercises. All I can do is stick leaves on my forehead," she mumbled, waving her feet in the water with a saddened look. He felt really bad at her saddened demeanor, it didn't look nice on her chirpy face at all. Chakra control is pretty important too. The better the control, the less chakra we use in our jutsu Tsunade. For example, I can only do at most 5 fireballs a day when I'm completely fresh for now, with more control I can increase it to maybe even double that," he explained making her nod, it was the same thing her granduncle said too. "You know everything, how are you so smart?" she asked him with a voice laced with admiration. He got a little embarrassed from her words and waved his hand dismissively. "I don't know everything, I just know a little about this because Aji-san explained it to me when he showed me this jutsu and I read some scrolls at my house." He spoke modestly making her put out her bottom lip cutely. "Don't be like that, you're awesome." "I wish I could do that," she said honestly, once more waving her legs to take her mind off it. Naruto fell in thought at how to cheer her up before he perked up. "I know, how about I teach you a small fire jutsu used to light up small flames for camping and stuff, it's how I started." And even if you don't get the jutsu, you can use this in the future for outside camping and stuff, he suggested, making her grin and nod happily. He got up and showed her the little technique that was virtually simple and not at all dangerous for anybody. Seeing how small in scale it was, all one could get was a harsh throat for couple of days if done wrong, unlike the higher ranked fire jutsus, and it was taught to everyone from what he knew, so he saw no harm in it. Alright, it only has 2 seals, one being horse, but the main one being tiger. That is the one that triggers all fire jutsus and is the last seal of them all. He explained, getting a nod from the girl. Both tried to light up some dry leaves and sticks for an hour before they saw it was a little late and Tsunade picked her bag up. I have to go now, but I'll see you tomorrow, okay? She asked and he nodded with a smile. He was now looking forward to his days in the academy and walked her to the village's shopping center until they parted ways before remembering about the other thing he had to do now before he went home. Ami, I forgot all about meeting Mito-bachan. He exclaimed to himself and ran to the eastern part of the clan districts hurriedly. He looked around the place she had told him to look into and that he would find it easily. His eyes caught sight of a large house in the corner with a small spiral symbol on its entrance, the same one that was on her kimono's obi yesterday, and knew that was the place. Uzumaki clan compounds. Naruto knocked on the door and stood there calmly for a couple of minutes, trying to regain his breath while he was at it. Mito opened the door, having an idea as to who it might be, and much to her happiness, it was her adorable blonde she was thinking of so much today. But she did frown with her hands on her hips. You're late, Naruto-kun. She admonished him half-heartedly, and he rubbed his neck and nodded apologetically. Omen, I went with my friend and lost track of time. He spoke in a sorry tone, making her smile that he had made a friend on his first day. Kami knew he deserved it more than anyone, and she welcomed him in, respecting the boy's true and honest answer, along with his straightforward attitude. Naruto walked in the house's hallways that had a lot more homey and warm feel to them than he had ever felt before. They were quite vibrant with many colors and paintings or some strange calligraphy, most probably seals, if he could guess right, all around the place. She took him to the calligraphy room she used for her own sealing practice and sat him on the couch. Alright, you sit here and I'll go and bring something to drink for you, alright? She asked him, getting a small happy nod from the blonde who watched her leave and let out a little tired yawn, rubbing his sleepy eyes off their sleep. He was exhausted after that little expedition with Tsunade and the toll the day had taken on him. Mito came back with a tray of some cake and milk, only to smile silently at the adorable sight in front of her eyes. Naruto had fallen asleep on the table with his head resting on his crossed arms, no doubt exhausted from his day. She put the tray aside and sat by his side, brushing his hair gently to find him breathing softly, no doubt in a deep sleep at the moment. He looked so cute in her eyes right now. He must have been quite tired from whatever he had done on his first day, yet he had come to her for practice just because he had promised her to, and that alone made her so happy. She placed a kiss on his head and scooped the boy up in her arms to take him up into her guest room and place him in a proper bed for a nice sleep before she went to his house to get him some clothes and maybe his little furry companion too while she was at it. Hanahagakure no Sado. Time skipped 2 years. The Noha Ninja Academy. Alright kids, this is the final day for the second semester. The testing done today with all of you will go on your report cards, so please take this seriously, the teacher spoke, his voice and eyes pointedly glaring at a certain blonde-haired kunoichi of his, who merely stuck her tongue out at the man for pointing at him specifically. Let out a tired sigh and picked the stack of papers on his desk, starting to distribute them all around the class. Naruto took the paper from the instructor, putting it down on his desk with the blank side facing him, as was instructed to them, and waited patiently on his desk, his fingers crossed in front of his mouth, with an almost peaceful aura surrounding him. The instructor stood in front of the class, glancing at the clock to see it was almost time, and spoke up as soon as the second hand of the clock hit 12. You may begin. His voice rang through the silence of the room. Naruto flipped the test around, his eyes working their way through the questions furiously to see if there was anything that would trouble him. And much to his relief, there wasn't anything of that caliber, instead it seemed a little easy to him. His baby blue eyes glanced to the side to see Sakumo raring past the test like an enraged bull, and he snickered softly at the boy who seemed like he would burn straight through the paper in a few moments. Then he glanced up front into the second row from the front where his blonde friend sat, and he let out a soft sigh from his lips. I'm doomed, Ka-san is going to kill me for this. Tsunade cried in her head, fantasizing what kind of punishments would be levied out on her for failing this stupid test. She hated history with a passion. What were they going to do with knowing who became the Shodaime Tsuchikage after all? That guy was most probably dead, for crying out loud. Now anatomy and biology were cool, she always aced those tests. It just intrigued her so much, and she would be able to know more about the workings about the human body with that. Not learn about some stupid guy who has been dead for decades and haunting her life right now. She pulled out her hair in frustration. How could she have fallen asleep when she had finally decided to get to studying for this last night? Oh, that's right, it was so boring that she had fallen asleep quicker than listening to a lullaby. And she didn't even want to know what her granduncle was going to say when he heard of this, which he most probably would. I shouldn't be doing this, Naruto sighed softly, but in the end the temptation to do something for her was too much. Plus, Shinobi didn't play fair, that at least put some of his guilt at rest for doing this. He flicked out a kunai when the instructor was listening to a student's doubts regarding a question, for which he was quite glad right now. He saw the small amount of blank space at the bottom end of the paper and smiled a small smile, brushing his hand through his silky hair coming onto his eyes to seem totally normal to everyone around him. He channeled some chakra into it while it was right above his lap. The kunai hummed a little, making him quite nervous, and glanced up to see no one had noticed and quickly cut a straight line on the bottom end of the paper. The kunai cut cleanly through it as if a machine cut, leaving no evidences that he had tampered with it, and pocketed his kunai again, picking his pencil up to start working on 2 of his tests. He ticked all the multiple choice questions one by one with relative ease, whizzing past them and writing down the answers at the bottom of the cleanly cut paper to some of the rest of them. The teacher walked up, looking about the class, and stopped by Naruto's side. His eyes narrowed in on the boy's paper, quite specifically, the bottom half of it. Naruto was barely containing his nervousness and kept going through ticking the questions so as to not rouse any attention from the examiner for their test right now. "Hey kid," he called, placing a hand over his shoulder, making him stiffen and give the man a nervous smile. "Hi sensei?" he asked, afraid that the teacher might have caught onto him when the teacher pointed to the small scribbles jotted down on the bottom half of his sheet. "This is an official academy test to be graded by the educational authorities. Rub off your little notes before you hand the test in, or you might get some marks deducted for that," he pointed out and went down the stairs to keep his gaze on all the students. Naruto let out a sigh in relief and continued working on both his tests quickly and efficiently. The cut was made so clean that the teacher hadn't noticed it, and he was glad for that right now. His training was paying off in spades right now. He put his pencil down as soon as the last question on it was answered and looked up to see Tsunade with her hands over her head while her chin rested on her desk, no doubt still lost as to what she would do now. He slid the small slip from the bottom of the test out and put it over his lap, held between his index and middle fingers. His eyes glanced to the instructor to wait for him to get into the perfect position for him to do this. His eyes narrowed calculatingly when the man reached the far end of the other corner and his back turned to him. Perfect, he's in a blind spot. There's no way he'll see this, he thought, a smirk now adorning his lips as the slip in between his fingers hummed and straightened like a slim sheet of metal when chakra coursed through it and he flicked it expertly towards his target with a flick of his wrist. Clack. Tsunade looked up startled when a slip of paper embedded into her desk like a shuriken with its corner engulfed deep in the wood. A moment later it lost its sharp edges and fell down like a simple slip of paper that she quickly slid down onto her lap before someone saw it. She looked to her side to see her partner too nervous to notice and turned her honey eyes down to her lap. Question 1 Land of Gold. Question 5 Samurais are only found in the Land of Iron. Question 7 Fire Daimyo is protected by 12 of his hand-picked shinobi called the 12 Guardian Ninja. Question 10 The Water Country has an additional branch in their Black Ops, instated by the Shodai Mizukage, to hunt down renegade shinobi of their village, called the Hunter Ninjas of the Kiri's Anbu Black Ops. Note, start studying history, it isn't that boring, and I won't always be there to save you. Naru. Tsunade crushed the small slip of paper in her palms, pocketing it quickly. She bit her lip and turned her eyes to the back, only to see Naruto gazing out the window and seemingly done with the test, no doubt at some bird's nest he had found interesting. She saw his lone eye glance at her for only a moment, his lips adorning a small smirk before he turned his eyes back outside, while his chin rested lazily on his palm. She looked down onto her paper and let out a soft smile, he was always looking out for her, no matter what, just like he always did. Whether she asked her or not, she knew he was watching her, like he always said, "I've got eyes on you," Tsuna in his soft yet playful voice to her whenever she was hard-pressed in some tough situation. And he would give her that calming annoying poke to her forehead, as if she was a spoiled child in his eyes, when he would pull through a trick of some kind, which she most probably was in his eyes. She quickly jotted down the answers he had sent for her, seeing how little time she had left. As soon as she had finished the last answer, a voice was heard throughout the academy. Ring. The bell rang, marking the end of the test, and the instructor stood fast in front of the desk, looking at all his students firmly. "Alright, time's up, pencils down," he called out, getting all students to obey. "Now come up one by one and put your tests here on my desk face down, and you can go for the accuracy and weapons tests outside," he called out, and everyone did so. Naruto got up, putting his test down on the instructor's desk, and walked out, putting his hands in his pockets to look for Tsukumo and A blonde and white blur whizzed past the students coming out of the class and straight onto the oblivious blue eyes boy's back. "You're a lifesaver," Tsunade chirped up, jumping onto his back with a giggle while her arms were around his neck for support and her knees curled up back and she placed a tight kiss on his cheek. "Boy. Where's my kiss?" A third voice drawled out from behind them only to see a silver-haired boy grinning stupidly at the two. Tsunade stuck her tongue out childishly. "It's in hell, you'll get it after you die, Saku no baka." Tsunade retorted, instantly getting a chuckle out of both the boys while she hopped down her feet to feel a couple of fingers poke her forehead. "Start studying history, idiot. I won't always be able to bail you out," Naruto spoke in a half-scolding manner before walking out for the training grounds. Tsunade puffed her cheeks and jumped by his side to walk with him. "Well, you could have helped me get more than the passing marks," Tsunade retorted dryly, rubbing her forehead with her palm. "There was only enough time for you to jot down what I sent soon," Naruto replied back with another poke, making her bristle in anger, yet she couldn't deny his words. The bell had rung as soon as she had finished writing the answers he had sent for her. It annoyed her to no end that he always seemed to know everything, and he was always right no matter what he said when it came to the stuff concerning anything related to shinobi. "Now stop being such a wise guy and Kami forbids stop poking me," she shouted, rubbing her forehead, her face flushed with anger while he just walked on, completely unfazed by her angry words and quite used to her antics by now. "Tsukumo though? Guys, am I missing something?" he asked in a lost voice, not getting what was going on and fell in step with the two bickering blonde friends of his. "Nothing for you to worry about," Naruto answered simply, putting his right fist out only for Tsukumo to side bump it with his own left fist. "Yeah. Now let's ace those damn shuriken and kunai tests," pumped up Tsunade, happy that it wasn't anything related to history now. "Weapons and accuracy tests," Tsukumo corrected wisely, making Tsunade frown. "Smart ass," she mumbled with a cute pout, making Naruto chuckle and Tsukumo to grumble about the stupid nickname she had stuck him with. The trio stepped out with the rest of their batchmates to see a table lined up with kunais and shurikens, as well as several bull's eyes on the opposite wall. "Alright class, this is the last grading test for this semester. All of you have to throw 6 kunais and 6 shurikens to score as many points as you can. Now I'll call 2 of you in pairs so we can get this over quickly." Now the teacher called them out by turns. Tsunade got 11 points out of a possible 12, with Tsukumo a close 10 behind her by a single point. Everyone got off their turns until it came to the last 2 with matching surnames on the list. "Naruto Uchiha and Jin Uchiha," the teacher called out while the 2 boys stepped forward. Jin glared at Naruto with all the hate he could muster. He resented him with his very being ever since the second half of their first year, when Naruto and Tsukumo had finally started to catch up to his high scores before surpassing him and leaving him in the dust with the blonde at the top and his friend a close second in just about everything they did, while Tsunade was the Kunoichi to beat in their batch with her topping just about everything. Everything except history, that is. Jin picked up his weapons and threw them all by the turns, each hitting a perfect dart in the center, making him smirk at seeing the perfect score of 12. There was no way he could be beaten. And Naruto Uchiha scores a perfect 12 with a single point for the extra credit demonstration, while throwing all his weapons at once, the teacher's voice scaled out, lacking any hint of pride or warmth, and a small scowl on his face at seeing the targets enter laden with kunais with the shurikens forming a small plus around them. Everyone let out oohs and ah of shock at seeing his target while the boy calmly stepped by his friends to find Tsukumo with a competitive glint in his eyes and trying to burn holes in his target while Tsunade was puffing out her cheeks. "Show off," she mumbled, and Naruto sighed. She was going to burst her cheeks one day if she kept this up, and the instructor stood in front of them after rounding up the last of their scores. "Alright, congratulations you all, this marks the end of your second year. Now you all have a month-long vacation before we move on to the new year. So go on and enjoy your time with your family." He called out and stepped into the building, leaving happily chattering students behind. The trio retrieved their bags from their lockers and slung them on while walking out of the academy. "So what are you guys going to do in the vacation?" "Tusan is going to finally start training me in Kenjutsu this fall," Tsukumo said, working out the kinks in his back with a stretch while they wailed through the streets of the village. "I'm going to study some more anatomy and biology in my free time and gamble some of my money at that hand and show game I found last week at a stall in the shopping districts. You know, there's a 50% chance at my winning, which is higher than any other, so finally my luck will shine." Tsunade chirped up, pumped at her idea, and Tsukumo dropped his head in defeat while Naruto let out a soft sigh of defeat too. "What about you, Naruto?" Tsukumo asked to gauge what his friend was going to do in his vacation, and Naruto shrugged carelessly, making the 2 of his companions sweat drop. "No, train in what I find interesting and study some scrolls," he asked, more than stated, making Tsukumo nod. That was just how his friend was, he knew that much. I'll go and see you two tomorrow at our usual place, Sakumo said hurriedly, making Naruto raise an eyebrow at his agitated friend. What gotten into you? He asked with Tsunade nodding in agreement to get a cheeky smile from their friend. I'm going to go get myself a nice training katana today for my vacation-long training. Sakumo said, making Tsunade and Naruto look at him in jealousy while he smiled in victory. Lucky, the two mumbled with a slump in their shoulders. Sakumo laughed and ran off towards his house while waving his hand back at them. Alright, I'll see you tomorrow, Jana, he called out and both waved at him. Naruto walked towards the clan districts with Tsunade in tow and rose an eyebrow when she didn't take the turn for her house. I'm coming with you, don't want to go home right now, she said, simply making him nod. It wasn't unusual for her to spend her day at his house, no, she loved lazing around there and had almost made it her haven away from home. Uchiha clan compounds. The duo of friends walked within the fortified clan compounds of the Uchiha, getting several curious glances towards the girl by our hero's side, but none were too surprised after seeing it several times already. Though none did understand why or how Tobirama had allowed his granddaughter to be so close to the Uchiha family's heir, he had resented the most in his past, but none were brave enough to question his decisions. Naruto opened the large gate to his estate and walked in with Tsunade in tow, her hands clasped behind her back with a little smile. He slid the key in his door and opened it to step inside his house. Tsunade slid off her sandals and threw them everywhere before hopping in the house, leaving a sighing Naruto behind. He slid off his own footwear and put them neatly, doing the same for his impulsive friend when a small sound rang in the silent hallway. Mew. A soft mewl reached the ears of both blondes, making Tsunade perk up. She saw the glowing slitted eyes and grinned, seeing the adorable white cub with her tail wagging happily at seeing her master return home. Kiara. Tsunade chirped in a chipper tone and ran up to cuddle the adorable thing in her arms. Kiara ran towards Tsunade herself, making her grin and open her arms when she jumped up in pure bliss. When the white blur went past her side and she landed straight on her face onto the floor. Her body twitched comically while the cub in question rested in Naruto's arms comfortably with a purr. He brushed her fur and rubbed her head with a finger, kissing her head gently. You hungry, girl? He asked the cub, who mewled in affirmative, making him chuckle and move inside the kitchen while Tsunade sat on the ground with a twitching eyebrow and a tick mark on her forehead. That traitorous, no good ball of fur, she mumbled furiously, watching her friend walk inside and went in only to plop down on the couch tiredly with a sigh of relief. Though she did glare at the cub, who hopped onto her couch and was standing in front of her face with a curious glint in her eyes. What do you want, traitor? She mumbled in irritation, getting a tilt of the head from the cub in question, and her heart melted when she licked her cheek. Oh, come to mama, as she cooed and scooped her up in her arms, hugging her for dear life, which the cub loved if her purrs were any indication. Kiara, come and have some lunch. Naruto's voice rang in the kitchen and she slicked her way out of Tsunade's arms expertly, who tried to keep her in her arms but ended up falling off the couch face first again. She grumbled incoherent curses at the feline, rubbing her aching nose with an annoyed expression on her face, seeing her lap up whatever he gave her to eat quite happily from her bowl. Half an hour later, Tsunade was lying there lazily hearing the crickets in his large gardens, and Naruto sat on the porch with the cub lying on her back and her legs high up in the air. Where does it all go, you glutton? You don't even grow up, neither are you fat or chubby, you're still so small, Naruto asked the cub while tickling her stomach to get muffled mewls from her. Her paws tried to pry him off, but to no avail, and Tsunade smiled. Kiara had become a part of their group too over time. Boy. Where are you guys? A familiar voice called out, surprising them quite a lot. We're in here, come on up back, Tsunade called out, and sure enough both saw Sakumo come around with his hands behind his back and a wide grin on his face. Tsunade laid on her elbow, looking at him with a raised eyebrow. I thought you were going to buy your sword, smartass, she pointed out wisely, getting an eye twitch from the boy at her name calling, but he gulped it down for now and grinned. His hands were put out in front to show them a beautifully crafted katana unsheathed with a completely white blade and a black sheath to go along with it in his other hand. Dusan gave me the family sword when I got home, I ran straight from home knowing you two would be here. Isn't it cool? He asked with a cheeky smile, getting nods from the other two who were looking marvelously at the beautifully crafted sword. It's called the White Light Chakra Saber, by the way, it's been passed down within my family for generations now. He explained to add a bit more fascination to it and got dumb nods from his star-struck friends while Tsunade ran her finger on the blade in amazement. Sugoi, you got such a cool sword, Tsunade whispered, making him puff his chest out proudly. Idiots have all the luck in the world. She continued, making him deflate and cry in tears at her words. Naruto laughed, and all three enjoyed their free day happily to enjoy their friends' happiness together, playing around the house some card games, Tsunade's choice by the way, of which she won none of them as always. A week later, some unknown clearings on the borders of the village. Naruto walked past the trees covering the forest-like clearing while taking in the beautiful sights to his heart's content. This part of the forest he had never been in before and he was sure no one else had either, seeing the non-trampled grass growing all around the area. He looked up and smiled at seeing the sun rays coming past the leaves of the trees and illuminating the beautiful clearing with its sheen. His feet took small and careful steps to avoid any dangerous insects or snakes going around on the ground. He loved doing this to see the places in the village no one else ever ventured into. It was a loss in his mind of their own accord to not explore the place they lived and breathed in down to its very core. Finally, he walked into a small clearing in between the thick forestry of the seemingly lost-to-time area of the village. He looked unamazed at the large and thick tree in the middle of said clearing, as if it were the whole nerve center of the village. He walked closer to the tree, which was of the size of a small house in itself, and touched its large bark with his small hand. He could feel the synergy of life it breathed and the small pulses the tree was letting out each passing second, as if it were alive and breathing. He walked around it, looking up and down the tree and wondering whether to climb said tree or not when he stopped abruptly as his eyes caught on to something strange. His baby blue eyes narrowed on a particular part of the tree covered with wild vines, and he flicked out a kunai from his holster, carving the weeds out and brushing it clean with his palm to read a small thing inscribed onto it by human hands. Hokage no Sado. It read and he started hacking away the vines cleanly by channeling wind chakra through it and finally cleared away the small portion of the bark he wanted to see so much right now. Today we stand here, asking ourselves the same question every shinobi has probably asked himself at one point in his life. What is a shinobi? Why do we kill others as a way of living, mindlessly staining the ground scarlet? My friend asked me this today too, after our small truce of peace, marking the stop of centuries of conflict between our clans. So I answered him today, and we decided to carve this out for life here as a sign for the future generations to remember the horrors we went through and the time when we stopped to think of the past that lay behind us. A shinobi is one who endures no matter the obstacles, that is what we could say in a sentence. Why do we kill then? Why destroy life? To protect life, life must be taken. That is the very law of nature. The cycle goes on, but what differentiates us from animals is that we have the sense to feel others' pain and bask in it to share his sufferings. That is what me and my friend dreamed of years ago, a place where everyone will understand each other's sufferings and pain and grieve together. A place where children will grow up peacefully, shielded from the violence outside the confines of that peaceful wall covering them. We dreamed of a village. A village where children, adults and the elderly would come together and form bonds. Where children won't be thrust out to kill before they knew how to hold a brush and could enjoy the taste of sake before they died. And today the two of us are content that this dream has come true. For today, this place marks the beginning of the peace we dreamed of achieving one day and shake hands to form a village where everyone can be happy. Today, here with a shake of our hands we unite the two great clans of the Senju and of the Uchiha to form Hokage no Sado. Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha, year 1197 Warring Clans era. Naruto's eyes widened and he reread the whole thing again before brushing the inscription with his palm. Digi, he whispered to himself, realizing what the Shodai Hokage and his grandfather had went out to achieve together. No one had come to this place since then if he could guess right and it was seemingly forgotten. He read the thing again and again, not getting enough of the beautiful words inscribed on the tree. The handwriting was mixed of two people, one of Hashirama Senju and the other of Madara Uchiha. The year was the last year of the warring clans before shinobi villages rose up from everywhere to achieve what the two formidable clan leaders had once sought to achieve and had it in their palms at that time, seemingly bringing an end to the clan wars and halting the mindless bloodshed then and there. His senses tingled suddenly, his eyes snapping back and glancing dangerously to the side. He flicked his kunai into a tree, making the birds fly up from it, and he stood up, looking around the clearing furiously. "Who's there?" he called out, getting nothing but silence in return and clenched his fist tightly. "I know you're there, so no point hiding yourself anymore," he called out yet again and this time a reply did come back. "You're good for a child your age, to be able to sense my presence at so young an age. You are the grandson of that man. Basking in the writings of his lost dreams." The childish voice cackled a blood-chilling laugh, making him flick out kunais in each of his palms and stand in his defensive kata, crossing the kunais in front of him defensively. "What do you want?" he asked in a guarded tone, knowing he was all on his own in this abandoned part of the forest. "Nothing," the voice echoed from everywhere and his eyes roamed around to gauge his opponent's location. His untrained senses not quite able to pinpoint whoever it was that was hiding here. But everything the voice said in a cold voice making him stiffen when he saw a strange hooded figure with a straw cloak sitting on a tree and launched his kunai at it. The figure caught it in his finger by its hole and shook his finger in a not so good fashion. "Their potential lays hidden," he whispered suggestively, confusing the blonde boy with his words. Naruto could feel a foreboding feeling in the back of his mind at seeing the figure who was hiding his appearance expertly in the shadow of the tree, so he could not see him. "What do you mean? Who are you?" he asked him, taking out a round of shurikens in his free hand to be ready for anything, and the figure cackled. "Who I am is not important, but your hidden potential needs coming out now. But certain conditions must be met to do so," he spoke in his same childish tone, once more throwing him in for a loop. "What conditions? What potential are you going on about?" he asked him to milk everything he could from the man who laughed evilly. "The potential that can only be found when you would lose someone you love right in front of your very eyes," he whispered, leaning forward with a waving finger to make his point. Naruto couldn't help but shudder at whatever psychopath he had come across. "The day you'll achieve it," he whispered suggestively, once more baffling out the blonde boy. "Your friend, that girl," he whispered, and Naruto's eyes widened in horror. He only had one female friend. He looked at the man with such hateful eyes, it almost made him shudder and lick his lips at the same time. "What have you done to Tsunade? I swear if you have done anything to her," he threatened the figure on instinct, getting yet another childish laugh from him while he waved his hands up in defense. "No need to get all riled up on poor old me, I come in peace," he spoke childishly, making Naruto snort inwardly, though he tried to gauge what the man wanted right now. He was much more than what he seemed to the naked eye. "And why mention her when you come in peace?" he asked him seriously, to know what he was talking about. "Well, anyone would mention a person who was abducted by some shinobi of a rival village, nah?" he asked curiously, and Naruto's kunai dropped in shock. "What?" he asked in a whisper, but the figure heard him and grinned, seeing his horrified eyes. "That girl, I saw a man take her from a clearing. All tied up and gagged, slung over his shoulder like a sack," he trailed off, feeling a cold metal on his neck. He glanced back to meet the cold eyes of the blonde and saw the boy he was talking to right now disappear in a puff of smoke, making his eyes widen momentarily. "Shadow clone," he thought, and heard a small whisper in his ear that made his grin widen to ever epic proportions. "Where is she?" Naruto asked coldly, and the man couldn't help but feel glee on his insides. The southern edges of the village, he must have crossed them by now and moving on towards the borders of the country. "I would hurry it up if I were you," he whispered before Naruto saw him disappearing right in front of his eyes, as if he wasn't ever there in the first place. Who was he? Was he telling the truth? What should I do? He thought, his mind jumbled up with a million doubts and questions right now, while his hands shook in fear of what might happen to her. Should I go back to the village for help? No, would take too much time, and the man would escape cleanly without a trace, seeing how far I am. There's only one way then, he thought before blurring from the branch he was on a moment later and rushed past branches, blasting several off on his way with huge bursts of chakra from his feet. He saw the trees coming to an end and jumped down on the ground, running at blazing fast speeds, as fast as his legs would go, while pumping them with chakra to keep his muscles going without tiring even a little. "You're going the wrong way, Gaki," a voice spoke from his side, only to see him the strange figure hiding in that cloak of straws from before. "You won't be able to catch up with that man no matter how you see it," he spoke wisely, making Naruto glance at him dangerously. "Watch me," he spoke calmly, before the figure saw that the blonde was running for a huge cliff. Naruto increased his speed twofold and jumped down with a start, opening his arms to twirl himself in midair, while the figure stood on the edge, completely dumbfounded at the actions of a certain Uchiha. Though when he looked down, he saw Naruto taking out a kunai in his hand and embedding it in the rocky surface to slow down his fall, and grinned. "Interesting, most interesting," he cackled and disappeared into thin air yet again. Naruto's hair flailed around with the air passing through them when his kunai snapped in half from the force it was experiencing. He took out another in both of his hands and embedded them in the rock at the same time with all the force he could muster. It worked. His speed slowed down and he buried them into the rock right to the hilt to get blocked by a small boulder in there and halt his motion momentarily. And he placed his soles on the rocky surface, only to let out a burst of chakra to kick himself back and backflip to land on the ground while skidding backwards and stopping himself by burying his kunai, which were chipped off to the point of no return now. His arms ached with the huge strain he had put them through, but he paid it no heed and started running again. He jumped from boulder to pass the small stream quickly, and just as he did, he was out of the village's borders. He ran up to see the start of the forest and hopped up on a branch to begin his chase yet again. He smiled a small smile of relief when he saw a small patch of a footstep on a branch and knew he was now right on tail of whoever the abductor was. The man must be in a hurry if he hadn't cleared off his tail and confident that no one would follow him. But his mind was completely jumbled up by the figure from before. Why is he helping me? What the hell does he want? He thought, but shook the thought off. He would have time for that later, right now he had a man to stop. The man with a face mask covering his face along with full black clothes for stealth hopped from branch to branch straight towards the rain country's borders. He smiled behind his mask, the information about the small slips in security of the leaf had been spot on, and now he had the Senju heiress on his shoulder. Then they could rebuild the Senju clan in Kumo and use her offspring or even the girl herself for making perfect Jinchurikis. The Raikage was going to be smiling in glee at having her in their midst with a leaf unknown about her loss until it was too late. Swish. He jumped sideways, but howled in pain when 3 shurikens got embedded in the back of his left thigh. Tsunade wriggled in her bonds, and her screams were muffled by the gag tied over her mouth. He looked back to see the forest completely empty and growled behind his mask. "You have some nerve, leaf scum, I am a censor myself. You cannot hide from me," he shouted in the seemingly empty clearing, but got no response in return. Swish. His ears caught the sound of another sound of metal whizzing in the air, and he ducked when a lone kunai went past where he stood a moment ago, only to growl in annoyance and look around furiously. Finally, his senses tingled and he grinned. He turned around to see Naruto falling down from a branch over him, a kunai in his hands to embed it straight in his skull. He launched a volley of shurikens himself while mentally sighing in relief that he was only dealing with a little child, so he could get this over with quickly. Naruto's arms and legs curled up to cover his front, while the metallic stars got embedded in each of his limbs. Tsunade shouted in her gags and wriggled wildly at seeing what had happened, only for her eyes to widen when Naruto disappeared in a puff of smoke and a small aug fell in place of where he was a moment earlier. The substitution. The masked man growled, once more looking around when he turned around and blocked a kunai lad in hand with his forearm, only to meet the cold blue eyes of his attacker. Naruto slashed at the man's waist, who jumped back quickly to dodge it, and the blonde followed him just as quickly, not letting up his charge and give the man any time to reprieve. The Jounin took out a sword and parried his twin kunai strikes expertly with small glancing blocks, as if they were mere annoyances. But he had to admit the boy was fierce and relentless in his slashes that were being executed with perfection laced in them. "You damned brat, leave while you still can before I put you into an untimely grave," the man growled, having to fight with one hand while the other had supported his captive on his shoulder. The Jounin finally had enough and pushed back, slashing at Naruto a vertical strike, who blocked it with a cross guard over his head with his twin kunace. The blonde winced at the brute force behind it and was forced to one knee, skidding back when he saw the man letting out a kick with his right leg and blocked it by crossing his arms in a cross guard. Naruto cursed inwardly, the man was too strong and experienced, with the only disadvantage that Tsunade was on his shoulder. While he, on the other hand, could not use his arsenal of ninjutsu comprising mostly of fire jutsus and shadow clones that would only drain him quickly and leave him open for the kill from how exhausted he already was after the long chase to catch up to the man for 3 hours now. He ducked under a horizontal slash and rolled away from a vertical one that followed it, while the sword was embedded in the ground with a small cloud of dust to show the force behind it would cleave him straight through if it made direct contact. The Jounin had to give some points to the brat, no matter how annoying the pest was in his eyes. "You're good, brat, but how long can you keep this up? Better give up and I'll make it painless," the man taunted while Naruto paid no heed to the man, but he was right in his assumptions. He was tiring himself out quickly and at a severe disadvantage on his hands. Ninjutsu was nowhere near sights for this fight, lest he burned Tsunade along with the man when he caught the man in a trap with his clones, for which he had nowhere near enough chakra to pull off the numbers that would need. He was at a severe disadvantage at Taijutsu since the man was a Jounin, having the experience and advantage of strength over him. The only thing keeping him alive was his agility and speed, and that too was failing quickly as he was forced to dodge another swing of his dodge, and the man was adapting to his style slowly yet surely. That left only one choice. He threw one of his kunace at the man, who flicked it away with his sword and charged at him. Naruto's back met the bark of the tree, making the man grin and bring his sword down in a vertical slash to cleave him in half. Naruto twisted himself around the tree and dodged it at the very last moment. He hopped back a couple of steps with the Jounin following him, and now his sword had lightning coursing through its blade to be done with the blonde, even with a merely small glancing blow. "If only I could make hand seals right now, this brat would be dead," he thought, and gave a roundhouse kick for the blonde's arms, who twirled around a tree and dodged it at the very last moment yet again. This went on for 4 times until Naruto fell on one knee, sweat dripping from his face like raindrops while he panted for dear life. The man chuckled a humorous laugh seeing the downed boy in front of him. "I must say, boy, you were good to be able to hold yourself against a Jounin for so long and still breath." But now he walked closer to the boy, bringing his sword up to end his life when the blonde let out a swipe to take his legs off from under him. The Jounin hopped over it and let it pass underneath him harmlessly, putting forth a kick in midair that met the boy's chest and threw him back into a tree's bark with a crash. Naruto coughed violently and slid down, panting and wiping his lips of the blood from his busted lip. The Jounin shook his head with a laugh when Naruto started going through hand seals. You won't be able to do any ninjutsu that would be able to take me down with the chakra levels you have right now, kid. This fight is he trailed off when he saw the blonde shadowed eyes glance up, now seemingly crimson with a single tomo in each of them, and ended the sequence on Tiger, making his eyes widen in realization and horror. Higher style, Phoenix Flower Jutsu. He exclaimed, pumping out a volley of small fireballs that made the Jounin hop back a couple of steps, right into the middle of the clearing. Just my luck, I get an Uchiha along with a Senju, you're going to be my compensation for wasting my time, Brad. But at least you will be a worthwhile present back home. The Jounin chuckled, letting the boy make another sequence of hand seals to pump out whatever last ninjutsu he wanted to, before he fell over unconscious due to chakra exhaustion himself. Higher jutsus took a hell lot of chakra, and it was only a matter of time before a little child like him. Uzumaki ceiling style. Naruto's voice rang in the clearing, and the man stopped laughing and looked around at the 6 tags slapped over the trees all around him glow in unison, while the blonde went through strange hand seals he had never seen before. But he had heard of the reputation that the Uzumaki sealing skills held in the world. His mind went back to the 6 last moment counters that Brad had done just now, and only now did he realize what he was doing. But still. Impossible, there's just no way an Uchiha like you could know seals, he shouted and raised his sword to charge at the blonde when Naruto made the final seal with a tired smirk. 6-point paralysis seal, Fuin, he shouted when his remaining chakra reserves started getting depleted drastically and kanji sprout out from all over the tags and covered the man and Tsunade all over their bodies and halted his charge midway while Naruto's eyes watched in slow motion as the tip of the blade came towards his right shoulder and stopped just a hair's length away from making contact with his body. Naruto kept his palms on the ground, keeping the seals around him pumped up and the man paralyzed with a smirk while a bead of sweat rolled down his forehead. You damn brat, how long do you think the seal will hold up? I can feel it wavering due to your depleted reserves right now. What do you think you'll achieve by stopping me for a little while before I cleave you? He sneered at Naruto, who shook his head in humor, further confusing the Jounin. I'm not stupid enough to try and stop you, he panted with half-lidded eyes, making the man look at him dumbfounded, and he merely continued, completely ignoring the man. No. I'm merely stalling you. He completed with a deep breath and his sharingan wavered for a moment, making the man smirk that the seal was about to fall along with the boy. For what? He asked curiously before he slayed down the boy and took him with himself, and the boy's smirk widened ever so slightly, confusing him yet again. For them, Naruto said before he fell down to the side and the seal disappeared to give him free movement. The man was confused when he felt a hand clasp the back of his neck in an iron grip while Tsunade was slid off his shoulders roughly. His head was twisted around forcefully and his eyes widened in horror when he saw the 2 pairs of glaring eyes in front of him. You have some nerve to try and abduct my granddaughter in broad daylight, Tobirama's cold voice rang through the clearing while Sasuke Sarutobi stood by his side and untied the little bonded girl from her bonds. His signature cigar dawned on his lips as usual, letting out small wisps of smoke in the air. Gigi, how did you know I was here? Tsunade asked in confusion, making Tobirama answer her without taking his eyes off the man who was struggling in his grip for air and squirming like a headless chicken. Because of Naruto, he explained, and the Jounin's eyes widened at his words. How? He rasped out, not being able to get how he was able to get a message to the Hokage so quickly. It just wasn't possible for him to do so. The boy took a shortcut by the cliff behind our village to follow you, which was the only possible way for anyone to chase you on foot with the distance you had covered beforehand. Just as he crossed the river where our village's borders end, he let out a huge pulse of chakra on purpose to alert our barrier team. Sasuke spoke, and the Jounin glanced at the unconscious boy with incredulous eyes before his eyes rolled due to lack of oxygen, and he fell unconscious when Tobirama hit his pressure point on his neck and let the body fall down like a sack of potatoes. I think Mito even taught him about the intricacies of our village's barrier defense system. She isn't letting up on training him, Tobirama? Sasuke spoke up, making him turn his glance to him and nod. It was ingenious of the boy to chase as well as alert him of danger at the same time. Only when he contacted the barrier team that he came to know that his granddaughter had left the village too, had he known what was up and used the Hiraishin marker placed on Tsunade's necklace to track her down. The man had planned it through by placing a suppressing marker on the girl, but the Hiraishin was still acting like a tracking beacon for him, even if he could not flash to her. The man was much too confident in his plans to be cautious of him. Naru? Their thoughts were broken by the soft and concerned voice of Tsunade, who had his head clasped in her arms for dear life. Her hazelnut eyes looked at him with all the concern in the world. Hey, wake up, she whispered, patting his cheek when his eyes blinked unfocused for a moment. His blurry eyes focused for a moment to see Tobirama's wide eyes, along with some strange brown-haired man's cigar dropping from his mouth in shock. The last thing he heard was the soft voice of his friend before he blacked out completely. "Naru, your eyes," he heard, and Tsunade saw him fall limp and tears welled up in the corner of her eyes while she hugged him to death. She felt a hand clasp her shoulder and looked back to see her granduncle's stoic face, holding a small smile on his lips for reassurance. "He's fine," he spoke to calm the girl down and got on one knee when a tear rolled down her puffy cheek. But she retorted with a soft sniffle when he placed his fingers of her lips to shush up her mumbles. "He's just exhausted, the boy ran 3 hours straight and jumped off a cliff to chase after you, besides taking a jounin head on. He'll be out like a light for a week before he's up and about again," he explained, the girl who started wailing for her life while clutching her friend for dear life. That idiot, what the hell was he thinking jumping off a cliff? "I'll send him straight into a coma when he wakes up," she sobbed out, making Sasuke chuckle, and Tobirama slapped his palm over his face with a soft chuckle. Maybe he shouldn't have mentioned that. Even he couldn't stop from laughing now that the rush was finally over and his granddaughter was fine and dandy thanks to a certain Uchiha. But he did remember those crimson eyes he saw before the boy had fallen unconscious and glanced at Sasuke seriously, who nodded and disappeared with the now prisoner jounin slung over his shoulder like a rag doll and disappeared in a swirl of flames. Tobirama himself flashed back into the village to get the boy some medical aid and get him checked up for all possible injuries, along with his crying granddaughter. A week later. Konoha Hospital. In a seemingly simple room, slept Naruto with a whole lot of flowers and gifts stacked around him. His eyes finally flickered open and he came to, his vision blurring before it focused completely to stare straight into a pair of hazelnut eyes. He blinked and the eyes blinked back at him. He caught the girl in a bear hug a moment later and buried his face in her neck with soft sigh of relief, passing his lips. "I'm glad you're okay," he whispered, and Tsunade smiled, hugging him back equally tightly. He broke off the hug to check for her injuries while he had cupped her cheeks when she stopped him with a giggle. "I'm Baka. You're the one who was out like a light for a week," she said, and Naruto rubbed his neck sheepishly with a nod. Though he was surprised when her arms wrapped around his chest again and she placed her head on his shoulder. "You scared me, Naru," she whispered, and Naruto smiled and hugged her tightly. "You scared me too, Tsuna," he whispered back, and she nodded, saying nothing else. Both taking a moment to let it absorb that the other was alright. Meanwhile, outside the room. Mito looked on through the small glass window on the door with her hands clasped over her heart and a fond smile on her face. "Oh, they are so adorable hugging like that," she cooed softly, getting smiles from the two men sitting by her side. Sasuke's fingers twitched due to not being able to smoke in here and it annoyed him to no end, while Tobirama had a can of coffee which he sipped on calmly. Sasuke popped a chewing gum in his mouth to take his mind off getting a smoke while they waited until Mito had given the Hokage permission to disturb the moment between the children inside. It was really unbecoming of their legendary status to get scolded by a woman, but still. "I'm so getting them married when they grow up," she whispered with an awe, and the reactions were instant. Poof. Tobirama sprayed a nurse completely brown by spewing off coffee onto her, and Sasuke had choked on his chewing gum and was patting his chest to get it to go either way and was rolling on the ground in agony. Mito pouted and watched the scene inside with sparkling eyes. "Inside? Gigi told me you jumped off a cliff," she said, sternly, making him gulp, seeing her angry eyes, and looked around for an escape. "Well, it wasn't a jump. It was merely falling expertly and safely with a lot of speed behind it," he explained lamely, making her narrow her eyes and bonk his head softly while she caught his collar in her hand. "Baka, don't you dare do anything so reckless again, you get me?" she asked him, and he said nothing this time, staying silent for a moment. "Won't you do the same for me?" he asked her calmly, and she fell silent with all her anger washing away. She looked down and played with her bedsheet, a small dust of pink on her cheeks from his words. She had no answer to that, she would do it in a heartbeat too. "Whatever, don't take this on me. You're the one who's stupid," she mumbled lamely and just sat there on his lap with a small bout of silence falling between them. Naruto's eyes widened when she pressed her lips on his cheeks and quickly retreated back as if he were poisoned. He rubbed his cheek where he had felt the kiss and looked at the girl who had turned around with her arms crossed, her back facing him, so he couldn't see her embarrassed face right now. "Arigato," she whispered, and he nodded dumbly, not that she could see him. "And don't tell this to anyone or I'll kill you," she threatened quickly, and he smiled, poking her forehead like usual, much to her annoyance. He was glad she was still the same impulsive idiot like always. "Hi," he said before he saw her sparkling eyes looking at him in wonder, and he let a soft sigh escape his lips. "When did you learn those new jutsu? You never showed them to me, I'm so seeing them later on," she started her barrage of questions and answers by herself while he listened on patiently to the obliviously blabbering girl. "Outside?" "Oh," she kissed him, "they're so cute," Mito cooed, barely containing herself from going in and scooping those two in her arms. Thump thump. She sweat drops seeing the two unconscious men by her side and her eye twitched dangerously. "Perverts," it was an innocent kiss on the cheek, she grumbled, and waited for them to come to consciousness before she sent them back into it. Though she was startled when Kagami came in and looked on confused at their unconscious Hokage and his trusted friend unconscious on the ground. A few moments later Tobirama straightened out his clothes and looked at his ex-subordinate with a curious look. "How goes the interrogation?" he asked the Uchiha seriously, who smirked knowingly at his sensei, making him smirk back. Tobirama had assigned him in charge of cracking the abductor up, and Uchihas were viciously known for breaking their captive's mind during interrogations when they were due in prompt to the severity of the mind tricks they used, and Tobirama had told him to go all out. Just that he got the information from him before the man was turned into a vegetable. "He cracked this morning, sensei, your hunch was right. It was Kumo." He answered his unasked question, making his eyes turn cold in the empty hallway of the hospital, and he leaned back while rubbing his temples. That Sandaime Raikage's coveting for their Kekkei Genkais and hidden techniques wasn't lost to him. But for him to go this far. Why Tsunade then? She doesn't even have a bloodline. He asked stoically, and Kagami looked around. "We should talk in private." He answered, making Tobirama nod at his need for privacy. "The matter must be urgent then." The three men disappeared, and Mito said nothing but knew what it meant and what fate her granddaughter had just been saved from. She moved in to meet the children, while the men went to go and talk about serious matters regarding international affairs, while she had a couple of blondes to coddle and hug them to death. In the Hokage office. Tobirama sealed the room up, with Sasuke falling down on the couch by the side and finally lighting up his much-needed cigar, while Kagami took a chair in front of Tobirama. The Hokage sealed up the room for privacy and nodded for him to go on. They wanted to use her to be turned into a Jinchuriki, seeing how compatible a Senju's body is with a Bijuu, since Yuzushi Agakure is fortified beyond belief for them to infiltrate. They want a weaponized and perfect Jinchuriki for use as a deterrent. He spoke seriously, making Tobirama cross his fingers in front of his mouth. His mind racking its gears, and all came down to only one simple possibility. "You know what this means, Tobirama, no point in going about it. A stable Jinchuriki is only needed so badly under one condition." Sasuke spoke from the side with a puff of smoke, and Tobirama said nothing. Kagami too knew where this was headed. The day was much too close for comfort. He finally broke the silence, and the other two nodded. "If Tsunade had been taken, or even Naruto for that matter, we would have had a precarious situation on our hands with one or even both our clan's heirs in the palm of Kumo for a factory to be made into a new clan in their village." He drawled out, making the two nod at his words. "Naruto needs to be questioned as well, Tobirama. He was nowhere near where Tsunade was taken from. Far from it. Yet he got her location even before we realized she had been abducted in the first place. Something doesn't add up." Sasuke spoke his mind and Tobirama nodded. Kagami added his 2 cents too. "That is besides the point that the Jounin knew of our internal securities working as if he were one of our own. We have an internal leak on our hands too." He spoke, and Tobirama knew it couldn't get any worse than this. "What do we do, sensei?" Kagami finally asked, and he let out a sigh. "Nothing," he spoke finally while laying back in his chair and got a raised eyebrow from Sarutobi. "Nothing?" he asked incredulously and got a nod from Tobirama. "We have no evidence he was on direct orders from his village other than his own statement. He didn't even have a piece of identification on him. Kumo can deny he was even one of their own right at this moment, and we have no evidence other than the interrogation reports to say otherwise." He spoke, his ears as a leader kicking in, and both men by his side fell silent, knowing he was right. But he finally spoke the word they were rearing to hear. "It is a big step from Kumo, no doubt, for the start of something much bigger than just a kidnapping. Sasuke, take charge of our spy network for now and keep an eye on them and Iwa. I have a hunch that Mumimyu must have had a hand in this too. Kagami, draw out the leaks in our forces. We have spies laden in every branch. If we were infiltrated so cleanly in broad daylight, well, the infiltrator left without a trace. I'll take care of questioning Naruto myself and get to the bottom of this." He spoke and the two nodded, agreeing with his words, but Tobirama knew what this was and what it marked. It was the calm before the storm. Hanahagakure no Sado. Time skip 5 years. Uzumaki clan compounds. "Should we stop, Naruto-kun?" Mito's gentle voice rang in the small training clearing of her estate. The boy in question was down on one knee, sweat dripping from his chin onto the ground below, while his breaths were short and labored. He ran a hand through his hair, slapping his hand over his forehead softly to make his blood rush go away, and shook his head in defiance. "Not yet," he spoke silently, but the determination behind those words wasn't lost to Mito. She smiled, seeing him dig his jet black sword into the ground for support to stand up, and flicked her own sword sideways, its shining blade glimmering in the sun, along with Naruto's blade, letting out a starry glimmer straight down its edge. He stood up, his legs shaky, but his eyes still the same defiant blue until the end. In that moment she knew how stubborn he could be, his hand raising the blade by his side to leave only its tip touching the ground. Very well then, come, she called him sternly, readying her blade in front of her, while the blonde dug into the last of his strength and charged ahead, leaving a cloud of dust behind him, and met her blade with a violent clang. His eyes met hers only for a moment before he broke the engaged blades and started on a violent series of attacks on her from all sides. Sparks flew all around them, with Naruto's vicious yet precise attacks being deflected efficiently by the lady with a red-handled sword in her palms in a graceful yet deadly dance. She glanced his straight slash to her lower abdomen just by a hair length to let it pass by her side harmlessly and put her own blade's tip on his jugular with a smile. "There, the spar's over," she said gently, but her voice holding a hint of pride, and smiled seeing his nervous gulp as he tried to say something and moved her sword back a bit only by a hair length to allow him to speak his mind. "Is it?" he whispered, confusing her with his words when he smirked. Her eyes widened, she had seen that smirk quite a few times now, each time it meant he had something up his sleeve. She nicked his neck a little, and the result was instant. Poof. The Naruto in front of her vanished in a cloud of smoke, making her heart skip a beat, and a fond smile adorned her lips when she felt the cold steel meet her sensitive neck. Her left eye glanced back only to meet the blue one of Naruto, whose face was shadowed from her angle, leaving only his right eye visible to her, and she had to say it made quite an intimidating sight to behold. "Now it's over," he whispered calmly in her ear. Her lips curled up in an amused smile, yet the prideful look in her eyes increased twofold. "You've grown so much, Naru-chan." She spoke in her gentle and motherly voice, making his eyes soften at his mother figure when something unexpected happened. Splash. He stood there dumbfounded, completely drenched in water which dripped all over his front now. He heard the sound of seemingly melodic giggles from behind him and turned around only to see Mito sitting on the porch with a plate of cookies by her side. Her hands held her sides as she laughed her heart out and he blinked in confusion. "You're here," he whispered, pointing his blade at her when his eyes widened in realization. "Then that means," he whispered in disbelief when her laughter came under control, not stopping but coming down so she could speak, and she nodded, wiping the corner of her eye off its happy tear. "Hi, that was a water clone, my dear disciple. Finally, you were able to beat one with all the restrictions I placed on you." She spoke proudly, motioning for him to come to her like a mother called her little one to her. He crouched down on one knee in front of her and became quite embarrassed when she started wiping his face with the sleeve of her silky kimono, with a fond smile on her face. Her right hand cupped his cheek, rubbing it with his thumb, while she looked at him with affection and pure adoration. "You've come a long way, I couldn't be prouder." She spoke in a soft and honest voice, making him turn a bit pink in embarrassment and nod timidly. "Arigato Mito Bachan, it's all thanks to you," he said honestly, making her smile. She patted his cheek gently before popping a cookie in his lips and motioning him to go in. "Alright, now off you go, wipe yourself off before you catch a cold." She scolded him, making him stumble in and giggled. Her hand picked the cup by her side, sipping it while closing her eyes and put it on her lap, exuding a calm aura all around her. "How long are you going to pretend to not be here, Tobirama?" she asked to thin air, smiling when she heard a tired sigh from behind her. Sure enough, a moment later, the Nidaime Hokage was sitting by her side and gazing at the lush gardens of her house calmly. "He's grown," he stated, having seen the spar from start to finish. An hour of straightforward offensive swordsmanship was impressive at the control he still had over each of his swings in the end. He himself, being a swordsman, could see a skilled one when he saw one. But he couldn't expect any less from an apprentice of an Uzumaki Kenjutsu master. "It still amazes me you taught him the ways of the sword." He spoke, taking a cup himself and filling it up for a sip. She merely smiled, waving her legs back and forth the porch happily. "He asked for it, and I just couldn't refuse him when he asked me to teach him to be worthy enough to hold his father's sword," she answered him, getting a curt nod from the man. His eyes glanced at the lacquer blade lying by his side, still unsheathed and gleaming in the sun darkly yet gracefully. "He graduates tomorrow," he stated in a matter-of-fact tone, getting a small hum from the Uzumaki heiress. It was the last week before team placements, an off week for all the graduates, so they could do whatever they wished before they were off doing missions. "I know, he told me he aced the academy through and through." She spoke proudly while he nodded curtly. "But he did," he spoke, his mind going back to the argument they had 5 years ago. He could have been graduated long ago. He spoke as an afterthought and didn't glance to her side to know he was being glared at. He was ready at 8 years old. The educational committee agreed, seeing he outwitted a jounin back then, and his knowledge far surpassed that of his peers, 3 years his senior as a matter of fact. He could have been a chunin by now, he was cut off by the Uzumaki heiress who had a look in her eyes that told him she had heard enough. Or he could have been dead, physically handicapped, mentally scarred from being thrusted into pressures of life, not meant for him at so young an age. She retorted coldly, making him sigh. But he wanted to, and had agreed. He replied back instantly in his ever calm and factual tone, making her eyes narrow in on him dangerously. What do you expect from an 8-year-old, peculiarly curious child when asked if he wanted to graduate and go out into a world he wasn't ready for? Of course he agreed, but I knew better. She retorted just as fast, and he narrowed his own eyes on her. Did you? He asked seriously in a low voice, making her words die down in her throat. She looked down at her cup, her bangs shadowing her eyes from him, while she chewed on her lip nervously. I did what I thought was right, she whispered, her voice wavering as if not trusting her words enough herself. To this day she didn't know if stopping him from graduating early had caused her to unknowingly hinder his untimely growth or truly save him from what she had feared would happen that had caused her to do so. And I trusted you enough to agree instantly to it, and I still do. A soft yet firm voice spoke from behind her, a pair of arms wrapping around her shoulders to feel herself being pulled in a hug from behind. She smiled softly, rubbing the cheek now laid over her shoulder, and placed a peck over it, her fears now washing away instantly. Tobirama couldn't help but smile a little smile when he saw his sister-in-law nuzzle her cheek with her adoptive grandson in a tender manner. The bond he shared with her was a special one indeed, that much even he could see, and as much as loath to be proven wrong, he had to agree it had been the right decision on her part. Maybe thrusting him into the shinobi life so early might have been the wrong decision on his part. He had vouched for his promotion personally after all. But he had tried to bring out the diamond that still lay in the rough a little earlier, but alas, it was a moot point for now. Naruto, he called, making the two blink at him in unison and break away from the hush-whispered conversation they were having out of his earshot. Spar if you would, that is if you are not tired enough. He asked blankly, not bothering for an answer, and got up to go in the middle of the clearing. Naruto smirked, picking his blade up, and Mito sighed softly, seeing the tired boy still going for it. Man, she whispered to herself tiredly, but kept her gaze on the two males who were about to have it out now. Tobirama's right hand slid down to his waist, clasping a small hilt and taking it out, making Naruto raise an eyebrow before his eyes widened, realizing what it truly was. Tobirama channeled his chakra through his palm, the hilt's top studded with 3 claw-like protrusions suddenly coming to life when a seemingly glowing chakra blade grew out of it. Raijin no Ken, the legendary sword of the Thunder God. Naruto whispered in amazement at seeing it truly being wielded for the first time. Tobirama smirked, seeing his star-struck eyes, swinging his faithful blade to his side, Naruto's baby blue eyes following its each and every movement. You give my sword such a stare while wielding the Kakashi yourself? Tobirama asked, making Naruto break out of his stupor and glance at his own gleaming black blade and clenched his fist tightly over its dark hilt. Kakashi, Black Lightning. His eyes turned back to Tobirama and he let his muscles drop loose. Tobirama stood on guard when he saw the boy stand simply as if just holding a sword simply by his side. But his trained eyes could see the twitch in his wrists, showing he was getting ready to go on the offense. He decided to humor the clang. On instincts alone did he bring his blade up to block the slash that would have cleaved his head in half. His eyes narrowed on the boy's focused ones as he saw his blonde hair flailing in the wind while he forced down more pressure onto him from above in his jump. The Raijin was flicked to the side, shifting his body weight a little away to throw his opponent off balance. That worked like a charm. He brought his foot up on the disoriented boy's chest, the sole making contact with it before he was launched back like a rag doll. Naruto tumbled back, rolling on the ground before stopping himself and skidding back on his knee, using his sword to halt his skid while still going for a couple of meters, and looked at the trail he had left in amazement. Amazing, he didn't even let out a chakra burst. That was just pure strength. He looked on at the man a bit in admiration and winced. He thanked the man that hadn't put any chakra into his kick. It still felt like he had been slugged like a sledgehammer as it is. Using a shunshin to enhance your first preemptive strike on an opponent you know is stronger than you. Smart, but if your opponent has the experience like I myself do, he can read the small gap that it opens up along the way as well. Tobirama spoke wisely, as if a sensei himself scolding a child for a wrong move, and Naruto stood up, wiping his cheek off the dust speck. My sharingan negates the tunnel vision that comes with the shunshin, he retorted, making Tobirama narrow his eyes. To be able to counter a point at him, admirable, but he hadn't in a cage for so long only to pick on paperwork at his desk. It also leaves you disoriented for a moment. That cannot be negated by you, no matter how you see it. It leaves a small gap, a much too small one, albeit one that can be countered as I showed you just now. He countered back, and Naruto relented while clenching his fist on the blade. He had been tinkering with the small teleportation trick for a while now to have it meld in with combat, but this was a point he knew he hadn't roughed out yet. It's not possible. Tobirama stated, as if reading his mind, and his eyes widened in shock. He saw Tobirama smirk knowingly, and the blonde looked down with a saddened gaze. Naruto, he called out, once more activating his blade to life while the blonde looked up. Don't blink. he said, and Naruto wanted to blink at his strange words, but said nothing when the man vanished in front of his eyes into thin air. His own eyes widened when his hair coming onto his eyes flew back and a small cut appeared on his cheek out of thin air, a trickle of blood trailing down his cheek. He wiped it off with his palm, still feeling the small electricity that coursed within his face at contact, no doubt from the Raigen's blade. His eyes looked back to see Tobirama's back facing him, his blade now held by his side when the yellow blade disappeared into its hilt. He used the shunshin he wanted to say, but was cut off by Tobirama. "Activate your sharingan," he stated in a demanding tone, making Naruto a little peeved, but he nodded when the man turned around with a stern look on his face. Mito watched on from the side, her chin on her fist with a fond smile on her face. Now maybe her apprentice could see what she had been drilling into his head for weeks, that he was doing something that couldn't be done. Naruto did as he was asked to, his eyes changing their color from an adorable blue to the deadly crimson in a flicker of a second, while 3 tomos spun in his eyes in a slow predatory way. Once more Tobirama disappeared right in front of his very eyes, another nick appearing on his opposite cheek to leave a small trickle of blood trail down his cheek. He wiped it off and looked at his bloodied palm in disbelief. "It's impossible, there's just no way. I've seen all shunshins, even elemental ones. None of them is so fast as to evade the sharingan," he whispered to himself in a lost voice, trying to make sense when Tobirama cut his thoughts in half. "It isn't a shunshin, child, this is the Hiraishin. What you're trying to attempt is the same thing I attempted myself when I was young. To try and incorporate the simple body flicker into seamless combat. It may be used for a single use, but the limitations I showed you just now were enough to render it completely useless," he explained, but Naruto could see that there was no disorientation on the man's slightly wrinkled face. The teleportation was almost instantaneous too, as if he really was moving at speeds even his eyes couldn't follow. "The Hiraishin no Jutsu," Mito's voice rang through the clearing calmly, her palms now on her lap, while she looked at him with a calm smile. "Devised by Tobirama himself is what you're after, Naruto. It isn't a simple D-rank technique that is used to go here and there, that is instantaneous teleportation through the means of a space-time seal that allows said user to teleport near the beacon in a split second," she explained with a snap of her fingers, making his eyes widen in surprise and realization. This was the branch he wanted to specialize his Fuinjutsu in, after Mito had told him to pick one to pursue further onto the advanced sealing techniques, like she had done for barrier and restraining seals herself. But still. "You said to a seal, but there is no seal," he used. "How did he do it just now then?" Naruto asked, the point bugging him, and Mito giggled in her hand while Tobirama smirked, pointing to his shoulder. Naruto looked onto it, and sure enough a small sealing formula was over it. But when? He remembered him patting his shoulder when he had asked him to spar in the first place, and he realized when he had placed it and pumped the side of his fist in his palm with a sage-like nod. "You can mark anything you touch?" he asked curiously, making Tobirama quite surprised at his acute deduction and nodded his affirmative at the boy. His deduction skills were quite impressive, he noted, and glanced at Mito, who had a fond smile on her lips, and now he knew why he had been called here today by her so suddenly for a meeting. "I see," he sighed, getting a sly smile from the Uzumaki heiress, and he knew he was defeated now. Naruto glanced between the two with a lost look before Mito waved her hand dismissively. Now let's continue the Sparna, I want to judge my apprentice's growth. So get on it," she admonished the two playfully with a clap, and both got into it. Their blades met in sparks in a moment, slashing at each other with the precision of true swordsmen. It went on for a while before Naruto was seemingly outwitted each time and tossed around like a rag doll by the ever-stoic Kage. "Alright, I think that's enough," he said finally, taking a deep breath after their hour-long session, and looked on at the blonde sprawled on the ground like a bedsheet with a smirk. He wasn't old, he was merely past his prime, he told himself with a nod, and went inside for a wet towel while Naruto puffed like a steam engine, completely out of breath. "And I want that jutsu," he puffed out in between his heavy breaths, making Tobirama skip a step when he stepped on the porch, and Mito giggled with a nod. "Hi, I'll get you a scroll for its basics, but each seal is different, so you'll have to do it from scratch. I'll let you have it as a pet project of sorts," she told him with a giggle, glancing at the twitching Tobirama, who knew where the scroll would come from and sighed in defeat, walking in while shaking his head. He just couldn't win with her no matter what he did. "Absolutely no respect, I tell you," he muttered to himself in annoyance at being pulled by his ear to suit her needs as she pleased. Mito though saw her disciple sit up with a faraway look in his eyes while he was staring intently at his blade. "What's the matter, Naru-chan?" she asked him curiously, not being able to read the boy who merely let out a small sigh. "Why won't you let me use my sharingan against you, Ba-chan?" he asked her, and she stiffened for a moment but relaxed with a little smile on her face. "And don't tell me so I don't become over-reliant on it, using it once just to see how far I've come is different. You avoid this topic each time I bring it up, if you don't trust me enough just say it clearly." At least don't make me feel stupid, he whispered to himself, making her heart twist. She hadn't realized what her denial to his questions might be making him got through, but still there were things he wasn't quite ready for just yet. It is for your own safety, Naruto, she spoke seriously, making his eyes snap at her in full focus. That is all I'll say for now, you aren't ready for the answer to this question yet. You still have much to learn and so much more to explore. I promise you I'll tell you when I deem you ready, so I trust me, alright? She asked him softly, making him smile and nod. At least she had been honest enough with him. Alright, I trust you, Bachan, and thank you for being honest with me. He spoke calmly and got you to get a shower and return home when footsteps were heard coming straight to the two. Hey, see who I brought? The happy voice of Tsunade rang through their ears, and sure enough she had a small white blanketed bundle in her arms. Abababa, a small gurgled voice came from the bundle, making Mito squeal and pull the thing in her own arms. Oh, there's my baby, she cooed, and Naruto heard some small giggles from the blanket. He peered in, making the small 3-year-old turn his eyes at her and giggle. Nana nana, he babbled on, getting a giggle from Mito, while the little one clapped happily. She held it to her apprentice, who looked on with a confused gaze. Though on hold him, she motioned for him to take it when he shook his head and took a step back. No, I shouldn't, what if I drop him? He spoke nervously, making Mito smile. Don't be such a child, he loves you so much. See, she held the boy to face him, who had a thumb in his toothy mouth and looking at him with his wide brown eyes. A moment later he opened his arms for Naruto, and the blonde took a step closer and put his own palms on his waist to pull him closer. Mito let her little grandson go, seeing Naruto hold him so gently as if he were a glass doll, and saw his mystified expression, while he poked the little infant's cute cheeks gently with his finger to make him giggle. Mito just watched the scene in fascination, while Tobirama came back with a towel and rose an eyebrow, seeing Naruto having his grandnephew in his arms. He was surprised, never did Naruto agree before to hold him out of fright, and they hadn't pushed him, but looks like Mito was onto her antics again. Hey, he whispered, seeing the small full of life child yawn and curl up in his arms to sleep. Naruto put him close in his neck, cradling him as if the child were fragile, and closed his eyes with a smile. Why hadn't he done this before? Hey, stop hugging him, MMPH. Tsunade words became muffled when Mito put her hand over her lips and she shushed him with a finger over her own lips. Tsunade stood confused, then realized her brother had fallen asleep in her friend's arms, and she pouted. He doesn't ever fall asleep in my arms, always playing or pulling my hair, she sulked, making her grandmother laugh softly. She looked on at Naruto, who was gazing at the asleep infant in his arms, as if he were Kami's gift to man, which he really was. Naruto, let me put him into his crib, she called out in a whisper, and he broke out of his trance and nodded, handing her the bundle gently. Omen, he whispered, and she shook her head, taking the asleep child, and walked in to put him to sleep. Hey Naruto, let's play something or have a shuriken competition. This time I'm so beating you, Tsunade chirped up, getting a poke on her forehead from Naruto, who gave her a tired smile. Sorry, I'm too tired, Suna, some other time, he spoke tiredly, the exhaustion finally catching up to him, and he walked away with his hands dug in his pockets. She frowned, rubbing her forehead to see his back, walking away, and turned around with a grin to see her granduncle having flashed away to his office, and the whole area lay silent with an imaginary breeze, making her slump her shoulders. Come on, they're so boring, she sulked and went inside to see her little brother, who was sleeping, and pass her time with her grandmother today. Hokage office. Tobirama's desk lay jumbled with piles upon piles of the passing graduates this year. He had yet to assign them to teams. His eyes gazed upon one file, he opened it up to read the name of the prospective student Hiruzen his own pupil had requested for. Some kid named Orochimaru, apparently a war orphan from the previous war. According to Hiruzen, a once-in-a-century prodigy that he wanted to take on as a student himself. He said he would make quite a difference in his forces after he was done training him, he would see it to believe it, he mused, and kept it aside to assign the dead last of that batch along with him to balance the two out, some kid named Jiraiya. Building up the teams. A voice spoke by his side, making him glance up before resuming on his work with a curt nod. Indeed. He spoke calmly, to look for the third member for their team. Why call me then? I have work to do, you know, the voice drawled out tiredly, making him shake his head. You're going to be assigned a team this year. He stated bluntly, making the man cough up on his puff of cigar. Say what? He wheezed out in coughs, making Tobirama glance up and pushed two files to him that he caught deftly and opened them up. Ah, these two, he said, reading the names of the top 2 graduates of the first batch. He himself had kept an eye on them over time, and he presently had no qualms with them being stuck to him. Maybe he could toughen them up nicely and show his son up while he was at it. What about the third one? He asked, snapping the files shut, making Tobirama smirk at his lack of denial. After years of pestering, the man had finally given in to taking on a team. He hummed himself, rummaging through files when Sasuke spoke up. Why not give me Tsunade? he asked, making Tobirama look up and raise an eyebrow. What? The three are friends, so no problems with teamwork there, and they'll work well together, I'll make sure of it. He drawled out, making Tobirama shake his head. The team would be too unbalanced then. I am placing her on Hiruzen's squad, since no other promising student comes from the second batch of graduates to fill up his third placement. And besides, I have just the student I would like for you to train, he said, finally getting a file that made Sasuke raise an eyebrow and lean forward in his couch out of curiosity. Oh? And who might that be? He asked, intently curious as to who he had in mind, and Tobirama's smirk told him he had something planned in that devious mind of his. The boy has failed 2 times already. Didn't pass this year too, I passed him through my personal say in the matter. The boy is ready, he needs a sensei to guide him through his condition and a pair of comrades he could place his faith on. He'll do quite nicely on your squad, he drawled out, making Sasuke even more curious. Failed twice you say, yet you passed him personally. What's this condition and why did he fail twice? He asked, the curiosity now too much for him, and Tobirama smirked. You see, I recently did a personal see-through on his case. The boy, due to his condition, attended the academy during the day, while training too hard at night to make up for his flaws, leaving him so winded he would sleep through the classes. Either he'll stay a genin for the rest of his life, or he'll become an integral part of my forces if you help him pull through. He explained, and Sasuke could feel the boy was determined to be a shinobi just from his words, and nodded, trusting the man enough with this and himself, wanting to make the boy into what he might be molded into one day. Alright, I'll take him. He spoke confidently, and Tobirama handed him the third file to study it thoroughly, while he flickered out in a swirl of flames, and Tobirama got back into his job. Time skip 1 week later. The Nohin Ninja Academy. All the graduating students from all batches sat in the classroom to await themselves being assigned to their new squads and be off for a new phase of their lives. I wish we could all be together, Tsunade drawled out lazily, lying on the desk in a half-asleep state. Yeah, me too, it would be awesome, right? Tsukumo said, his own feet placed on the table with his arms crossed by his head. Whoever gets assigned wherever, we'll still be friends no matter what. The soft voice of Naruto spoke, making his 2 friends smirk and nod at their friend confidently. The door to the class slid open, causing everyone to hush up and look forward to their own squads being called out. The instructor stood on his stand, looking at them all with a proud smile. All your efforts over the past few years come to fruition today. From today on, you are all genin or first level ninjas. You will all be assigned into squads of 3 under an elite jounin who will instruct you until you get yourself promoted to chunin and start taking on missions with higher ranks while leading your own teams. The trials ahead will be difficult, but I'm sure all of you will do just fine. Now I'll be going through the squad names for this year, so please hear it the first time and don't ask me to repeat them. Now Squad 1, his voice drawled out several teams until he reached Squad 6. Now for Squad 6, under the leadership of Jounin Hiruzen Sarutobi will be Tsunade Senju, he said, and the blonde Kunoichi perked up hearing her name. Jiraiya and Orochimaru. He said, and a dark cloud loomed over her head at not being with either of her friends. She was pulled into a one-armed hug by her best friend and leaned on his shoulder sadly. It's okay, I'm sure your new teammates will be great, he whispered reassuringly when a loud voice drawled out the attention of everyone. Sensei, why does an incredible shinobi like me have to be stuck with a flat-chested board like her? Don't you have any other beautiful kunoichis for my squad? The voice shouted, making Naruto glance at the white-haired boy with 2 red lines on his cheek, and he felt a dark aura surround Tsunade and laughed nervously when he saw her glare at him. Now, he seems fine. Just a bit. Well, he trailed off, looking at Tsukumo for help, who looked away and whistled innocently. No help from him in this. You damned pervert, who are you calling flat-chested? I'm just 13 for Kami's sake, Tsunade shouted angrily, her face flushed in her legendary temper, making the instructor sigh tiredly. Yeah, keep telling yourself that, plyboard. He said snidely, making her bristle in anger and put her foot on the table, rolling up her sleeves to sock him in the face before the teacher cut their rants out. Alright, that's enough, Jiraiya. The teams were set up by the Hokage himself, and if you have any problem you take it up with him, he said, making the boy purse his lips and huff. Plus, Tsunade was the top kunoichi in her batch while you were the worst in yours. He merely put you together to balance you out. He explained wisely, making the boy turn embarrassed when the whole class laughed at his expense, and Tsunade stuck her tongue out, proudly getting a laugh from Tsunade. Squad 7, under the leadership of Sasuke Sarutobi, will be Naruto Uchiha, he stated flatly, making said boy perk up along with his 2 companions. Tsukumo Hadaki spoke, making the 2 boys grin and clap their hands in a high five, while Tsunade had a scowl on her face. And might die. He finished, making the 2 boys blink and look around for their third teammate. They kept their eyes peeled around before turning back to see a dazzling smile with a literal sparkle in his teeth, along with a nice guy pose boy, giving them a thumbs up. Gosh, I might die, my youthful teammates. Let's bask in the springtime of youth together and fan our eternal flames of youth to the brightest they can. He exclaimed proudly, and Naruto and Sakuma were utterly and pathetically speechless. They couldn't believe this green monstrosity was their teammate when Naruto felt himself being hugged from the side. You and him are going to get along just fine, I'm sure. Tsunade giggled and Naruto let out a soft sigh. Sakuma face-palmed loudly when the teacher began going through the rest of his list and shook his head. Great, another eccentric friend in place of Tsunade, he whispered, making said girl's eye twitch. Boy. I take offense to that. I am nothing like that. She pointed a finger to the brilliantly smiling boy, making the two boys sigh. Yeah, you keep telling yourself that, both said in unison, getting bonks on their heads from the aggravated Kunoichi. The teacher walked out, leaving the children to sort themselves out and wait for their senseis to go along with them. Naruto saw 3 new people coming to them, 2 of them being their newly identified teammates, while the third had yellow slitted eyes, along with a pale complexion and long black hair. He wore a white kimono with fishnet armor underneath, along with the required holsters strapped on him. Gosh, I might die. It's a pleasure to meet you, my friend. The eccentric boy in a green spandex suit explained, making Naruto smile, looking at the outstretched hand, and shook it with a smile. I'm Naruto Uchiha, and this, he pointed his thumb to the silver-haired boy who waved simply with a smile. Is Sakuma Haddock, I hope we can be friends and become a good team. Naruto spoke politely, getting yet another dazzling smile from the boy who couldn't help but feel happy to find such friendly teammates. Naruto's eyes turned to the only boy he didn't recognize or know as of yet, and he saw him scrutinizing him as if he was sizing him up. It made him feel quite nervous to feel such an intense stare directly onto him. Can I help you? He asked, only to make the staring die down, and the boy merely shook his head and smiled. I'm sorry, my name is Orochimaru. Nice to meet you. He said with an offer for a handshake that Naruto took quite happily. He saw Tsunade in another heated debate with her other teammate and pulled her by her arm with a sigh. Go on, introduce yourself, he scolded her like a child, getting a pout from the girl who nodded and introduced herself to her new friends. Their chatting was broken off when they were called out from up front. Alright, Team 6 and Team 7, meet us at the back of Training Ground 42 in 10 minutes. The man with a cigar in his mouth spoke before the 2 of their new senseis disappeared in a swirl of flames. Sakuma looked at Naruto with a confused look, the blonde doing the same with him. Isn't that place like 40 minutes away? The silver-haired boy finally asked, getting a nod from Naruto. Gosh, then my youthful friends, let's hurry up. Their overcharged teammate exclaimed and ran out, pulling the 2 behind him by their hands at blazing speeds. Naruto and Sakuma struggled to keep up with the boy, who was leaving a dust trail behind him, while he ran with them in his iron grip. The 2 couldn't even breathe to get enough mind to pump chakra to their legs and ran solely on the strength of their muscles with their new overcharged teammate. Training Ground 42. Squad 7 was seemingly the first to arrive, and the 2 Sarutobi's couldn't help but raise an eyebrow to the trio. Dai was not even winded and smiling to himself at reaching the location in under 8 minutes, while the boys behind him were puffing out a little heavy breaths. Nothing too much, but Sasuke knew they had ran solely on their muscles and smirked. Squad 7, his commanding voice called them, making them stiffen and stand at attention to their new Jounin sensei. My name is Sasuke Sarutobi, and I will be your Jounin sensei for the coming future. Are there any questions someone would like to ask before we move on to introductions? He asked them in his seriously lazy voice, getting a raised hand from the boy with seemingly large eyebrows. He nodded and motioned for him to go on. Sensei, I didn't graduate from the academy except for the Taijutsu portion. Well, his voice trailed off in embarrassment, leaving 2 surprised teammates and a smiling Sarutobi. You were personally promoted and assigned to me by the Nidaime himself. So no need to worry about that. Now as for introductions, I'll start with myself to set an example. He spoke with puff of his cigar and hopped onto a wooden stump and crossed his leg over his knee, taking out his cigar in his fingers to speak up. As you already know, my name is Sasuke Sarutobi from the Sarutobi clan. I'm an elite Jounin of this village and current clan head of the Sarutobi clan. My hobbies are seeing new places or interesting people, or smoking different kinds of cigars, he said, dropping some ash to make his point, and resumed. I do not like traitors, seafood, or people that would rather waste their time than do something useful. As for my dreams, well, let's just say I want you all to become fine shinobi for now. He said, and all the 3 nodded in unison, getting a small smirk on his lips at seeing his new subordinates who were now sitting cross-legged. Sakuma raised his hand and Sasuke motioned for him to go on. Are you 2 related by any chance? He asked and got a nod from Hiruzen this time, who smiled seeing his sharp eyes. Yes, this here is my father, young man. He spoke warmly, making Sakuma nod, and Sasuke pointed at Dai. Let's start with you, go on, he spoke calmly, getting a nod from the boy. Gosh, my name is Might Dai and I belong to a simple civilian family. I have already failed twice at the academy, he spoke honestly in his booming voice, once more surprising his two teammates at his blunt honest answer. I like training and fanning the fires of my youth, he boomed, making Naruto and Sakura sweat drop. I dislike wasting my time sitting around and unyouthful people cue another and larger sweat drop. And my dream is to be the greatest Taijutsu master in the elemental nations and make everyone respect and know me for it. This time he made the two boys by his side smile and look at him in admiration. It was a fine goal in their eyes. Very nicely put, Dai, Sasuke said, making the boy a little sheepish, and moved his eyes to Naruto and nodded as affirmative for him to go on. My name is Naruto Uchiha and I'm from the Uchiha clan. I like training, spending time with my friends or exploring new places, especially nature-heavy ones, he spoke, making the two Sarudaba smile at his innocent likes. I dislike traitors too, and anyone who wishes to harm the village or my friends and family. My dream is to have my face engraved up there, he pointed to the Hokage mountain and got a nod from Sasuke, who already knew of this, but Hiruzen was surprised at an Uchiha aiming for that and not for respect amongst his clanmates, but stood silently. Sasuke nodded and rose an eyebrow at seeing Hiruzen's team coming in 5 minutes late and were puffing as if they had run around the village to get here. Gomen-sensei, we had to take a reroute when Jiraiya Baka got into some trouble with a lady. Tsunade puffed, making Hiruzen sweat drop at her blunt answer and sighed but nodded. Alright, then go and run 5 rounds around the training grounds as punishment. He spoke calmly, making them look up surprised before glaring at the sheepishly smiling Jiraiya and started running again. Sasuke motioned for his final genin to introduce himself. My name is Akumo Haddock and I'm from the Haddock clan. I like training, especially in Kenjutsu, and spending time with my friends and family too. I dislike those who would try and harm my friends or the village, I guess. My dream is to make my clan proud and to make a good right hand when Naruto becomes Hokage. He spoke, surprising the Sarudabas to their cores. The way he had said it, it was almost as if he completely believed it would come true, and the two friends bumped the side of their fists with a grin. Alright, then let's head over to the latter part of the training ground so I can test your capabilities as a genin and see if you are worthy enough or not. He spoke, hopping down and motioning for them to follow him. The three boys followed their new senseis, while Hiruzen started with the team introductions and his own test as well. Sasuke turned around and looked at the three with a critical eye, and the genin took this time to get a closer look at their new sensei. The man wore on a simple yet intimidating brown shirt with black pants and black shinobi sandals. The man had a faceplate like that of Tobirama with the leaf insignia engraved on it and had brown hair as well as narrow onyx eyes with skin that showed little of his true age. He crossed his arms and let out a puff of smoke from his mouth. Usually a Jounin sensei is supposed to test his new team to see if they will truly become genin or be sent back to the academy. He spoke, shocking the three who had wide eyes hearing this. That's why we don't have headbands yet, Naruto spoke in realization and got a nod from Sasuke when he continued on. It is usually a team to test a team's teamwork and spirit of union to work together in a hidden meaning sort of test, he spoke and took out 3 headbands and threw them to each of them, who caught them with a surprised look on their faces. But I believe teamwork is built by working together in tandem, so be ready to be taught the true spirit that has made this village's foundation stand strong, he spoke seriously, getting small nods from his genin and nodded back. For now you 3 are genin, but if at any point I deem you to be unworthy, be ready to be sent back to the academy for another year. He spoke as if reading the weather, and the 3 gave him nervous nods. The man was quite intimidating without even trying. Alright, now listen to the first task I am assigning you seriously, I won't repeat, so don't ask me if you miss something. Your first mission from me is to cover yourself in stealth and go to the part we just left, where Hiruzen's new genin team is no doubt taking their test to graduate. He spoke and got small nods of affirmative from the 3 who fastened their headbands, Sakumo and Naruto, on their forehead, while Dai tied it on his waist for comfort, and each gave them a squeezing nod with a smile, feeling pride in themselves at being called true shinobis now. Your primary objective is to hide yourself under stealth and stay hidden from Hiruzen's 3 genin and observe them until they complete their task, which is to get 2 bells tied on Hiruzen's waist. If they do manage to obtain them, then retrieve them from the 2 who do have them and bring them to me, yet if they do not, record the observations you make during the testing they go through and write it all down in as detailed a manner as possible, along with what you learned from them in every which way. There is only one intel I wish to read, which is of utmost importance that you'll learn from them, and failure to do so will result in me stripping you 3 of your headbands, he said, and their eyes widened, though the 3 said nothing and just gulped nervously, seeing him, leaving no room for arguments, and nodded hesitantly. Dismissed. He spoke commandingly and the 3 jumped into the trees while Sasuke smirked and lit up a new cigar. Now let's see their worth in a real simulation test, he thought, and decided to let it play out for a while. The 3 scattered by, disappearing into the trees, and rushed in closer to the clearing where Hiruzen had just finished explaining the bell test to his team. Alright, how do we do this, Akumo? Naruto whispered to his friend while the three sat crouched on a tree branch with serious looks on their faces. Naruto knew when it came to planning and predetermined strategies, there was no one better than him. We split the work up in 3 parts, he spoke and got nods from them. First of all, Dai, what can you do? I know of Naruto's abilities but nothing about you. He asked the boy who nodded, knowing how true it was. I'm good at throwing shurikens and kunes, and my taijutsu is pretty good, the eccentric boy said, getting 2 nods from his teammates who looked at him expectantly for more. And? Sakumo asked and got a shameful shake of head from the boy who looked down, expecting some insult from the 2 geniuses on his team. No ninjutsu or jinjutsu at all, Dai? Sakumo asked in disbelief, getting a small nod from the boy who wouldn't meet their eyes out of shame, making Sakumo shocked that the Hokage had promoted him with just about nothing except pure taijutsu on him. Dai felt a hand clasp his shoulder and saw Naruto's baby blue eyes look at him a bit concerned. Why is that, Dai? He asked a boy who looked like someone had sapped all his reserved energy in a split second. I have a medical condition that doesn't allow me to do so. My chakra coils are very small, so I cannot perform any chakra-based techniques except kawarimi, since it takes so little chakra that it doesn't strain them too much, he explained, and Naruto nodded. That why you want to be a taijutsu master, right? He asked and got a nod from the boy, a lone tear dropping down his chin. I want to be respected among shinobi like everyone else, even if I can't use any ninjutsu or jinjutsu. I'll prove that I can be just as fine a shinobi with taijutsu alone. He stopped when another hand clasped his shoulder and saw the 2 smiling teammates of his shaking his head. Don't worry about it, it's fine. This is just a small handicap and we'll cover it. Naruto and me will cover your weaknesses, so you just focus on your strengths, alright? He spoke, getting a nod from Naruto. Yeah, Sakumo's kenjutsu skills are awesome and my ninjutsu and jinjutsu are great. With you as our personal taijutsu specialist, we'll rear past anything. He said confidently, giving him his own personal thumbs up, making the eccentric boys turn white in surprise. Eyes, he whispered, seeing their honest eyes, his eyes breaking out with twin streams of anime tears. Such youth. He exclaimed and caught the 2 in a bone-crushing hug, literally snapping noises were heard in their ears and both squirmed for air. Air, Sakumo rasped out, and Dai let go with a sheepish smile and smiled brightly. Yosh, then my youthful friend, how shall we do this? The youthful boy asked in a small whisper, making their eyes turn serious. Alright, this is how we do this, Akumo whispered, and the 2 leaned in to hear their friend out and nodded, confirming his plans. But Hiruzen. Hiruzen saw his white-haired genin jumping out in front of him with a proud pat of his chest. You're going down, sensei. The boy exclaimed loudly, making Hiruzen sigh and pinched the bridge of his nose when the boy charged head-on. He engaged the boy in taijutsu as lightly as he could for the brawling boy, with seemingly all taijutsu styles being cramped into one to make a makeshift style he used. He knocked off their little bout by kicking the boy in his gut and throwing him back. Jiraiya coughed and got up, looking around only to see his sensei gone and a small bell lying where he once stood, making the boy grin widely. All the luck in the world is for me, sensei dropped this, how stupid of him, he chuckled proudly and rubbed his palms, walking closer to the bell. A second later he triggered a trap and was hanging down by his ankle and yelling curses at his sensei, who picked his bell up with a tired sigh. Jiraiya, if the bait is too obvious and easy then don't fall for it, he lectured the boy, who crossed his arms and huffed while waving around like a pendulum by his ankle. In the bushes. Is that guy for real? Sakumo asked in disbelief and got a nod from Naruto at seeing the idiocy of Jiraiya in front of him. How could someone fall for something so? Yosh, such a clever trap, Dai whispered, making the 2 face fault behind him. They caught his shoulder when he tried to go outside and pulled him back roughly. Aren't we supposed to get the bell? It's right, he spoke when Sakumo clasped a hand over his mouth and all 3 looked up to see Hiruzen standing above their hiding position, his eyes waiting for Jiraiya to fall for it. They let the boy go and sighed in relief when he went ahead. Our mission is to get the bell after they retrieve it from their sensei. Just getting a bell is pointless, Dai, Naruto explained, and the boy nodded in realization at his sensei's hidden words. Then what do we do? He whispered to his teammates, who smirked in unison. A ninja waits until the time is right, when the enemy sleeps and drops his guard, Sakumo started. When his weapons lie forgotten in the stillness of the night, Naruto continued, and Dai smirked himself. That is the moment for a ninja to strike. The green boy completed and the 3 hid themselves completely in the bushes. Unaware of a smiling man, puffing out with a proud smile adorning his lips. But Tsunade and Orochimaru. The rest of the 2 genins of Squad 6 sat in their own respective hiding places, seeing their 3rd teammate being demolished and tied to a stump by their sensei as punishment. Tsunade. A voice whispered, startling the girl, who looked back to see her sensible teammate crouching by her side. Let's join forces. Jiraiya is out for the count and there are 2 bells, 1 for each of us. With the two of us combined, it will be easy to get a bell from sensei, he whispered, getting a nod from the girl who agreed with his plan of action. She would have included Jiraiya Baka had he not gotten himself tied up already. Even after resenting him so much, he was still her teammate. Both started working on a new plan for themselves, having no idea what lay ahead for them in the shadows. And that marks the end of the first part of the story. If you guys made it this far and want more contents like this, comment down below to let me know. Thanks for sticking out till the end. I would gladly appreciate every likes, comments and subscribes I could get on this series. It only takes a minute, and best of all, you can show your support for absolutely no cost. See you in the next one.